gather round. Controllers clicking, that's the sound. Using games to break it down. From the boroughs to the global town. Welcome to the Game Lounge. Welcome to the Game Lounge, where the players hang and the beats pound. Golden Crust and CJ in the mix, dropping heat hotter than a joystick fix. Mr. Roll with Ash Ketchum, the OG squad. Now CJ brings the fire, no facade. Word game sharper than a ninja's blade. Every Sunday we got the arcade made. From Twitch to the globe we taking flight. Brooklyn roots, though we shine worldwide. Press start if you're ready to vibe. The Game Lounge crew keeping it live. Gather round, don't hit pause. For the gamers we the cause. Cheat codes, now we play raw. Gather round, don't hit pause. For the gamers we the cause. Cheat codes, now we play raw. Gather round, don't hit pause. For the gamers we the cause. Cheat codes, now we play raw. Gather round, don't to the Game Lounge. Welcome to the Game Lounge. To the Game Lounge. Welcome to the Game Lounge. To the Game Lounge. Welcome to the Game Lounge. To the Game Yo, the Sunday night we hit the screen. Golden Crust with the gaming king. CJ the DJ spinning like a dream. Brooklyn vibes to the world of themes. Pixel warriors gather round. Controllers clicking, that's the sound. Using games to break it down. From the boroughs to the global town. Welcome to the Game Lounge. Welcome to the Game Lounge, where the players hang and the beats pound. Golden Crust and CJ in the mix, dropping heat hotter than a joystick fix. Mr. Roll with Ash Ketchum, the OG squad. Now CJ brings the fire, no facade. Word game sharper than a ninja's blade. Every Sunday we got the arcade made. From Twitch to the globe we taking flight. Brooklyn roots, though we shine worldwide. Press start if you're ready to vibe. The Game Lounge crew keeping it live. Gather round, don't hit pause. For the gamers we the cause. Cheat codes, now we play raw. Gather round, don't hit pause. For the gamers we the cause. Cheat codes, now we play raw. Gather round, don't hit pause. For the gamers we the cause. Cheat codes, now we play raw. Gather round, don't to the Sunday night we hit the screen. Golden Crush, through the gaming king. CJ the DJ spinning like a dream. Brooklyn vibes to the world of themes. Pixel warriors gather round. Controllers clicking, that's the sound. Using games to break it down. From the boroughs to the global town. Welcome to the Game Lounge. Welcome to the Game Lounge, where the players hang and the beats pound. Golden Crust and CJ in the mix, dropping heat hotter than a joystick fix. Used to roll with Ash Ketchum, the OG squad. Now CJ brings the fire, no facade. Word game sharper than a ninja's blade. Every Sunday we got the arcade made. From Twitch to the globe we taking flight. Brooklyn roots, though we shine worldwide. Press start if you're ready to vibe. The Game Lounge crew keeping it live. Gather round, don't hit pause. For the gamers we the cause. Cheat codes, now we play raw. Gather round, don't hit pause. For the gamers we the cause. Cheat codes, now we play raw. Gather round, don't hit pause. For the gamers we the cause. Cheat codes, now we play raw. Gather round, go to the Game Lounge. Welcome to the Game Lounge. The Game Lounge. Welcome to the Game Lounge. The Game Lounge. Welcome to the Game Lounge. The Game The Sunday night we hit the screen. Golden Crush, through the gaming king. CJ the DJ spinning like a dream. Brooklyn vibes to the world of themes. Pixel warriors gather round. Controllers clicking, that's the sound. Using games to break it down. From the boroughs to the global town. Welcome to the Game Lounge. Welcome to the Game Lounge, where the players hang and the beats pound. Golden Crust and CJ in the mix, dropping heat hotter than a joystick fix. Used to roll with Ash Ketchum, the OG squad. Now CJ brings the fire, no facade. Word game sharper than a ninja's blade. Every Sunday we got the arcade made. From Twitch to the globe we taking flight. Brooklyn roots, though we shine worldwide. Press start if you're ready to vibe. The Game Lounge crew keeping it live. Gather round, don't hit pause. For the gamers we the cause. Cheat codes, now we play raw. Gather round, don't hit pause. For the gamers we the cause. Cheat codes, now we play raw. Gather round, don't hit pause. For the gamers we the cause. Cheat codes, now we play raw. Gather round, go to the
up, y'all? What is up? What is up? Welcome back to the Game Lounge. I am the co-host, CJ the DJ, and we got a full goddamn house tonight. You know there's somebody sitting in the back, and you know there's some people that's sitting in the front. So, Mr. 200, how you doing back there?
I'm doing okay.
All right.
Let's
Let's go. So, of course, you know, Mr. 200 back there is the host of the Game Lounge. I am the co-host, like I said, TJ the DJ, and today is Melanated Monet's baby shower.
What's going on, chat?
So, with it being a baby shower, we wanted to get in the swing of things of having our children here. So we brought our kids to be a part of the festivities today. So this is a kid-friendly show. It is not going to be all of the crazy stuff that, you know, we always get into. That goes double for you, Broke Nation back here.
Right.
That goes double for Broke Nation back here. But we also got our guy.
Introduced to.
But yeah, we also got our guy Legendary in the building.
You already know.
Because he popped in here. Cousin Ash is in the building too. Poke your head in, Ash.
What's up, y'all?
Yes,
Y'all
indeed.
man.
Yes, indeed. But as for my little ones here,
Introduce yourself. You are.
this is...
Say your name, baby.
You are.
Nicole.
Okay. And this is.
And...
ISIS Bogwave.
Why
Oh,
you say?
Wait.
You just said your first name. You just said Mariah. This girl said her whole. She said her whole.
She panicked. What happened?
We're gonna try it again.
Wait, we talked about this in the car.
Bro had a
We
whole
gonna do it one more time.
Everything we
We
talked
gonna
about.
do it one more time.
Okay.
Take two.
Okay, wait a minute, Chad. We be right back. We talked about this in the car.
So this is
Nicole.
and this is
The Wire.
All right, there we go. Yeah.
right.
And also Broke Nation, you know the YN of the show, and Mrs. Broke is in the building as well. So, it's baby shower for Melanated Monet.
Yes.
The boy is coming. CJ Kozavius. CJ Kozavius Jr. the third. Shout out to my guy
And I have
Koza for
asked
coming
this
out with the
question
name drop a bomb for Koza.
Who the hell is Kozavius the first and the second?
Right.
That part.
Is the third.
Right.
That part.
Bro, he's the third.
We got to figure it out. We have to figure it out. Koza, we have to figure out who's Kozavius the first and second. Because I don't know. I know you, but I don't know them. So, anywho, Mr. 200, you got
Yes,
some
sir.
things you want to talk about before we get in the swing of
I just
things?
want to welcome everybody in on our queen's bringing in my nephew in on the world. The blessings is real,
Yes, indeed.
and we appreciate everybody for popping in.
Yes, indeed.
That's it. I'm done. I'm back here chilling with the unks
Uh-huh.
and the auntie. It's still Women's Month.
Yeah. And then it's still International Women's History Month too. So
Appreciate you.
yes, indeed.
We appreciate you.
A random reaper.
Oh yes, Reaper. Yeah, you gotta fix that.
Yeah, I'm pulling that.
It's the point.
They've been yelling at me for weeks.
Yeah. I fixed that right there. Yeah, I fixed it.
Play video game shit on the side.
Yeah. Somebody else hit the follow button. Let me see.
Yeah.
if this fits.
Somebody else. Let's test it out.
Let's test it out, right?
Somebody unfollow.
Just to make sure everything is in the copacetic, So they won't get on your nerves no more when you... there we go. My man. There we go. All right, so BK Dragons in the building. Yeah, drop a bomb
What's
for
up,
BK.
BK Dragon?
Drop a bomb for Reaper as well for popping in. Follow. Drop a bomb for Galaxy Storm. Drop a bomb for Cozy. Cozy is that's family. That's the behind the scenes work of everything.
Yup.
All of this stuff.
That's a whole nother unk right there.
That's a whole nother one. That's why it's Kozavius
Yeah.
Jr. the third.
On my way.
On
Drop
my
a-
way. Yes, sir.
OG Wiz, drop a bump for OG Wiz too, my man.
Yo,
OG
Wiz, what up?
What's up, Wiz? What's going on?
And Herbert.
Yeah, we got to get Wiz back out. He OG Wiz. Herbert's OG Wiz.
Wow.
We gotta get you back on the game lounge, OG Wiz, when you get some free time. CEO Billy too. CEO Billy, what up, Billy? Club 6 in the building.
Yo, Club 6, what up?
Yo. All right, so
Somebody said something at the bottom.
somebody said something at the bottom. Let's see what they said.
Yeah, beat Herbert.
He said OG Wiz in the building had to
that's
jump
what
on
he
for a
said.
few, moving to Maryland on April 4th. But no matter where I go, I'm still in Brooklyn. Appreciate you, Herb. Appreciate you. The craziest thing is April 4th is our in real life baby shower. So clap it up for that. Clap it up for that. So Galaxy Storm, yes indeed, it is PG-13 celebration. Yes.
Relax.
Once again, that goes double for you, Uncle Broke.
Question.
I don't know why they pointing at me.
What did y'all want? Did y'all want a boy, a girl?
Boy.
A boy.
Okay, I wanted a boy.
It's two of them right there. I don't need no more of them. I don't need no more of these two right here. They already two handfuls.
Another girl, I'm pretty sure you can go.
Nicole said, excuse me.
I don't need no more girls. I need a boy.
Excuse me.
Well, you're excused, okay? She's excused, chat. She's
So
excused.
happy birthday.
Whose birthday is it? Whose birthday?
A random Reaper. He turned 14 today.
Oh,
Yeah,
Reaper. Drop a bomb for Reaper for the birthday.
Oh, not a girl. It's a boy.
Drop a bomb for
Another
Reaper.
girl.
No, Reaper. Not another girl. No.
I already got information.
Oh, it's not his
about
birthday.
that.
No.
He
The,
said it's not his
the
birthday.
big balloon in the blue back right there with this part
Can't
right
really see
here.
it.
Oh, you can't see nothing there.
Right, it's mad bright.
It's
See the rubber sweater? Did you
Uh,
take that off?
oh, it's flashbanging. Why is the
Go
blue
over
looking
there
like
and take it
that?
off. We'll come back.
Jisha Cozine. Oh, no.
Yeah, that's a long ass name, bro.
You got blue, yeah.
I feel bad when he got to
See
start
through.
practicing his name.
But it's not
Damn.
green though, right?
Well, blue obviously
shirt
has
that says girl on it,
is a
though.
part of green. So
Yeah, after that, I'll be tight.
right.
I'll be straight dread.
All
Close
right,
it up.
so cool. Let
you
us.
You call it?
No, I said close the door.
Oh yeah, close the door. Bring and come on back on the couch. Come back on the
Lock
couch.
doors.
You just put the sweater with my coat. Is that? All right, now close it. Move on, booty.
You good? How she looking, Chad? How she looking? She looking better now?
Yeah, now you look better.
She looking better now?
I see
Yeah.
it now.
Yeah. Smooth.
Yeah, you probably
See how
have.
the green screen is green in the back? You see Game Lounge in the back?
Right.
So,
So,
Your
well,
jacket
how
is
did you
blending
know I
in
was
with it.
calling you?
That's what I'm saying.
all right. So let's get into things. Let's get into our current events and our games for the night. All right.
It's probably in the phone. How do you use your phone? You're on crib.
You guys ready?
He's looking for his phone.
Yeah,
He
he's looking
looking-
for his phone.
Oh no, the phone. What's wrong with that?
The phone.
Call it.
The phone.
Well, let's call the
It's going
phone.
straight to voice. It's not even
Oh.
ringing.
Oh.
Old head
There you go.
antics.
Yeah.
Uh-oh.
I agree.
Yo, this nigga's gone.
Hold on.
He done it.
God damn.
He done up.
Chat GK has lost his
He
phone
is finito.
right while we on stream, which is strange.
He just had
I
it.
don't know what he's saying, man.
Where's security at? Get security on the job.
Security back there.
Yo, he need to get escorted out.
That's that pristine shit.
It's only chick because he wasn't
He
over
need a
here.
nap.
Nah, he wasn't on there.
No, I think he needs to take a tea break.
Yo,
That is crazy. Yo.
he going upstairs?
I think he did.
Yeah.
I think he did.
I heard the footsteps.
Yeah, he might have went all the way upstairs. Yeah,
Damn, you did.
it is what it is. All right.
Is it in the backyard? This whole time?
Oh, I left him out.
It's for
How you his phone in the
Because
house?
he let him in.
Right.
Leave it in the crib. I don't know.
All right. So let's get into it, y'all. Let's get into it.
We're starting with our feet.
It's you. Louise, is it you?
No.
Well, Melanie, the Monet chat says, "Hey, what's up, chat? Welcome to the Game Lounge Baby Shower. Let's talk about some baby stuff. Because it's a baby shower, right?
That baby.
That baby. Here's some amazing facts. 8 amazing baby facts you probably didn't know, chat. Maybe some of y'all in here didn't know either. Number 1, babies have more bones than adults.
That's crazy.
They have 300. I found that out today. I didn't know either. They can breathe and swallow at the same time.
That's actually wild.
Ain't everybody can do that?
No,
So when we eat and we not breathing?
no.
I
No.
dying.
What type of shit?
Nope. They that's why they
I would
can
do it.
drink they milk at
Yeah.
the same time.
I could do it.
Newborn, 3 newborns. Oh my God.
What was it?
Oh my God.
Oh, yeah, you done.
I can still do it.
Okay.
So no more for you?
Yeah, no more.
All right. no more for GK. No more for GK. His phone was on the floor by his foot. And he went all the way upstairs and everything for it.
We're on number 3.
Taking naps, old nigga shit.
All right. So, chat, Game Lounge, number 3, newborns recognize their mother's voice right away, clearly, because they've been with you for 9 months. It's the only thing that they hear, especially your voice, because you be yelling at them. So he gonna definitely recognize your voice. Yeah. So
jump too early.
yeah, 4, they are born with the ability to swim.
Well, I mean, yeah.
What?
It's kind of
Ooh.
crazy.
That makes sense.
Right. But
Wow.
they're born with the ability to swim, but become like drowning adults. Like this makes no damn sense to me.
After each fact, you're supposed to go, ooh.
We can do that. We can do that. Fact number 5.
Yeah.
On to number
They
5.
crying without tears. Ooh.
I'm done with y'all.
Number 6.
And number 6, they don't have kneecaps at birth, obviously because they can't walk. Ooh.
Number 7. Number 7.
What? Bigfoot actually is giving
I
us.
was just about to say, he's actually behaving himself.
You know what? God damn it, Bigfoot! Drop a bomb for Bigfoot for being so nice.
Sounds sarcastic.
I appreciate him. I appreciate Bigfoot for coming in here. Even if it is sarcasm, he never says nice things.
Never does.
So we appreciate this, goddammit. We appreciate you, Bigfoot. Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Number 7, babies can taste sweet flavors best. And number 8, their vision is blurry at first. Some people say they can only see black and white.
So us.
Black and white.
Yep. So
Damn.
So,
What?
here's something that you also may not have known.
Wow.
There is a woman who actually holds the World Guinness record of having 9 babies or non-tuplets. It's
That's
called.
crazy.
At
Shorty
once.
had a litter.
Damn, bro. Facts, bro.
Right.
Isn't that the chick I saw you with 9 months ago?
Oh. I'm uncle to 9 babies at the same time. Jesus Christ. Oh my God! Oh my God!
I know who that is.
Non-babies
And all
is
babies
crazy.
survive, like-
Yup.
Oh,
All
yeah.
of them survived.
Yep.
Wow. Blessing.
So there
I wonder
was
if she pushed
another
them out.
case of someone having the same 9, but some of the babies did pass. They didn't make it. So, but hers all 9 made it.
I wonder
And
if she had them.
And
that's
that's
the baby
5
daddy.
girls and
Yep.
4
That's the
boys.
baby daddy.
that
You better
that's
stay with him because she ain't getting no stepdad.
That's a fact.
he better not go cheat.
You know that is not gonna step
Because
up.
how potent
Hey, you know
is
niggas
you?
stepping up.
How potent is your kid maker, bro? Like what's going on?
We on the first day. How many kids you got? You know, I got 2 boys.
Man,
How many
child
you got?
support is
9?
taking your
I'm
checks,
out.
bro. You
Yo.
not getting no check.
and 5 girls.
It's crazy.
Right.
At the same
Another
time.
9. Another
How
9
old are they?
kids.
Same age.
So,
That's a crazy boy. They all the same age.
yep, they all the same age. There's non-tuplets, and her name is Halima Cisse.
He never gonna see a check.
May
His
4th,
wife.
2021. This was actually recent.
That's recent. 2021.
Yep, 2021.
Damn. son.
And now she holds the Guinness
Where
World
does he
Record.
work?
Right.
That's a lot of niggas to
How long
feed.
how long was the birth?
Yeah.
Ooh.
Days.
Also, did you know babies grow really fast in the womb? Here's a chart of fruits to show the size of a baby every week. Our baby boy is actually 32 weeks, which means he's a papaya.
Oh wow.
Oh,
Right now, he's a
wow.
papaya.
That's
So if
pretty
you
big.
look through the weeks, you'll pretty much see like the different fruits. So if he was 18 weeks, he's an avocado. If he's 31 weeks, he's a butternut pumpkin, and so on and so forth. 28 weeks is a lettuce,
But a papaya is not
but
that
at
small.
40 weeks he'll be a
Right.
pumpkin.
A
Which
pumpkin is pretty big.
which is why they call little kids pumpkin.
I guess so.
Makes sense, right? Makes sense. Alrighty, so let's keep it going, y'all. No Grim Reaper today. Instead, the stork is here to share news. No Grim Reaper. I'm not going to show dead people today. No. But
we celebrating life.
we're celebrating life. So with that, we are going. The stork has to tell you guys, Cardi B has welcomed her 4th child into the world late 2025 with Stephon Diggs. As y'all know, he's on the New England Patriots.
That's not even them right there. That's AI.
Yeah,
They broke up.
So here's some family pics of
Yeah,
them.
she got released.
So this, I don't know. This may be AI, but it looks
AI.
like them. But this damn sure ain't AI. This ain't no AI. This is full-fledged them because that is definitely culture right there.
Yeah, I thought it looked just like her.
Yeah.
She like Tennessee, her sister.
Right. So the stork also says Rihanna and A$AP Rocky welcome their 3rd child into the world late 2025.
That boy released.
Right.
Where are you going? Get back over here.
Where you writing what song?
Right.
A little bit more.
Right. Rumors say
Huh?
baby number 4 is on the way. I'm saying rumors say baby 4 is coming.
So,
Already?
Rumors say
Already?
Already.
What's going on?
He said he want
Let her go.
That Bayesian food.
he want a Bayesian army out there.
Yo,
I ain't mad at him. I ain't mad at him.
Where are you going?
He
Where
said
you
They so
going?
rich, they can afford it.
Yeah.
Honda just letting it happen.
Where you
Yeah,
going?
Letting it happen.
They rich though, so they know.
How you want it? How you want it?
How you want it? It's crazy work. Like it's a meal. How you want it?
Shout outs to them though for sure.
That's
Shout
what's
outs
up.
to
That's
them.
what's up.
And here's a fun fact. Jasmine Lawrence and Eric Murphy just had their baby shower in February,
That's a crazy
which
tour.
is
I know.
Martin
That's a
Lawrence.
crazy
I saw it on Instagram.
Right, it's Martin Lawrence's daughter and Eddie
That's
Murphy's
every
son.
game.
Right.
Crazy.
Talent
They gonna have some
everywhere.
fun.
How
How
did
did
they
they
find
find each other? What the hell going on?
Well, their fathers were, comedian,
Yeah.
a comedic
Yeah.
legend.
Well, I can tell with my daughter. Well, I'm out here doing, acting. You
Yo,
over here being what you
And the
doing.
crazy part about
What's
it
going
is,
here?
he only had daughters. He paid for all their weddings.
Right.
Yeah, he did,
So,
yeah.
and just think about it. Martin and Eddie was in life.
Claude
Now
and Ray.
they're about to share a grandchild for
Right.
life.
Yeah.
It's
Facts.
crazy.
He gonna have some. That baby
What did
gonna
they have, a
some
son or a
funny-ass
daughter?
grandparents.
I think it's a boy coming. I think.
We don't know.
Well, she got a pink dress on, so I'm assuming girl then.
Okay, maybe. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, it could be.
I'm
It's
gonna
gonna
say
be
that
fun. It's
because
gonna
that's
be
a
funny
that's
regardless.
an
Yo,
actual
right.
baby
It's
shower
gonna be
picture.
Beyonce
Yo, it would be
regardless.
crazy if this baby's just not funny, son. It's just
Yeah, it happens
How you
like
mix
that.
genetics on both sides?
Right, he just smart as shit.
He just smart as shit.
He's a brainiac. He has no kind of humor,
No, nothing.
but he's a brainiac.
Like,
Alright, whatever.
that's what's up, though.
But it's
What-
super
what a
dope.
waste of genius.
Shout out to those ghosts.
I had to say that, sorry. What a waste of genius.
I mean,
Smarts?
yeah.
Smart?
Who your grandparents?
On both sides?
I want you to be funny.
He said, "What a waste of G." Said you can't put those on with 2 legs. Okay.
The joke's right itself.
Right. I'm just saying. Okay, Chad. It's
Baby shower.
baby shower game time. It's baby shower game time. Let's get
Oh,
into
I'm
it.
ready for this.
Yes.
I'm
So also, Chad, if you want to
ready.
give,
It's a drunk uncle at the party.
It's still boring.
That's what I'm gonna
He's
be.
still boring.
Yeah,
He's
that's
still
what
boring.
right,
Boring.
That's what I'm gonna be.
pulling all the way up,
Boring. Look at these drinking.
Also, Chad, if you guys would like to gift the baby, pretty much we have a link. So just click the link that's pinned or in the chat panel, or actually just looking at the top there. I'm going to pin it right now for you guys. I should have pinned it already, but I'm going to put it there and pin it.
Hey, kitty. That's
Already
the
dropped.
Keyboard?
Already
Homo
dropped.
runs in the family.
Keyboard's officially
All the
in
time.
now.
Yep.
You know what I mean? It's official now.
Yep,
Phone
it's
number
official.
one.
It's official.
You need the pillow?
Drop in the
Oh,
mouth.
No.
shit.
What the hell just happened?
You know
No,
from
my
the
whole
ain't
ear.
nobody
Gunshot.
Nobody duck.
Right?
We know real gunshots.
Yeah.
Right.
Right, yeah,
Niggas say,
we do. What's that?
Right, the balloon. What's that?
Which balloon was
Which
that?
balloon? Which balloon? Yo, Jordan, which balloon?
I was trying to figure out was it the light blue? The white blue?
Niggas do
Was
that.
it how big was it?
Yo, if that was a real
Start
balloon,
rolling
everybody
from the
would duck
Oh,
that
yeah,
way.
let's go that way. Jump over this whole bitch.
What's wrong with you?
You good?
Yo, you good? Don't know these balloons nowadays, man.
They're wildin'.
Don't know how to act right.
It's YN balloons.
YN balloons.
They stay popping off.
Yeah.
I should have known about the quarter zip.
You know what? Y'all is wild.
All right, so that's the link chat.
Yo, the uncle is wild.
Yes,
And auntie.
yes.
Woman's month.
Yes.
Yeah,
Women's
yes.
month. Yeah. You know let that go. You ain't gonna get caught out here. They'll cut your ass out.
You're not gonna get me in
Right, because
trouble.
right next to him, he can't get away.
You know.
Definitely shout out to Kitty. Appreciate you, Kitty. Saying happy
Yay,
baby
see
shower.
you
Drop a
later.
bomb for Kitty for being in the room.
That's the trooper, right?
So, let me just scroll down a little bit, catch up with chat. Koza said, "Oh, the little baby got mama's forehead."
Oh damn! Damn!
Talk about Rihanna. He said, then
Rihanna kids.
Koza said, "Going to be named Martin Murphy after his grandpa's." That would be
You gotta
dope.
have to.
Martin
You
Murphy
the
is
first
dope.
boy out of that collision. You gotta carry that name, bro.
Yeah.
Martin Murphy. Martin
Yeah.
Murphy.
You have to, bro.
Yeah, you have to.
It's only right.
It's
It's
only right.
only right. All right, so
Damn, he got a lot to live up to.
yes, yes.
Big shoes, man.
Yeah, that's
So
huge.
once again, all gifts is
New
appreciated.
30 gift from
Lot
Koza.
going on.
Oh,
That's my nephew.
Who was that? Who was that?
Who did
Somebody
that?
gifted.
Appreciate you.
Koza, appreciate you. $30 gift from Koza. Drop a bomb. My God, appreciate you, Koza.
Appreciate you, Koza.
See, this is why he's going to be named CJ Kozavius Jr. the Third. God damn it. Okay.
Cartoon babies. Choose your favorite.
Yes.
baby.
So-
Of course, you'll stay Stewie.
Stewie's that nigga.
Nah, I gotta go with Bobby from Bobby's World, man.
Yo, Bobby's a G, though.
Stewie 1v1 and he's soloing
Bobby
everybody.
from Bobby's World.
Right.
man.
So choose your favorite
Holly
baby.
Mandel, man.
Stewie.
Tommy. You like Stewie?
Choose your favorite baby. Chat. Put your favorite baby in the chat.
I like
Let us know which one is your
I'ma
favorite
go
baby out of this
with-
list right here.
Oh, word. Maggie
Maggie.
took out Mr. Burns.
She be on Tom.
Yeah,
all
she
the
took
time.
Mr.
Yo,
Burns.
she clipped that
She be
nigga.
on Tom. and-
She
She's
took
a
on
dog.
my yo.
Let me tell you something.
Who was
Let me
up?
tell you something.
That's what Ryan said.
I'm
Ike.
go to sleep.
Nicole
Old
said.
ass nigga.
Stewie.
I'm gonna lie. I'm gonna go with
Go
Maggie on
one.
that
Kick
one.
it
Go with Maggie.
I'm going
She's
with
a
Maggie.
G. She's a
G
G.
can't go with
She's a G.
Maggie.
Bridget.
You going with Stewie, bro?
I'm gonna go with Boss Baby.
Stewie.
Wait your
Mrs.
turn. Wait
Bro?
your turn.
Tommy.
Wait your
Tommy?
turn.
That's a grown ass man.
I gotta
That's
go
why-
with
that's why I
Bobby.
said it for
Gotta
your
go with
boss.
Bobby's World.
Gotta go Bobby's World.
I'm going Boss Baby.
You going Boss Baby? Little mama?
Stewie.
Stewie. We got two Stewies.
Ike.
We got Ike.
Wait,
Kick the baby,
that's
don't
South Park,
kick the
right?
You
baby.
said kick the baby?
Yeah.
Kick the baby? You can't. No, don't kick the baby.
Don't
Don't kick the baby.
I'm dead.
Cousin Ash,
I say Maggie or Jack Jack.
Maggie or Jack
Jack,
Jack?
I like
Jack,
Jack
Jack,
Jack. Jack Jack is.
Nobody
That's
seems
a
that this guy
powerhouse
here
right there.
solos.
Solos who?
I'm with. I'm
Stewie?
Boss
Nah,
Baby
not
too. I
getting
like
that
Boss
Maggie.
Baby.
He's not getting past Maggie.
Out of this list right here, I would say Boss Baby or Stewie.
But how is Stewie
Stewie.
getting past Poof? That's a fairy, bro.
You got a
Yeah.
point. You got a point. But this
True.
nigga's a
He ain't getting past Jack Jack either.
Oh, my bad, chat. My bad.
He
My
gonna make
bad.
some gun.
Nah.
You
gonna
don't
make
get
some.
past Maggie.
Nah,
She
Jack
not
I told him that. Maggie got him.
My bad, chat. My
Maggie got
bad.
him.
Oh.
Alright, so I guess that's the true one.
No,
we
they
want
can see
right
that,
there.
they can see
Maggie,
that.
Stewie, Jack Jack, and
Nah, Jack body and Stewie. You wildin'. We're not about to
You know,
do
Stewie
this.
about to get his own.
Yeah, I'm about-
I'm gonna get her. Stewie about to get
We're
his
not
own
about to
TV
have a
show.
baby fight. We're not.
Stewie about to get his own show.
Maggie,
Nah, Stewie.
Stewie.
He about to get his own
Is
show.
he?
yeah,
He
he is
really
about to
got
get his
it,
own show.
though.
I seen that.
That's
That's
interesting.
He getting a
We're about to
spinoff.
get his own
I
show.
can see
Yeah,
that though.
Tommy. Koza said
How
Tommy.
though?
Koza gonna say I'm gonna go with my boy Tommy.
Yeah.
Kitty says
He about to
Jack
get
Jack.
his own stuff.
Probably from his perspective.
Beauty,
Yeah,
drop a
that's
bomb for first shot for
He said
Beauty.
Beauty.
Appreciate you popping in the room,
Bobby.
Maggie or Bobby.
That's a crazy lineup, but I respect the shit out of it.
Yes, yes.
You can't
Cliff-
stop Bobby on the
Cliff
bus.
is in the building. Drop a bomb for
Bobby,
Cliff.
Bobby,
Yo, look
Yes.
at Bobby for his
Okay,
first
sir.
other worlds and stuff.
Yeah.
It was
Cliff says Stewie for
That's
sure.
what everybody else. I
Right.
don't know
Right.
where.
You said what?
Galaxy saying Stewie as well.
Nah,
up there, bro. Stewie up
Maggie.
there.
That's the original baby.
Yeah.
It's Maggie.
Well, Mickey
No,
is the
Tommy
original
is-
baby.
You right. You
Tommy
right.
is
Mickey
the
or
No,
second.
no,
I think Mickey or
Mickey,
Pebbles.
not Mickey Mouse baby. That came years after.
Right.
True.
I'm
True.
gonna have to go with
Well,
That's Mickey baby. Stop
Pebbles was
Nah, she cheated
historic
on him.
though.
She cheated. Oh,
Kitty said
man.
Pebbles too.
Pebbles is crazy though.
Pebbles
She's
is
not.
Pebbles is crazy. Nah, in a good way. That's my
Pebbles.
girl.
Pebbles
She
and
wasn't
Maggie
in that
were
many
best friends.
episodes though.
I'm gonna tell you who
I
got to go
think I
first
would
though
agree
is
with that.
Ike. Who's that?
That's from South Park.
That's from South Park.
Who
That's
mans is
Kyle.
that?
That's Kyle's little brother.
Why he look like that?
He be
He
yapping too. He be.
I don't trust him. I don't trust him.
I don't trust him.
His name got 3 letters. Who does that? Get him out of here.
Appreciate you, Cliff.
Get this nigga out of here.
Appreciate you, Cliff. Thank you,
Who
Cliff.
Who mans is this right here? He's pissing me off.
Yes.
He's pissing me off.
Get up on it.
Why his face don't connect together? Why the top and the bottom separate?
Because he kicked the baby.
Hold on, though.
Yes.
Hold on, though. Why his feet so small?
Yes.
Get him out of here.
Get him out of here.
He's bothering me, baby. Gang. Nah, gang, get him out of here.
Where's his pupils?
Yo, listen, like, who's his father?
He kicked the baby.
Nobody knows.
Nobody
yeah.
knows.
Right.
I would have left too. That's crazy.
That is a fact. We don't ever see Kyle's father.
Feel
Damn.
better,
Because
Cliff.
his son look like that.
What's the next one?
Yo! Damn, I can't do nothing wrong.
All right, let's see what the next one is.
Next.
Rank these worst to best. Teething, puking, peeing, pooping.
That specific pooping in that picture?
Teething.
Yeah, that's kinda
Teething.
nasty.
Teething.
Rank them
As
from worst
Teething.
to
Worst.
best.
As a parent, I could explain each one.
Teething, best.
Puking, you can clean up. Pooping, you can clean up.
Puking,
Peeing, you can clean
wow.
up. Teething, don't
Puking.
stop till the whole segment.
Yes.
is
Puking,
done.
Yes.
That's a
You
fact.
gotta ride that whole. Wait, pause.
And the kids.
Hey, you.
Hey,
Drop a ball.
It's a kids show today.
Hey,
yo,
man. It was a yeah, word. He was riding with him, bro. He was yup. Yes. Yup. Hey, right, riding with him. Oh, wait a minute.
He's over here wilding.
Wait a minute. Wow, what?
Please stop making me laugh.
Oh my God.
Yeah, this thing is wild.
Let me see what chat is
He
saying.
was like,
Let's see what chat is saying. Chat says
I thought you wasn't hosting.
Kenny says pooping.
He's running off.
Not
with it.
when they run down the legs. Coda said it's puking, pooping, peeing, then teething.
Oh,
Teething
no. Teething
being
first.
Nah, teething don't go away.
Teething
Bro,
the
you got
worst.
hot too?
Yeah, because if I see that type of shit, I'm gonna pass out.
so Koza think puke is the worst.
Yeah,
Yeah, he not finna have no
Nah,
baby.
He
puking
said
in his
teething
mouth.
easy because it's whiskey and cotton swab on the gums.
Oh,
Yeah.
damn.
That's old
Okay.
school codes. That's old school.
Okay.
Whiskey.
They lock
They
you
look
up.
like a,
Like
they get like a chew toy for teeth in
Nah, that don't work.
Yeah, but them
They
chew
don't
choice
work all
don't
the
be
time.
working.
They
It
don't
could be
work.
it could be cold as it want to be. They go.
But that shit
Go right back to crying.
But after 5 minutes, it's
Bomb pop. Hold on.
Beauty said teething, pooping, puking, and then peeing. She don't want to be peed on.
Mine is
I respect
teething,
that line, though.
Well,
peeing,
no, teething is worse for her.
Niggas in the
teething,
golden shower?
pewing, peeking,
I'm about to say, I don't know.
peeking.
Anybody don't want to get peed on.
After teething is pooping.
My list is pooping number 1. That
Yes.
shit is horrible.
Yes.
Throw the whole baby away.
Yes.
Throw the whole baby away.
I don't want that.
I don't want it. Throw the whole baby away.
Pooping is not that bad.
I got my receipt. I still got
Right.
the receipt.
Put it in the car. Put it in the car.
It's pooping,
I
then
got the warrant. I
teething,
got that extended warrant.
then puking, then peeing.
Yes.
No,
Niggas said return back to sender.
Yes.
pooping is not that bad.
Nah,
It is,
pooping
bro.
is horrible.
And it goes up their back.
We
What the hell
know.
going on
I should have
here?
had that
Number
picture up there.
one.
You got to change the color.
Yes.
I have it, but I don't know how you're going to get it up.
Oh my God.
When they come
We really embarrassed.
You got a stomach of
Yo,
steel.
first thing in the morning.
That's because you
No,
eat
it's not
vegetables.
what you
That's
do.
why.
Back,
Send it to me.
You got a strong stomach,
You
nigga. I'm
got
sorry.
a
Please,
oh
stomach.
my
Send it to
God,
me.
no. Oh.
So
I take off that peanut butter.
Especially you
I'm
feed them
passing out.
something green?
yeah, that's
Wait. Oh, okay.
that's
Oh,
crazy.
look at the picture
Yeah.
right there. Just go with the picture right there.
Yeah, that's crazy work.
Yeah, the puke can be projectile too.
All right, y'all.
Peen too.
We got a new game. It's Black Mama or Myth, but I call it Black Mama or Cap. So pretty much, you're going to basically see. There are going to be a bunch of questions, and can you guess if these sayings are real Black mom sayings?
All them shits is real.
Damn.
We're going to see.
If you read
We gonna
Oh,
see.
you just read every. Almost
We
17
going to see.
Niggas
We going
Raise
to
it up.
They said all that shit.
Right, but you just read all. You read them.
I'm
Not yet.
Koza, I'm
Huh?
very anti-Dookie
So
too.
if you want
I'm
to.
anti-Dookie all the way. So
Come on.
pooping is first, bro.
Yep. Get them off out of here.
Anti-dookie.
So all right. So let's.
It's a real thing.
That's the picture.
Okay, cool. I'll take it in a minute. So let's see. Number 1 is keep rolling your eyes. one day they'll roll out the house.
Yep.
Mom would say that, yes or no?
Yes.
Black mama.
My
Yep.
mom is
Myth.
that.
Is that
My mom
when
said
mom
shit
say
that
that?
my
Is that a
mom
myth?
said.
Is that-
That's a myth.
That's a mom.
That's
It's a myth. Girls, it's a myth.
Myth.
My
mama
That's a mama.
That's a
Right,
mama.
be in the back of your eyes be in the back of your
I-
head.
So what's gonna happen is you're gonna see Black Dot go into space, and this is pretty much what I say that I believe.
Okay.
Okay,
I know.
but it's
Right, being a
also
butthead.
reflecting
I
what
never
was.
If you don't think it's cap, can we throw a cap?
You're lying.
Yes,
Because you don't even
Yes.
roll your
Can we do a
eyes.
cap?
you can tell Cap. Yes.
Yeah, you know that episode
Lies.
of
Tell the truth, Cam.
Okay.
So I felt like that was
Mason
myth.
Cam?
Yeah, my
Mommy
mom
about
about
to
to
be-
Keep rolling your
Right,
eyes.
right,
One day they'll
right.
roll out
They
the
slapped the
house.
shit out of you before I even had
I mean,
one.
the first
Let me
myth,
read the
sure.
second
Before she
one.
even get to say that shit.
Wait,
Let me read
Cap,
the second
look,
one.
look. Here's my
Yeah.
thing with that one, right?
The first one.
second
First one.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
It is a mom thing, but every mom don't word it the same way, but there's a variant of it.
My mom would say, "Keep rolling your eyes. They're gonna fall out your head."
That's what
I
I'm
was
saying.
trying to
That's
say,
a-
hey.
I think it's all in the same
That's a
bubble.
very suburban mom right
That's
there.
what I'm saying.
I
The
think
first,
it's all in the
the
same
first
bubble.
part
You
is
get what I'm
true.
saying?
That's
Okay.
a
It's
suburban
not
mom
word
right
for
there.
word, but
Let's
it's in
say
the same
let's say the
bubble.
pot though way. How are they saying in Jamaica?
I slap the shit out you.
Right,
Right to it. Yeah.
right, straight to the point. And no explanation.
Or guess what? You just get slapped.
Right.
Right.
So
You can't roll your
Ga-
eyes.
Galaxy,
It's in between.
Galaxy said, "It's keep rolling your eyes. They're gonna roll to the back of your head."
That one.
Right.
That's what I'm saying.
That-
It's all in the
that's
same
it
bubble.
right there.
I think it's all in the same bubble.
I'm going to read number 2.
So they're not, yeah.
I brought you in this world and I'll take you out.
Yeah,
That's a fact.
Mom.
Black mama.
Mom,
What
mom,
does that mean
mom.
exactly? You
I'll
gonna
kill you.
like kill
I'll
him?
kill you.
I brought you in. I'll take your ass out.
You didn't say that to me.
No, I
Bye.
didn't say that to you.
That's a
Bye.
mom.
A black mom,
Mom.
say it. My mom.
That's
a lot
that's
of
mom
parents
shit
say
right
it.
there. We all
Only
can
about
agree that's
this
mom
whole
shit.
It
That's
was
a
good
medical
life.
question. That's a medical question.
We all can agree that's mom shit.
Mm-hmm.
Third one is you better fix your face before I fix it for
Mom.
you.
Mom.
Straight up.
Damn.
Straight
You
up.
good? You alright?
How's your face?
She was strong with
Strong
that
with
one.
it.
Yeah, mom.
She said it to me yesterday.
You okay? You good?
No, that's crazy work.
Yeah.
Crazy
That was
work.
personal.
I don't even say that
She
to
said,
them.
I was
You
called
know
for
what's so
help.
crazy? I don't even say
one.
none of this to y'all. This is a lie.
She said,
Mom,
Mom.
she put
The
that
Raya is a
on
liar.
I said, it's all caps.
Oh,
I give you something to cry for.
So
Oh, that's.
Right. Hold on. Let's get through them. Let's not get too far
what's
ahead.
Next? What's next?
Fourth one is if you don't iron your clothes,
Wait,
your
let's get
future
through
gets.
them three.
I said three.
What-
You
No,
better
you didn't.
fix your face before I fix it for you.
But you didn't say the
What
rule.
the
Die.
fuck,
Oh,
sir?
my bad.
The dot.
There we go. They gonna
on,
die.
man.
They gonna die. They gonna die.
Come on, man. I feel like there should be some sound behind it. Boom.
If you don't iron your clothes, your future gets wrinkled too.
I say this.
That's a myth.
Who the hell said
Myth.
that?
That's Caucasian.
I know a bunch of niggas in the hood that don't even got an iron.
Right.
I'm gonna say this though.
No
That's some
iron
American
board,
shit.
straight
Yeah,
bag.
that ain't something
I've
big.
never
That's
heard
some
that shit.
American
I never heard
shit.
that.
I'm
Just
American.
do it with
I've
you
never heard
because-
nothing like that before.
I never
No, I mean, not having an iron or iron board is some
That's
American
cap.
shit.
Yeah.
What the hell is that?
Bro, I used to
Because
towel
I
from
was
big, bro. I had
born
them iron
from you.
boards.
Man, they used to have to
That's
boil
why-
a pot of water and go across
Okay.
the clothes, bro.
Like,
Boil a pot of water, bring it over with the damn mittens and go across
Nah,
your
that's
clothes in order
crazy.
to
I
keep
think
that
you
shirt
buy
and make that
everything
shirt on them pants
Yo.
straight.
I ain't gonna lie.
Well, you always have an iron. That's cap.
Bro.
American as hell.
What that one said?
BT Gamer, drop a bomb for BT Gamer.
What this one said?
This one said if you don't iron your clothes.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh yeah, that's myth. The fifth one is if you stay messy, life gonna treat you the same way.
Mom.
No.
See, that's what I'm saying. There's variants in
I
it.
heard a variant of that.
It's variant.
I mean,
I never heard of that before.
I heard a variant of it.
So
White mama
so
put this up there.
variants of it don't count. Like it's that line. That it.
That's
Myth.
specific.
That's myth.
It's a myth.
Get about it.
Right.
It's a myth.
That's good.
Myth. That's cap right there. You guys say that's cap, right?
Don't be running in and out of my house.
Right.
Black mom.
Black mama shit right there.
Black mom.
You better stay outside.
Black mom. Black mom.
You go inside, you can't go back
Black
outside.
mom.
Outside.
And you always say when it start getting good
Black
too.
mom,
It
because
start
I be
getting
doing
real
that.
fun. It
Bro,
start running out the
man.
crib.
Bro, I'm 35 and I still can't do it, but they can do it. This is bullshit. This is crazy. I go to my mom house. Yeah.
You got 40.
Damn.
I closed the door quietly sometimes.
Quietly. Nigga still scared.
Crazy work.
That's our mom.
That's definitely-
that door closed.
That's definitely mom right there. That's
Yeah,
definitely
light
mom.
steps.
Right.
Next one is keep ignoring me. Silence got a way of raising fools.
Cap.
Myth.
Cap.
Cap. Who the
Myth.
hell said
Myth.
that?
Cap.
Who's
Cap.
white mama?
Cap.
Cap, cap,
Wait,
cap,
don't come
cap,
out to my
cap,
grandma like that.
Oh, she said that? Oh, she said that?
Your grandma white?
Yeah. She said that?
Oh.
When did she say that? When did she
Yeah,
say
she
that?
said that too.
Makes sense. Makes
But
sense.
did she say
Double
that?
like
She said
John?
that too?
My
She said
feet
that
keep
too?
on slipping.
Oh, damn.
Oh.
White people.
Yeah, white shit. Right,
We
right.
got
Shit.
evidence.
Shit.
We got evidence.
Can I get comfortable?
Whose white mama is this?
Space.
We got evidence. Hey, listen, her white grandma said that.
Said it. She said it.
It's not Cap.
It's not Cap.
Grandmothers now? That's crazy.
One beat Beetle is in the building, jumping off of one beat. He said, yo, what's good,
What's
GK?
up?
And everyone just popping in real quick to show my support before I head to my stream. I got you tabbed up.
Appreciate
W
you.
Stream Lurk. Appreciate you, one beat Beetle. Appreciate you. Coulter said caparoni. That's
Yeah,
me.
Yeah,
Caparoni.
Caparoni.
Who the hell said that? Who white mama?
Galaxy
is
said, in
this?
fact, 6, black mom, Spanish mom, even Asian mom.
Damn.
Number 8.
Number 6. That's don't be running to my house for sure. So we had number 8. So that one says definitely Cap.
Definitely Cap.
Mhm.
So this one's
Who you talking to? Because I know it ain't me.
Mom and
That's
dad.
a black.
Mom and dad.
Excuse.
That's a black mama right there.
Yep.
we,
Mom
we,
and
black
we,
mama.
we on black mamas, not on black dads today.
Oh, no.
We on black mamas,
No.
not-
Dad, get the smoke too.
Nah, we on.
Oh,
damn.
You see why I'm sitting in the back?
This is
Yeah.
I don't want none of that smoke. I want none of
Too
that
back
shit.
to sideline. How you doing?
I get it.
It's safe to say that was definitely a black
black
mom
mama.
thing.
Oh, yeah, that's a black
I
Number
need to go
9
back.
says, "Don't make me come over
Yep,
there."
yep.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, that's a black
Yep,
mama.
yep,
Woo!
yep.
I still got PTSD.
Nigga, I
Yeah.
start cleaning up.
I start cleaning it up.
The
She ain't even dirty.
The PTSD kicked it right away. Don't make me come over there. What you mean?
It's right there to the right.
What you mean? Don't
Yeah.
come over here. What you doing here? No.
Hi, Mom.
Don't make me come over there. Hold on.
I like this space.
Stay where you at.
That's definitely a black mom. That's definitely a black mom. Number 10 said, you better be glad we're in public right now.
Mom.
Black
Oh,
mom.
yeah, black mama.
Oh, yeah.
The blackest of
black
moms.
mama.
I'm gonna say this to my brother.
You be scared of me.
The blackest of moms.
You
is
better
the
be
blackest
sad all
of
day.
moms.
You gonna stop?
Oh my
Wait,
God.
I don't have a home.
Black mother, black
The
mother.
blackest of moms.
Yes, black mother. You smell like bad decisions in yesterday's Wi-Fi.
Yeah.
No,
I just
never
said-
did that before
I
in my
just
life.
said cat.
Yesterday's what?
Cat.
Automatically.
Yesterday's Wi-Fi.
Why? Whose young mom is
Right.
this?
Right.
Whose YN mother is this?
What does yesterday's Wi-Fi smell like?
Right.
Bad decisions apparently.
Right.
Bad decisions.
Signals dropping?
Your signal dropping.
What?
Yo, bro.
How bad does that smell?
What? It must be real bad.
Really bad, yeah.
Horrendous.
It's like, number 12 is keep playing dumb. One day your brain.
Straight to the door.
I got it.
Nicole, please.
Yeah, go help.
Please.
Nicole, they got many
Go,
doors.
go,
open.
yeah, go help. It's
I
on.
don't
It's,
know what about this.
it's one brown door.
It's one round door.
See that brown door? Well, brown.
Brown door.
There we
All right, close the
go.
door, Mariah.
Thank you.
Right there.
Where is security?
Right
Going
there.
again.
Sitting right there drinking.
How security drunk?
I'm gonna be drunk today. This is my damn nephew. God damn it.
Who's that? Oh, I'm security.
Oh, me?
Who, me?
Number 12,
This
keep
is
playing
right.
dumb. One day your brain gonna believe you.
Cat.
What? Who is that?
Why is it so philosophical?
I ain't never heard that before.
Right.
I'm not gonna hold
That's
you.
good advice.
Yo, my man over here right
It's
now.
been said to me.
Right.
It
I never
makes
heard that.
sense, but I've never heard it. from
Me
my mom.
either.
It's been said to me.
Like, who's
I've heard that before. I've heard that before.
It's been said to me. That's why I said it was my. It was it.
Yeah, I never heard that before.
Never heard that before.
BT Gamer said I just got back from the movies.
Cool.
Cool, bro. What you watch? Galaxy Stone said, brother, I ain't never in my life heard a YN mother say that. Talking about the smell like bad decisions of Wi-Fi.
That's a YN mother.
There gotta be Wi-Fi.
Actually, no, that's a COVID baby mama.
Talk fast if you want wisdom, walk slow.
Nah.
Cat.
Who said
Yeah,
that?
Let's just get through that. It don't make sense. You were trying to BS around with
Only
that.
try to justify it.
14. And I like this one.
If a mama said that,
Keep
you-
crying and I'll give you something to cry
Oh,
on.
Yup.
yeah, black mama.
That's black
Black
mama.
mama.
I fucked up
Mind
right
you,
now.
That's after she beat you.
The-
Right.
You already
You
crying.
started crying.
At-
I'm crying 'cause
you
you
alive,
whooped my
you
ass.
Right,
feeling
you
the
got your
beat.
ass
I'm
whipped.
feeling it right now.
And you-
Right now.
Right.
Tell us
What'd
your
you
full
say?
screen.
Yeah.
I beat you. Yes or no?
You guys get
Yes or no? Yes or no? Tell the
Yeah,
truth.
yeah, like-
the bottom lip
Tell
keep
the
going.
truth.
What you mean?
Tell us the scenario.
My ass.
You gave me
You know,
some
like one
That was it.
one
That
time
was
that
it.
said
You
that
put
said
my
Nicole was crying. She
You
was
just did.
she was acting up. White.
That's not you.
Okay.
Right then. That's not you. So what you talking about?
Yes,
Okay.
immediately. Yes,
Stop trying to
110%
make it
true.
seem like
Yes.
that.
Like I said, that's definitely a mom thing. 15 says,
Oh,
when we
yeah.
get in the store, don't touch nothing.
Don't
touch
nothing,
Don't look at nothing. Don't
Black
ask
mama.
for
That's
nothing.
bad.
I don't care.
You okay?
This
I'll
game should be
take that
called Black
one.
Mama or White Mama.
Yeah.
At this point.
Yeah, I think all mamas tell the kids that.
Yep.
Yeah, that's black mom.
I think
Black
all.
mama.
I need space.
That's Black Mama. Don't touch
Appreciate
shit.
you, Koza, for banning that.
What was that
Appreciate you.
question?
Right, relax.
It's like
It's not
cussing
that
you out.
deep. Come on.
Don't touch shit.
Right.
Number 16, I'm not going to tell you again.
Oh
Oh yeah, Mama.
I mean,
Mom.
I'm gonna punch you.
Yep.
Yeah.
Right.
That's
Mom,
what
I know,
Yeah.
I know.
Sometimes you don't gotta say it.
I'm not
Look
going
at
to
you
tell.
the
I'm
same
not going
way.
to say it again, but this is.
Yeah.
This right here.
Black Mama. 100% Black Mama.
For
Right.
sure.
I got PTSD from the swings.
17
Hey, we
is
can
yawn
both
too big and your soul might fall out.
What?
What?
Cat.
For yawn.
Cat.
Right.
Talk real quick.
Real quick.
Yo, damn.
Yawning is crazy.
That's voodoo mom.
Right.
Yes.
That's White Mama.
What in the Haitian mom is
White
that?
Mama. White Mama.
White moms don't say that. That's low
No,
fat.
they
They'll do some shit like that. You wouldn't know.
You're right.
I believe you. I believe
You're
you.
right. You're
I
right.
believe. You
You're
know who
right.
I believe her right
Yeah,
here.
I bet.
Her
I
right
bet.
here.
I believe
I'm
you.
about to
Right.
too.
The lightest skinned nigga here.
Damn. Wow.
Shit.
Wait
This
till
motherfucker-
wait
this
till
motherfucker
summertime
Drake's
comes.
cousin.
Right.
Wait till summertime comes. It's okay.
What's gonna happen summertime?
I'm gonna be darker
Don't
than
worry.
baked
I'm
potato.
going
Go to hell.
So that's the Black Mama.
Right, Kosa. Ain't nobody saying that.
Black Mama or Cat list. So, let's give it up for that. Let's give it up.
Black Mama or White Mama?
We got more games, chat. We got more games coming. Look, we're going to move right into the next one.
Mommy or Daddy?
It's a boy story, for sure. The boy is coming.
Who was born first?
So, since it's a boy story, baby shower, mommy or this game is called Mommy or Daddy. Guess who said it first or whom the sentence fits more?
Okay.
So
Okay.
who was born first? Out
So-
of us two.
Who was born first out of us two?
Dad.
Asking the kids.
Oh, y'all.
Oh, all of us, yeah.
Everybody?
CJ.
Naraya was born first.
No, not y'all.
No.
Out of us two.
Out of us
I'm
two,
done, Nicole.
Who-
What the hell?
Wait, you're doing the
out of mommy and daddy, who?
It's CJ.
Daddy was
Yeah,
born
Daddy
first.
was-
I was born first.
Nah, it's
Yes.
better.
90.
Daddy
Dude,
Dan,
let me
yeah.
answer
Drop a
first.
ball
I
for
don't
Daddy
know.
Dan.
Yes.
How you don't know?
Right.
Right.
I'm gonna say
Cliff
my
said,
name.
Wait, hold on.
Cliff
Let's
said
calculate
me.
this.
Kobe
Right,
said
right.
me.
Monet used like 2.
Kitty said you.
Right.
Was born
Actually,
first.
no, I think it was.
Nope, I wasn't.
Oh, CJ. Yeah, right. Yeah.
It was this one.
I know.
How you
Monet.
don't know?
I was born first.
That's the better question.
Right.
Who
That's
made-
That's your brother.
Second question is who made the move first?
Oh, I know,
first
I know who
move.
it is.
CJ.
I know who it is.
Oh.
Which I was telling
Who
me.
made the first move? My
CJ,
bad.
what's up?
CJ.
CJ.
Me?
CJ said, how
No,
you
wait, I'm
do
gonna say
it?
Y'all don't
Monet.
think she could have did
I'm
this?
gonna say
No,
Monet.
shut up. It was you.
Yeah.
Why y'all don't think she could have
Because
did
we
this?
know it was you, nigga.
It was you.
So what's the answer?
It's giving you
CJ,
one.
that
Well, all right. It was
It
me.
was
It was giving you one.
That was obvious.
Uh-huh.
See what chat said. Everybody said CJ.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. Look.
Good.
CJ.
Happy
Look.
birthday, I see CJ.
CJ, it was you.
Nigga said because he from Brownsville.
God damn.
God
Damn. God damn.
Brownsville is crazy.
CJ.
So, who will change the first diaper?
Mom.
Yeah, Mom.
Dog.
Definitely.
Maka.
Mom would definitely. Yep.
Okay. Who will spoil the baby the most?
Yeah.
CJ.
Nope.
I say
See,
mom.
I'm jacking it. 'Cause that's
I say
that's gonna
mom.
be
Mother.
Me.
Mom
Mother.
always spoiled-
Mama.
Mom always spoiled the baby. What?
Right.
I'm
She
only,
gonna
But
spoil
that's the
him the
first
most.
son.
right. That's
Yeah.
what
My
I
first
said,
son.
CJ.
Hello.
Boy, come on.
My first son.
She
Jesus
gon-
Christ.
she spoils them the most with it comes a lot, but I am the one that gives away with everything.
Yes.
Nah, CJ spoiling this one.
Yo,
Right.
nah, I'm with you on that one.
Right,
I'm with you
right,
on
right.
that
I'm
one.
not. Yeah, I'm. Yeah.
Mama.
Who would be up with the baby at night?
Yes.
Both.
CJ.
I say both.
Nope.
No, Monet.
No.
CJ.
Mama.
Oh,
Nope.
CJ.
Me.
It was
CJ.
Monet.
Monet.
Me.
Monet, you gonna
I'm
wake
gonna say
up?
Monet.
Me. She gonna
Monet,
sleep through the night.
Monet,
Say through that shit.
you're
Wait,
gonna
wait,
wake
wait.
up.
How is CJ gonna
You're
feed the
gonna see him
baby?
like you randomly just see him
I'm gonna
like.
say.
Nope,
I'm gonna say
not
Monet.
him.
Tell me.
But how is
Monet,
he
I'm
gonna
Damn,
telling
I'm
you.
trying to
Not
find
him.
you when
I
you
sleep
sleep.
light. He sleeps heavy. So
He's gonna wake her up. Eventually,
Yeah.
He's like,
what you put?
Daddy sleeps
Hey, go get him.
Let's see. Before I let the ring drop. Let's see what
Nah,
Chad
I'm
said.
telling
Thank you.
The baby gonna have a
Nah.
Nintendo Switch at the age of 4.
And
Before
they
I said CJ gonna spoil you.
your
Cause he
name
goes and knows.
CJ
Right,
wants
yes,
to
Goes
go.
and knows.
yes,
No, you're not.
absolutely.
You're not.
It's the first boy, though.
Right, kid.
Everybody know. We know you, nigga.
Yes,
Maybe.
Baby Goku.
yes.
Baby Goku.
Baby Goku is crazy.
Well,
Goten is crazy.
who will be up with the baby at night is going
Let's
to be.
see. Me.
I know
It'll be
it.
her.
I know
Yeah.
It'll be her.
He
He
sleeps
said, I gotta
heavy.
see.
Who told the family about the baby
You gonna open
first?
it?
CJ.
Wanna open it? Just
Mom?
open it.
Wasn't it both of y'all at the
Just
same
open the
time?
belt. Open the
Where's
button.
mom?
Damn it, I'm going CJ.
Wasn't it both of y'all?
Who told the baby about the family? Who told the family about?
What you drinking?
I ain't even had nothing. Can somebody pull me up?
Yeah, right.
It's crazy.
I need something to drink. Who told the family about the baby first?
Her.
I think it was Monet. Was it you?
You say mommy?
Yeah.
I
What'd
think
you
it was
say?
Oh yeah, it was you, wasn't it?
Was it
Wasn't
me?
both of y'all at the same time? But
No,
then
it was
With the
her.
cups.
How
Yeah,
you
she
know
did.
that?
Over there.
Let her figure it out.
Nigga said, how you don't know, nigga?
You got, regular plastic
Yeah,
one's
what's
cool.
that?
No, it was
Regular plastic one's cool. I'm sorry, Kitty. We left the cup all the way upstairs on the 18th floor, and,
Yeah.
and the elevator's kind of broke right now.
Yeah, we
So-
need some more kitty cups in here.
I'm not woken up
The kitchen staff fucked up.
Right, right.
Lemonade,
this
please.
whole time, man.
Here's the
Need more
drink.
kitty
I've
cups.
been drinking
I
out of
got
a
you.
Sprite can.
Yes.
Lemonade.
Pour me up, pour me up. Huh?
Lemonade, please.
Lemonade, please. You want to get a small cup? Can I get a small cup for the little one in the front? She wants some lemonade. She cannot have none of this pina colada.
No.
Well,
We got some cupcakes in here.
obviously.
Some of the cupcakes.
Yeah, go get one.
Hold on.
It's self-service in here, bro.
Yeah.
It's so serious.
We got lemonade for the kids.
If you
Chat.
don't go get it,
Not
first,
pina
then-
colada for the
Right,
kids.
you
Well, sweet and lemonade up here.
We got Oreo for the kids.
Right, you didn't eat it.
Oreo
I think
cupcakes.
My fault, chat. My fault.
Yeah,
Go ahead over here.
It's self-service over here.
Drink the
Yeah,
juice
you don't
first.
need no more.
Okay.
Whatever you do, GK House is spin for yourself.
What the fuck I mean?
He said, what the fuck?
And spin for yourself at GK
You
House.
already have. You already have.
I got
I got
nothing
you.
to
What
say.
you want to
I don't
say?
got
He
nothing
said,
to
he
say.
said, my bad.
Let me get that lemonade
Oh,
one.
man.
Here, boo.
Money.
Put it back.
It's spin for
Pina
yourself
colada
at
slap.
GK House.
Lemonade. Oh,
You already know.
Sugar, you want it?
Alright, I've been enough.
Mm.
You want a cupcake? Can you bring it over here, Ash?
What's wrong with big cupcakes?
Child.
I'm good.
Yes,
Yeah,
indeed.
because you're going to think it's free.
I want a pink
Yeah,
one.
because you're going
I'm
to
trying
think
to
it's
hold
free.
out the cupcakes, nigga.
Because you're going to think it's free.
He ain't say nothing about them cupcakes, chat.
Let me get the pink ones.
So, it ain't supposed to be no pink cupcakes, chat.
The Bati cupcakes.
The girl that made these messed up the order.
Bro.
Like we said, the kitchen staff
That's
fucked
the
up.
Yeah.
I mean, the kitchen. Oh, I'm sorry.
It could be
the kitchen
pink.
staff messed up.
Yeah.
My girls is here. It's pink for the kids.
No, yeah, for the kids.
Put it on
I'm
the
trying
floor.
to real quick.
Oh, they
It's
smell it.
Oreo.
Test it out, make sure it's safe.
Right.
All right, what's the answer to that one?
Those about
So-
cupcakes.
I ain't want no pink.
I
This guy
told
over here still
I
sipping.
told the family about the baby first.
Oh, I didn't
It's the
know that.
first
I knew it.
boy.
I knew
Come
it.
on, come
It's
on.
the first boy. It's CJ.
Come on, I had to tell it.
Oh yeah, it was you. Yeah.
That's a beautiful
But
moment.
I
mommy
remember the Facebook post.
Yeah, I had to tell it first.
told Naraya.
Okay, so now next question is who would make the baby laugh the most?
Oh, that's
You.
easy.
That.
CJ.
Yep.
CJ.
Yep. That's easy.
Kids.
CJ.
So I don't think she's funny.
It ain't that. It's about you. As
Yeah,
that.
exactly.
Right.
It's about you.
Bro gonna be telling
I'm
him
funny. See,
Dragon
don't be
Ball
trying to act like I
stories.
ain't
We
funny.
know my name is funny. It's okay.
Right, thank you. Because you trying to make it seem I ain't funny.
I just asked.
What the fuck? I'm funny.
I just asked.
He turned Super Saiyan.
He turned Super Saiyan.
You gonna be telling DJ jokes?
I'm trying to tell you,
Right.
bro.
Wait, I'm starting to remember that mommy made me laugh when I was a little baby.
She did. See, you got jokes.
She said, I'm trying to remember. It's crazy.
Baby
She
alone.
really ain't trying to dig back. When I was 1 month.
Nigga said, damn, you can reach that far?
Yo, listen.
Like,
Who would take the most baby pictures?
Mom.
Mom. Yeah, the mom.
I'm gonna go mom on that one.
The mom.
Of course.
Definitely, 100%.
You got a lot
Every
of
second of
pictures
the
of
day.
me and
Click.
Naraya.
Every second. Boom.
Pass that down.
Boom.
You know it.
For
Hey,
sure.
booty.
I'm on tape, you know.
She's definitely.
Yeah, I want liquor.
Oh, yeah.
I'm not the picturesque person. I'm not.
You need to be a little. I want memories too.
I know.
I'm fucking with this Jose Cuervo for now, bro.
Okay, who would be the fun parent?
Nigga trying to
CJ, you.
You already gave it away. Like,
You can't be the strict parent and the fun parent.
Yeah, but it's a boy.
Yeah,
It's
which
Street
one is that
Fighter.
Street Fighter? I
It's
need to know.
you know what I'm saying?
A strict
CJ
parent?
said, I let them get away with anything.
You are?
So he gave it away when he said that.
I would consider.
I'm more strict. You more of like, I'll
Stern.
say something 3 times. It
He
takes for
didn't
him to
force
say
her.
it 1 time, basically.
Yeah.
Right.
Because he's
Okay,
that.
so she laid it low down, he enforce it.
Right.
Yeah, I'll say shit 3
Well, I mean,
times. They don't
but
listen.
he's
All you
that.
need to
That's
say
Right.
is,
that's
all
what
he
it
needs to say is,
Right.
yo.
Yup.
That's it.
They know. What? Say it again. What is it?
Yo.
All you do is go, yo. They already know.
Yo, why she sound like you?
Mommy.
Yo, why she sound like that? Say that yo again.
Yo.
That's a fact, though.
Yo.
Okay.
Yo.
Oh my
All
God.
it take, man.
You like, yo, yup.
Shock their nervous system a little bit.
Right.
That's all you need.
All right.
Yo.
All right. I'm the fun parent. Fine.
Of course.
Yay.
Who suggested the baby's name?
Oh.
You.
You.
Oh,
You.
come on now.
Koza suggested the baby's
It was
name.
Koza. It was
DJ Kozavius
It was Koza.
chewing it
It's
up.
Koza option
You
up
can't
there,
even
option
say it
C.
right.
Right.
Right, put Buzz Lightyear
But-
for this
Buzz
one.
Lightyear. Clearly, I
Buzz
suggested
Lightyear.
the
Chat,
baby's
you
name.
know, chat saying.
Let's see.
Koza.
Yep, Koza. Yes. See, look. It wasn't
Oh,
me.
Xavier's, okay.
Them confirming him is crazy.
Yes.
Chat confirming it is wild.
This is wild,
I'm
bro.
telling you.
This is putting out there for my man CJ that chat confirmed.
Yo,
Let's
chat.
Let's put it out there for my man.
Wait, someone
Check
said
confirmed.
broke the
Alright.
argue
Who
with
would
the
be more
ladies.
patient?
The mom.
Damn.
The mom.
Mom.
The mom, 100%.
Mhm. He put himself, but it's me.
You put yourself.
You're more
None of
patient?
them.
You honestly
y'all.
think you're more
I
patient?
am more patient.
You are.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Galaxy Storms.
Oh,
You're more patient?
Yes.
You think so?
I know so. Dealing with you?
You lie. Why you laughing?
Dealing with you, babe.
So, all right, so wait, because everybody's saying stuff.
CJ,
Hold on,
you
hold
all
on.
lie.
Koza, chat
One
say
mic,
me.
one mic.
Wait, real quick. Everybody is saying she's the more patient. How about you ask the kids?
The kids gonna be on your side.
No,
No,
why
know
would you
that.
do- it-
Y'all both don't have no patience.
No, he said both of them.
Yes, you
Neither one of y'all.
You see what Koza said? Koza said CJ more understanding, but Monet mad patient. See?
this is a good one right here.
See?
This is a good one right here.
See?
Daddy.
Chat said me though.
So
I'm
wait,
just
Mom,
saying.
she said mom.
Who's more patient,
She
little
said-
mamas?
Oh shit.
Honestly,
Crazy work.
me, I'm more patient.
Yes.
What makes you say that?
None of y'all patient. I'm just gonna say that.
She's standing on
I'm trying to think about it.
My POV, y'all.
See,
both
look,
are patient.
also, low-key, CJ too childish to be patient. Thank you.
Yes.
Right.
That's why you ain't the patient
No.
one.
Yo,
You just said yes. You just said yes.
He said yes.
No. You just said yes. You just said yes.
I'm with you.
He said yes.
Let me down.
I'm more patient.
That's
I'm way more
crazy.
patient.
Chat
no,
already
wait
said
a
it to
minute.
me.
We gotta get a vote for that.
Yes, thank you, chat.
Vote
Put
for
that in
that.
the chat.
But
Poll in
Put
chat.
a poll in chat. All right.
Yes.
what am I looking at?
Mad Dog, what up, Mad Dog? Jump the ball. Jump the ball for Mad Dog. Mad Dog, it is the Game Lounge Baby Shower. You probably had a good time. We actually are doing mommy or daddy. So basically we're guessing to say who said it first or whom the sentence fits more. So currently right now we're on who will be more patient. So I say I'm more patient as a parent,
No.
but Monet says that she's more patient.
Put even chat said me.
I
The
agree
chat
with
is even
Even
saying
chat
it.
said me.
So
Thank
right
you,
now I'm
I
gonna do a
agree.
poll, Mad
And I
Dog,
agree.
Man Dog.
I agree.
Thank you. See, he agreed back there.
Damn.
Mhm.
He on my side.
Yes.
All right.
Double down on it.
Yep.
Clock it.
Pack it.
Clock it.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm more
Yeah.
patient.
No, the camera says
Damn, what's up with the keyboard?
Why he saying it like that?
Right.
You should left these
Like a
shit
child vote that just.
Right. Yo, he is stupid. You is stupid shit. Wow. He read it how it was written though.
That shit put his hands up too.
There was a lowercase W, uppercase H, like damn, nigga. Yeah.
Right.
Caps was on. Caps was on.
In the wrong places.
Right.
All the
Wrong
wrong places.
places.
Start the poll. Let's see.
Start the poll. Put a poll up, chat. So it's a 1 minute poll. Who's more patient, Monet or me? And don't be mean. Understand that I am very
Yes,
patient.
Dragon, we see you.
You're not patient.
Let's let
The proof is in the chat.
The proof is in chat. Caps
Stop,
equal
boy.
no patience. Damn.
Damn.
Damn, CJ.
Damn, son, they against you today.
Damn, it's rough.
Welcome
Let's
to
see
my
what Chad
world.
said.
It's rough.
Welcome to
Nigga
my
said,
world.
welcome to my world.
So
Nobody ain't
the poll is up, y'all. The poll is up. Put y'all votes in. Put y'all votes in.
Me.
Daddy.
They say both of y'all is no one patient.
Yeah,
That's the oldest
they
daughter.
they standing on it.
Yeah, she was standing on business.
She's standing on
That's
business.
because with her.
They said we gonna agree with the firstborn.
Jesus Christ.
Okay, we got 2 Monet.
Two Monet.
Uh-huh.
Damn, nobody fix CJ.
Nobody ain't
They're
picked me.
just
Because
Against
the
you.
Yeah.
truth is me.
Nobody ain't picking me.
Yeah,
No,
me.
it's not yet.
I pick you, Daddy.
Monet got to deliver the kid, brother. That's top tier
For real.
patience.
Thank you.
For real.
Jesus Christ.
Thank
so
you.
unfair to say. That is so unfair. It's
Shut
a-
up back there.
That's when you
Excuse me,
deliver,
sir.
Baby, that's when you can
I
talk.
I can never do it.
Okay,
Right.
Get yourself right.
I got top tier patience because I had to take her out, wine and dine her, take my
Wine and
time,
dine.
and get months down the line for us to even, get
Damn
there.
right, CJ.
So that's patience and
No, it ain't. No, it
You
ain't.
know why he got patience?
Yes, it is.
You don't even know.
That's
Shut up,
basic.
Nicole.
What?
You wasn't even born yet, Nicole. What are you
Wine
talking
and dine
about?
is crazy.
You gotta wine and dine.
Right.
You know how much patience.
All right.
Next question.
Next question.
You go to the
Dad.
side.
Who will want
You
another
want to
baby
side over there?
first?
None of y'all should.
Look at
See,
the
dad.
this number 3.
I don't know
Dad.
about that one.
This number
Who
3.
will want another baby first? Chat, what do y'all think?
This is-
No one.
This is
DAD.
Tres Mijote.
No
Y'all should not
one.
want
You have to
another
choose one or the other.
Dad.
Y'all should have
Mom.
another one. Y'all shouldn't.
You think Mama want another baby?
Mom.
You think I would want another baby?
Yes, you
Nah.
have one
You wanna
boy.
go get a-
You have 2 of us. You need 2 boys. Think about
What?
it.
You
Wow, you
wowing.
calculating.
Ask what
Right.
you think.
That's a calculated
Who
answer.
you think would want another baby first?
None of y'all.
Mom.
Probably you.
Mom.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm saying
Mom.
Probably another-
I
probably
don't
another
know.
boy.
See what
I
Chad
don't
saying.
know on that.
Mom.
I'll probably say another boy for you.
CJ gonna be there with the baseball glove. Yes, yes I am.
I'm dead.
That I'm gonna just have the baseball glove, a hockey stick, a
Every
basketball,
sport.
everything. I'm gonna have some darts.
Badminton.
Yeah, everything.
Badminton is
Just
crazy.
I'm
everything,
going to be
bro.
active.
They think it's you.
Think it's me? Y'all think it's me
I
too?
don't know. I
I'm
really
very
don't know.
active.
It shouldn't be none of
household.
y'all.
Why she put me?
That's number 4.
The answer's
Yeah.
no.
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly.
Yeah,
None
there
of
you
y'all.
go. That makes
None
sense.
of y'all.
No.
None
The
of
answer's
y'all.
no.
That's what you said, Booty.
That's it.
Oh,
Yeah.
it's
You
no.
say no. Yeah, no.
You
The
have
answer's
2
no.
girls already. Y'all
Who want another baby? Either one of them. No more, right?
We don't exist.
Not right now.
now.
No,
No,
can I
we-
give birth to this one first?
We tapped out?
This family
Yeah, we
edition
tapped out.
today.
Yep.
We're not family.
Twins.
The door. The door.
She said twins. What if
Okay.
I give birth to these 2 babies?
So, chat, that was Mommy or Daddy. That was an amazing game. Appreciate your participation. We got more games. Let's turn the page. This is
Oh.
Unscramble.
I'm too drunk for this. We can't.
Yeah, I am.
What
too.
the
I'm
Or,
trying to
as we
look.
call it, Stromblay.
That's pacifier.
Yeah, that is
Pacifier.
So the first one you would say is pacifier?
Yeah, pacifier.
So let me get chat involved. Chat. Obviously, you guys can play
Oh, I
too.
know the second
Hey,
one.
no,
You're
no
pretty much
cheating, no
going to
cheating.
look on the left side and see what the word is and try to guess it on the right side. As the video goes through, the names of it will unscramble itself.
I know what the last one is.
I know what the third one is.
No, y'all
Okay.
cheating. See,
I know what the last one is.
I know what
Okay,
the fourth
let's
one is.
let's go one by one.
I know what the fifth one is.
We're gonna go one by one.
Right.
And the
That's
sixth
why
one?
you do it one by one. They
Let's go
cheating,
one
baby.
by one. CJ doing the math like Rain Man crying. Leave me alone, Kosa. Leave me alone. So first one is what? What I say the first one is?
Pacifier.
Pacifier?
Pacifier.
We can all agree pacifier for the first one?
Yes.
All right. Kosa said that was a jib, not a pacifier. That's what they called it. Jibs.
What's the second one?
So
Trolley.
what's pacifier is the first one?
That's not what that
LOL
is.
Torres.
I know what it is. I
LOL.
think.
LOL Torres. It's not funny.
Toiletries.
Is that stroller?
Oh, stroller.
That's
Stroller.
what
You say
I'm-
stroller?
I'm
Yeah.
all the way
Stroller.
around.
What you say was?
I said toiletries. That was
Wow,
the way
toiletries is crazy.
That's how I was
That's too
thinking.
many R's.
Toiletries.
I was thinking the same
Explain
thing.
already.
That's too many R's in there for me.
So
I got fucked up.
So as say stroller, we agree with that?
Yep.
Yeah, you sound smart.
Stroller.
I
What's
know
the,
this one.
what's the, you said you know the third one?
Yeah.
Yes.
Nursery.
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 Nursery?
Yes.
Nursery's the third
Nah, that's
one?
Nerese.
Nursery.
Nerese.
Nurse. Nursery.
I know the
It's
next
the
one.
fourth
It's
one.
nursery.
Is it big?
We in
Crib.
the
No,
crib.
it's a crib.
Crib.
You said
Uh,
big?
crib as
No,
in house.
crib.
The baby crib.
What's
It's
a
baby
bed?
shower stuff. So
Oh,
it's gotta
I
be
thought
crib.
we mean crib.
Crib.
What's up
Baby
with my
got a
crib?
Yeah. I
Same
mean,
thing, same
you know,
spelling.
flip the B upside down, right?
Crib.
This one.
We in the crib, y'all.
So we're gonna say 4 is crib. All right.
Swaddle, baby. Crib.
Number 5.
Swaddle.
Swaddle.
Good job, booty butt.
All right.
I'm gonna give him a baby bottle.
Diaper.
Yeah.
6.
Diaper.
Why? Diaper.
Diaper.
Yes.
No, that's a peer.
So now I'm not gonna be changing. So now I'm not gonna be changing.
That's a peer.
So now I'm not gonna
7.
be changing. What is that?
Rattle.
Tetris.
Waddle.
Rattle.
Rattle.
I love
Rattle.
Rattle, yeah.
Rattle.
Tetris.
Where do you see it? That's not no damn Tetris.
Tetris is crazy. It's such a Tetris.
Onesie.
Onesie.
Oh,
It's
Not
smart.
Inois.
Onesie. Onesie.
I did not know what that was.
Inois.
That's what I thought it
The
was.
night. What's that one?
Gate? No.
Hint Gete.
It's
Now that one's gonna fuck you up.
It's winch.
What the fuck is that?
Oh.
Yeah, I have no
Which
idea.
one? The last one? I know the
The
last
one
one.
before the last
The
one.
second to last one.
Oh, the last one.
Yeah.
They didn't even try with the letter.
That's
Yeah,
what
last one. It was just.
It is. You got tired. You got tired. What's this one? Hold on.
What's the second to last one, y'all? What's the second to last one? Galaxy said Tetris.
I want to say.
You laughing at
I
me.
want to say.
I don't
Can I
know.
use ChatGPT?
Thingy.
Damn.
Thingy.
You gave up?
Oh,
No,
Hold on.
Night.
I gave up.
90?
no, we didn't get up.
90?
Wait, 90, 99.
Night night?
Nightlight.
Nighty
Ain't
night.
no L in there, baby. For night.
Night light.
There's no L.
99.
Nighty's a word?
Hint Gete.
I don't know.
Yeah,
I have no idea.
You give up on that one?
Yes.
Give me a hint.
You ain't gonna
Maybe
get
tidy?
it.
I'm thinking.
Wait.
Goddamn it, I'm thinking.
I don't know.
You're not gonna
Not
get
tidy.
it.
What is it?
Teething.
Oh, wow.
Oh,
the
the E's. They did the
Oh,
E's.
that
well.
makes sense.
So what happened with the last one? You
They
why
mixed
didn't
up
you say
E's
that for
well.
the last one? You should have said
Some
that for
people
the
know the
last
last one.
That was easy.
Just welcome all home.
Welcome
man.
home.
Last
Yeah.
one? The last
Welcome
The last one's welcome home. Welcome the boy home.
Welcome home.
That's
Only
a,
two
You
emos.
gotta clap that up.
that's a good one to bring back, right?
Only two emos.
Welcome home. That's the best one right there. Come on, my boy. Welcome home. Come on.
No, not yet. Don't rush
All
him
right,
out.
not yet. You're 32 right now. You're 32 right now. You gotta get your 40.
Eat that boy.
You gotta get your 40 acres and a mule.
That damn right.
Damn right.
Damn.
Yes, indeed.
Next.
Wait,
Chat, that was amazing.
Okay.
Great combos, chat. Thank you all for playing. And that was such an amazing game. Let's get GK.
Yes,
Mr.
sir.
200, you have a game for us?
Yes, I do.
Alrighty. Let's find the game.
Yes.
Let's find the
Let's
game
go ahead,
for
find
us.
the game.
Right
Find
there,
the
yeah?
game,
Yep.
game.
Nah, I was hard making this.
Damn.
Hey, but all the time, every time, every Sunday.
It was by accident.
Every single
do this
Sunday,
every Sunday?
Monday, every single Sunday.
Every time I try to stop it, and it just keeps doing it. Every time.
It was by accident.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm gonna say, one of the games you made earlier is very similar.
Yes.
So we're gonna see some of the same people.
Okay.
But at least for the first half.
Okay.
Let me close my eyes because I can't see
I just hit the space bar.
Oh, okay.
You're good.
But y'all gotta watch the good edits.
Good at it.
I
Good
put
at
work. I
it.
put working on this.
All
Boy,
right.
nice.
Oh wait, hold on. Let's
That
get.
boy, nice.
Look, I'm trying not
Jesus.
to. I'm trying to stop
You
it.
just hovering over.
I
the-
swear to God, it's right,
You're
bro.
literally hovering
I'm not
over
looking
the-
until it's done.
Hovering over the answers. I get it.
I'm trying. I'm trying to just move up a
I
little
saw
bit.
Dory.
CJ tried to bring papaya home.
I saw Jack. I saw Dory.
Yeah, we see all of it.
Like,
Most of it.
All right. So the first half is name that baby.
Name that baby.
So I want the kids to answer. So I made it real easy.
All right, sis, for y'all.
So for the kids.
So adults, shut up.
Okay.
that includes
Watch,
you.
watch the edit. Watch the edit. Watch the edit.
Shut up, Nicole. You an adult?
Baby.
Oh, like, hey.
That's the baby.
Shut
Maggie.
Maggie.
Good job.
Maggie.
Maggie.
Wait a
You had
minute.
to put the OG up there.
Press the space bar.
First.
I gotta get the
Oh.
chat back in
Oh,
real quick.
brother.
I'm gonna go up the side. Okay.
Yeah,
Daddy.
please.
Daddy shit.
See? See? Yep.
Don't worry about
Who's
me
that?
fucked up, baby.
I don't know.
Tommy
what?
Pickles.
Yep.
Yeah, it's the first and last
Last name
name.
Pickles, nigga, you had a horrible one.
Timothy Pickles.
Fuck.
She ain't playing.
She giving away governments too.
Right.
First and last name. Who's that?
Baby Hercules.
Dang,
Oh,
girl.
shit.
I don't know
Period.
what
It's
Baby
all right.
Hercules.
You didn't know all of them. Listen.
My parents put her
I
on
thought I was
game.
It's
gonna
the-
cook him on that one already.
You forgot who her parents is?
Say
I thought I
how
was
That
Disneyland.
I'm gonna say that's a Disney household game.
Beneath y'all, they hate the station at the crib.
Yeah.
Stop watching Disney all day. You know?
They got a whole TV in their room. They be on that shit, bro.
They got Disney in there.
They got Disney plus.
Yeah.
Oh, she's killing it.
Like, damn.
Another one.
You got the one with the ads.
Hold on, hold on.
Yeah,
no
Right.
Let me,
No
let me,
ads, nothing. They
Just
get
straight
free
movie.
I just want to scoot up. I'm just trying, look, I'm literally just trying to scoot up.
Closed captions.
I still don't
All
trust
right.
your fingers. Okay.
4K at high def. Like, damn, son.
Hercules.
Oh, you already said it.
Oh,
She
Well,
said
that's
that's
the answer.
the
That's
answer.
the answer.
Yeah, that's the answer.
You didn't do it for the other two. That's
The
fine.
babe. Jack Jack.
Come on.
Jack,
we all
Jack.
know
Good
Jack.
job.
Jack.
Ryan, quick with it.
Jack from The Incredibles.
Yeah.
Oh, I know
Baby
who that
Tarzan.
is.
Baby
I know who that
Tarzan.
is.
Yeah,
Oh,
damn,
yeah.
Mariah.
Baby
That was
Tarzan.
the
Would
hitter
you make
right
it a
there.
little harder?
I thought that was the hitter.
Damn.
That was the
Oh.
quick.
I thought I was
They
going
got-
to
they
slap
watch
with
Disney.
that one.
Too
right
quick,
there.
actually.
I said, they don't know Baby Tarzan.
Damn, man.
I know my nose.
My bad.
It's tough.
Couldn't make it a little harder?
You know what I'm saying?
I knew that one.
Yep,
Oonga
Tarzan.
Tarzan.
The name is under. Come on, man.
Boss
Boss baby.
Okay,
See,
all
you
right,
gotta
all
quit.
right.
That's a
Good
grown
job.
man.
What's his name? What's his name?
Timothy. Oh wait, no, Theodore. Theodore.
Theodore.
That's
You
his
gonna
name for
press the
real?
button.
Shut up.
That's
I'm gonna press the
crazy if you got that because I didn't know
Shut
his
up.
name.
I didn't even know. I didn't even know you got it.
It is
Theodore!
Templeton Jr.
He got his real name. That's crazy,
Yeah, you
dude.
see why he need to be C.J. Cosavius Jr. the third? You see why?
That's why.
Oh
my God.
Look at that.
Right.
Hold on. Support. Yep. All right.
What
Uh-oh.
did
Now this
that?
one,
I don't even
you're
know
gonna
who
see
that
the
is.
I'm out on
picture.
this one.
Who is that?
Mariah too. I'm
They're all celebrities.
I know who that is.
Michael
Oh,
Jackson.
Elijah Wood.
Elijah Wood.
Okay.
You said Michael Jackson?
Michael Jackson. Nice.
Get out of here.
I was
That was a
He
good
is
guess. That was a good guess. That was a good guess.
I don't know.
That's Elijah
It was
Wood.
missing teeth.
You know who that is?
Adults are playing too.
I would
That's
say,
Elijah. That's Elijah Wood.
Elijah Wood.
Okay. Yeah.
thought-
I can see
thought it was
Elijah
Kirk-
Wood.
I thought it was Kirk Cameron.
Let's see who it is.
Let's see what
He would
Chat's
what?
saying.
I don't know.
Chat.
I thought it was Kirk
Chat.
You
Cameron.
said Kirk. I thought it was never mind.
Who said
MJ.
my
I
MJ?
hate you.
My little
Yeah,
mama.
she got these
Of course, you
answers.
said Michael Jackson.
No, I said
No,
Yes.
Mariah Wood. Right.
I'm going with Kirk
We're a couple
Cameron.
shades away from young Michael. Yeah.
I'm going
Young
with
Michael.
Kirk Cameron.
Kirk Cameron. Okay.
Let's see. That's Elijah Wood. Yep.
Why'd you pick that?
That's Elijah Wood.
That picture is crazy.
Why'd you
That's
choose
what came
that?
up, bro. Like, did you go and search all over the place?
Why you so
How you gonna
Did you
search
go
all
and
over
look
the
for all
place
of
with
this
it?
I'm
shit?
saying- I'm
Over here
saying-
Who's that?
criticizing.
I know that face.
Jay-Z.
That's Jay-Z.
Jay-Z.
That's my boy.
First of all,
I'm that big ass forehead.
yeah.
No facts.
Bro spitting bars right now.
Grown man baby, bro.
Oh, last man, baby. Nigga look 40. He just came out the womb.
I gotta go blow my nose, okay?
How, bro?
So I'll hit the space
Yeah,
button.
just hit the space.
Grown
button.
man.
I like girls. Niggas say I got 99 problems.
Jay-Z.
Damn.
Me looking
Right, got
old
the,
as
same,
well.
got the same forehead. Like,
Nigga ass
Bro look exactly. Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
who's that?
Who that? Who
Right.
that?
He said,
Wait till y'all see who that is right there.
Raven Simone. I don't know.
Raven Simone.
Wait
is
till y'all
crazy.
see who that is right there.
No.
I'm right here.
I don't know these
Hey.
people.
that means you don't need it.
Somebody pull up chat.
I think it's my.
Let me see what chat's saying.
Yeah, because you left the mouse all the way over there.
You know,
I don't know if that's a boy or a girl, to be
It
honest.
looks like a boy.
I said,
Leave
yeah.
it.
I-
Leave it. Leave it.
I said, yeah, but.
Maybe his faces be changing sometimes.
Yeah. It's great.
They get
This is
darker,
a
they
boy
get
or girl?
lighter.
Y'all give up?
I'll
It's a
give
boy.
y'all a hint. It's
It's
a
a boy
boy.
or
It's a
girl?
boy.
Is that
Oh,
Jaden?
boy.
That's not Jaden. That's not Jaden, right? Jaden
That
Smith.
looks like
I'm bugging.
Jaden
That's
Smith.
not Jaden Smith.
no.
I was
who's
going to say
that?
Jaden Yuki.
Jaden Yuki. Hold on,
That
boy.
was Jaden Yuki.
I could go
Hold
yet.
on, yeah, don't do it.
Who is that?
Coulter said that's Cardi.
Oh damn.
I'm weak.
Playboy Cardi?
Who is it?
It could be Playboy Cardi. I don't think you know Playboy Cardi, so it can't be up there.
He said Baby Z look like he behind on rent. That's crazy.
Is that
I don't know who that
Blueface?
is.
That Blueface?
That's not
Nah.
That's not
Might
Childish
be.
Gambino, right?
Childish Gambino?
Blueface?
Childish Gambino?
I'm going with
He look like
Blueface.
He got a weird
Press
face.
his
You can see his
face
face.
button.
No, it's
This
not
one-
time.
this
Go
one
ahead,
messy
do
out
this.
loud.
He got that look.
Nah,
It's
it's
not
Do the
me.
thing one more time.
Hell
Hit now.
Alright, give us a profession, at least.
I hit.
Ah, okay. That's
Yeah,
a damn-
y'all give up?
That's a damn no.
Wait, wait,
Actually,
wait.
ask a good question.
Yeah,
though.
yeah.
Singer.
Singer. Usher.
Nah.
Okay, you say Usher. Okay.
Oh, okay.
Now I'm looking at it. That doesn't
I'ma
look
say
Like
like
an
Usher.
R&B singer?
I'm gonna say
You
Usher.
want too much now.
I can't say R&B singer.
You want too much.
Why?
You want his social security
That's
number?
what
Social Security
Right.
number is
You
crazy.
want to know his last hit?
Damn. Nigga, so what was his last
That's
song?
Usher.
Usher?
That don't look like
It's
Usher,
giving
low-key.
Usher.
That's the
Yeah.
Let It Burn.
Okay, see who it is.
Who is it? Is it Usher? That'd be funny.
What y'all say?
Told you.
That is Usher.
I
Damn,
told
Usher.
you.
What?
Usher.
How the hell?
It's
Yeah.
Usher.
Mhm.
Damn, GG.
Monet got future sight or something.
Usher.
Damn.
That's
John Legend.
Right, John
Yes.
Legend.
Yes.
John Legend.
John
Baby,
Legend.
look, yo.
If you look at his face,
He
he
said,
looks like John Legend.
Ordinary
Oh, my
people. He like this nigga ordinary people
CJ,
right
come see
now.
who this is right here.
I'm coming.
Matter of fact, Monet, let's see this. See the one before.
Do I just press back on this?
Wait.
Wait,
Yeah,
wait.
yeah.
Who that is?
Who that is, CJ?
Yo, let Monet control it because she's doing a better job.
Right.
Let me
CJ,
control
I
it.
think we need to
He
give
couldn't-
Monet
she
the
couldn't do
keyboard.
that.
I'd be more than happy to hire
You
this.
want it?
I don't want to do this. I do this because we have no choice.
Yeah, let me do
I
it.
didn't get no options.
We didn't get no options. We don't have
Right,
the
I
money
sit-
right now
I sit in the back.
to hire people.
Who do you think that is?
I give you the same hint I give everybody else. Singer.
Male.
Usher.
Damn.
I think he heard us.
Yeah.
Nah, here's at the door. Here's the man at the door.
He heard us.
Nah. Didn't.
Okay, so
Who
who's this
that?
guy?
Give it a.
How you pull up chat,
CJ?
CJ?
You gotta use the mouse for it.
Yeah, he's a mouse.
So pull up chat.
Can you pull up chat?
But they're gonna tell me who this is.
Oh, you wanna guess
yeah,
it first?
Yeah, take a guess, yeah.
Yeah, he got one right.
So put your guess in.
This
Look a little Asian baby.
crazy
Damn.
word.
But it's
Right.
not
Because he
Asian.
cheeky
Baby.
eyed. Goddamn.
But it's not. It's
You gonna
not
be shocked
Asian.
when you know what it
It's
is.
not Asian
It's not
baby.
Asian, it's Korean.
Yeah, it's Korean. Singapore. Okay.
Taiwan.
Bro look like
Happy
a
ass baby.
bro look like a
Happy.
black Japanese person.
Yeah.
Like a soccer player
If I had to take a shot,
or UFC fighter.
Bruno Mars.
Mm-mm.
What the
no.
fudge? That's a whole different.
Bro,
Right.
bro,
Not even
bro,
the
part-
same
you on a
race.
part of Earth.
Bruno Mars got a whole square head.
Again.
Right.
Again.
Bruno Mars'
Okay.
If it's
head.
shade.
Bruno
No,
Mars'
Bruno
head
Mars
is
is kind of that
square.
shade.
And how do you think it was a singer?
That's something you give up because you're gonna be like,
Why would you
oh,
think
yeah.
it was a singer?
He not gonna get it.
Yeah.
It's a singer.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Why would you think it was? What the?
What did you think? What did you think the baby was?
CJ the DJ.
He's a single.
It's a singer.
You're not gonna get it though.
The DJ.
No, I'm not.
But this baby happy as shit though.
Pull up chat. You
Uh,
give up?
I'm gonna pull up chat.
CJ.
I mean, it's just an ordinary baby.
Right.
We're just so high.
John Legend.
He just
just
said ordinary baby.
We're just
Yeah,
so
you ain't
high.
just not-
Just
you
give
ain't
this
catch
bitch
on.
the green
We're
light.
just
you
so
know?
high.
He ain't catch on to the hint you just
No,
said.
I
So
high. He talk a lot of shit. I don't even know
He
where
said
he's
just
giving
an
his.
Look,
Damn, GG's.
Bruno Mars.
This is
Big
cousin
Dragon said
Uso
John
Boy.
Legend.
Bruno Mars is crazy.
John Legend. Wow.
I got. Let me do it with the space bar.
Yeah, go ahead.
John
That makes
Legend.
sense though.
It looked just like him, son.
Yeah.
Really? I can see it.
You really do have a big ass forehead. I'm not gonna lie.
What the hell?
Adam Sandler.
Right. I was just about to say that. That's
Adam
Adam Sandler.
Sandler.
Is it?
I can't even see
I
that.
was thinking.
Is it?
Who is that?
Michael Rappaport.
I see that.
Who the fuck
I'm
is
giving.
that?
I just give it
Yeah, you see
Adam
how he-
Sandler a
you see
little
how he-
bit.
Adam Sandler? Really?
I was thinking Michael Rappaport or Gary Owens.
First of all, wait a minute.
Yeah.
I see Gary Owens.
Oh,
you know,
Gary
I see Gary
Owens.
You
Owens.
see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It
I
does
see
give
Gary-
I
Gary
see
Owens.
Gary Owens. I don't see Adam
Don't
Sandler.
y'all don't shouldn't be listening to me. I made it.
Let's look at chat.
No, you can't cheat.
Well, who you, well,
Check
this is a
this
He
good
said,
one.
"Let's look at."
Who would you say?
I don't know.
Ed Sheeran?
Say anything,
Ed
baby.
Ed Sheeran.
Ed Sheeran. No, that's not Ginger Kid right there.
It's black and white. That's an old nigga.
What are we
That's a black and white.
That's an old nigga. Damn.
It is.
That
You
ain't no
can
YM,
tell.
baby.
No, it's not. It's not.
There's
Damn.
no pixels in that picture.
No.
God damn.
I don't know these people because it was one before
Put it
me.
in HD.
Could have put a filter on it? Like,
Run it through Gemini.
Alright, we're about to see right now. Let's see who it is. Let's see who
Oh
it
my
is. Let's see who it is.
Wait, bring up chat first.
It is
Adam Sandler.
Wow.
Mariah had that right.
Face now.
See what chat said.
His
See what
nose
chat
looks
said.
so different.
All right,
though.
hold
His
on.
forehead.
His nose looks so different.
Look at the fruit.
He
The
got the
nose
same
looks
look.
so. The nose
Yeah.
looks so different.
A-M.
See, Cole thought it was Gary Owens too.
I
Yeah.
see the Gary Owens though. I ain't gonna lie.
Yeah.
Me too.
I see Gary Owens.
His ears look the same now, low key.
Yeah.
Just like Gary.
The
Owens.
forehead look the same.
Well,
The
all
same
their
big
foreheads look
Square
the
head,
same.
yeah. The square forehead, yeah.
That same smile.
Yeah.
Right, that's what I was saying. They got the same. they
That
got the
smile
same
did not
smile
change,
at
son.
all.
The
The
nose
smile,
different. They don't.
Galaxy said the brother, the smile gave it away for me.
That
Yeah.
nose is so different.
This one is just for shits and giggles.
Stop. Bonus.
What the? Is that
Oh,
Bruno?
this AI?
Is that Bruno?
This guy's
Bruno
AI.
Nicole said Bruno
This
Mars.
is AI.
That's the hangover, baby.
Oh, it is.
It
Oh,
really is,
oh,
though.
it is. It is.
No, no, no,
Oh
no,
my God.
Changing it?
no. No, no, no.
It's the hangover, baby. Oh
Bruno
my God.
Mars or something else. I don't know.
This is the hangover, baby.
That's the baby. He about to get in the car. I heard this. Hit the baby head.
I don't know what this is.
Oh my god.
Oh my
I had
God.
to. I had to. I had to.
Oh my God.
It was too funny. It was too funny.
It's the hangover, baby,
It's
right?
the hangover.
It's the
baby.
hangover,
Oh,
baby.
shit. I'm tired of this.
It's definitely the hangover.
Yeah.
Ah!
That's crazy.
You know what it is? The shades gave it away for me.
Right.
Immediately. Immediately. Half a second.
Man,
That was a good one.
The hangover.
that was really good, Chad. That was really good.
CJ.
It's me, Jesus.
Detroit Calder said that's the baby from Hangover.
Yes, yes.
I knew Calder would do that.
Yo, them some wild boys in that movie. It was
Oh, that was a good
wild.
movie.
It was
That was a good movie.
Yeah, it is. They wild as
No,
hell.
you have no more, right?
That was I made this one.
Okay.
Do some other ones?
I made that one, and then wait, where's Ash at?
I want to measure the belly.
You want to measure the belly?
Got tissue roll?
Yep. Yeah, I got tissue. What you think? We wiping with leaves?
Shut up. Shut
I'm
up.
about to say what kind
No,
of
tissue.
we ran
Well,
out.
tissue
We
to
ran
spare.
out.
Tissue to
I
spare.
use leaves.
medieval?
We ran out.
BK,
We got a
yeah,
guest in
yeah.
the building.
What's up?
Come on in, bro. Come on in.
Medieval shit?
Our guy
Medieval.
BK Dragon is in the building. Drop a
Smooth
bomb for
rock.
BK Dragon.
Niggas say machine tails.
Come on
Get a
in.
wet sponge. Yeah.
Come on in. We don't got no leaves. We don't got no tissue.
Damn.
Come on in. We don't got
Oh,
no
God.
tissue.
Emily said, GK, guess what?
M said, guess what,
Nice.
GK? M said, guess what?
What's up, M?
I work as a line cook.
I should got you crying.
Tissue.
Oh my god. I need to get tissue, right?
Bring your
Yeah,
own tissue.
go get a roll.
This is a pancake.
No cheating.
So right now, chat, we all are going to try to play the game Guess the Belly.
Got my way.
Everybody's going to take their own turn and try to guess the circumference of Monet's belly from
Yo.
back to front.
Mm-hmm.
No cheating. No cheating.
We have measure tape.
No
That's
measurement.
tissue.
That's
That's
cheating.
Yeah, that's cheating.
Cheating.
So what you gotta do Woody, is get tissue and let the tissue rip the tissue where you think it's.
What in the 200
Okay,
BC?
no, you-
Why
gotta wait till you
why
get the tissue.
using leaves, GK? So, GK went to go get some roll of tissue like the old, like a black family would do.
She went to go get
Old
tissue
school.
and close the bathroom door.
Oh, he might take yeah. So GK went in the bathroom and closed the door, so he might be using some of the tissue
Damn.
before he comes back with it. I just hope he doesn't come back with the used ones. That's just the hope here.
Oh, no.
He got the
Be
Chinese
careful,
food too.
drink
Let's
it.
go get more.
Oh, he's back really
You got the
fast,
Chinese
so he
food
didn't use it.
Oh, yeah,
Awesome.
that was Chinese
He
food.
wants to go get more.
All right.
Fresh tissue.
Here we go,
Yeah, and that's a
Chad.
fresh roll.
It's fresh roll.
It's a fresh
Fresh
roll.
roll.
Did you use
Put it down on the floor.
What you doing with
Yeah.
this? Tell nobody. now.
Fresh roll. So,
Yeah.
what we're going to do is have you stand in the middle, right?
Thank you, Kosa.
And
Right, that would
everybody-
be wild.
Everybody's
Second
going to
work.
take turns.
And then that's chicken wings.
The
Take
kids
some-
go first. Nicole, listen to the rules.
Okay, so
This is papayas.
everybody's going to pretty much stand in the
Rules, I don't
middle,
wanna
show
get
off your
excited.
belly. So you're pretty much going to stand in the middle of the room, show off your belly. Let everybody take a look at you. Let Chad take a look at you too.
All right.
After that, everybody's going to take some of the roll based off of how much you guess.
You gotta tell him where to stop. Wherever he
Yeah,
stops is where you
wherever
rip
you
it
tell
at.
to stop is where it's going to stop.
You
Okay?
have to wrap around the belly.
You got to wrap it around.
What
You
is
got
it
to wrap
gonna
all the
be?
way around.
Centimeters or
It has to
inches?
wrap
matter.
all the way
Okay,
around,
doesn't matter.
and it
Pay
has to
attention the
touch
rules.
like this.
The winner who get the closest.
Not like that.
That's what the
Not
actual-
not halfway. It has to touch.
Perfectly.
Like
Perfectly.
actual- Okay.
So take this. I gotta stand up.
Okay.
So let's do this.
Perfect.
I
All
thought,
right,
I
stand
thought,
up.
I thought,
I don't think somebody gonna
You
get
have to
perfect.
get- you
We might
have
get
to-
like
you have to-
whoever
around
get
it.
the
look at it
closest.
and then
Yeah,
guess
whoever
how
get the closest is the winner.
Bro, my
Yeah.
second is crazy.
God.
If you get it perfectly, go play the lottery right now, nigga.
And
You
whoever
gotta give him a side view yet. There you
Yep,
go.
yep.
I'm gonna probably get it because I've been learning.
And then
Thank
spin,
you.
and then spin, and then that's slow.
That's cheating.
Put your arms up. Put your arms up. Put your arms up. There we
She
go.
gonna do a rest
There
nigga?
we go.
Right,
There we go.
right.
Slow. Around. There we go.
All right, I'm sit down
I got a
now.
good idea.
All right, y'all good?
So who going first?
Okay,
Naraya? Nicole?
Oh
Yeah,
my
let
God.
the kids go.
Let the kids
Let
go.
Naraya
Let
go
the
first.
kids go first.
Yeah.
So you let Naraya go first?
You
Okay.
don't gotta stand up though. Just tell Daddy when to stop.
So just tell me when to stop when you think that's enough for mommy's belly. Okay?
Oh,
Keyboard again.
I didn't do it that
Drop
time.
number 2 in like an
Sit
hour.
up.
Like,
What is
Fucking
going
keyboard.
on?
Fuck it. Leave it on the floor.
pass it back here so we can hold it.
Give it to Monet.
I just laid it on the floor.
Give it to more
Okay, start over.
Okay.
Start over.
How many pieces is that? One piece, right? Oh shit, that's one plant.
Okay, here we go.
Ready?
Ready?
Cut me on
Let me
Scott.
know when you want me to stop.
Tell me when you want me to stop.
Sharman? Yeah, Sharman? Yo, we're wasting good
This is
talking
not Sharman.
right now.
Is that Charmin
Stop
Ultra?
it. Stop it.
Yo, can I get the unused?
Stop.
Stop. See
Right there?
Yeah.
Okay, pass it to
All right.
pass it
You
on.
got the good shit.
So now you gotta hold it.
Don't mess up my piece.
Don't
like
mess
that,
it up.
CJ.
Hold on
Don't
to
mess
yours.
up my
Might be
Just
too
hold
CJ,
it.
Yeah, that might be too small.
don't mess up my piece
Hold
like that. I'm
it.
OCD, bro. Don't mess up my piece like that. There's a little piece.
Don't
of
mess
it
up my
off.
piece
No,
like
there's a piece of it. Don't mess up my
I would have said the same thing. I ain't gonna lie.
piece like that.
Yo, you mess up my piece like that, you starting over.
Damn.
Any, okay, little mom, it's your turn, okay?
Tell me to stop.
So
Okay?
here we go.
She said stop.
Stop.
Right there?
Yeah.
I don't know. Somebody get it
It's
directly
right,
on the
yeah.
dot.
It's-
Damn.
Is that one?
Yeah, it's the one at the top.
All right.
Go with construction.
I feel like
Well, they don't be cheating for her.
No, he
Dude,
best he put the
don't-
one under his. He
Nah,
the one on top of his
you
hand is that.
cheating, Monet.
No,
I see what
he
you
cheating
did
my
there.
baby.
You're not trying to cheat the baby.
Look, booty, look.
Monet
This
said
is the
you
whole
did
joint.
that.
Who's next? Who's next?
Hold on to
Monet
that,
don't
hold
be
on to
cheating,
that.
alright?
Have the uncle go next.
Okay.
Yeah,
That's
bro,
not
this
the
is right.
baby,
You
that's
gotta
not the
hold it
baby
right,
no
okay?
more,
Uncle
Monet.
Bro?
Don't mess it up.
Monet,
All right, start
that
it.
ain't the baby no more.
Yeah, shut up.
Uncle broke, Uncle broke.
I see.
Uncle YN? Uncle YN?
Bro, what?
All right, stop.
Right here?
She is not that big, sir.
So you gotta go wherever the line is at.
Gotta find where the line is. Hold on.
Also get an extra.
Right here.
Right there, yeah.
2 inches.
No, you can tell
Extra
CJ,
inches.
he
Wow.
just be ripping.
Come on. Hey, yo.
Come on, man. What the fuck?
You see, I get a couple extra inches. What?
Hey.
Hit the button.
I
Hit
thought
the
you
button.
Hey,
yo.
Behavior something.
Hey,
Family
yo,
show, gang.
stop.
Alright,
He can't
let me
control
go. Let me go.
himself.
Let me
Uncle
go.
number 2.
It's GK go.
He can't control himself.
Hold on. Shh. Not while I'm choosing.
Not what
Uncle number
you
2.
stay too
Just
much.
steal.
Are you
I'm gonna do it this
choosing
time. He blowing his nose. Let me
Okay.
know.
I thought you farted. I must
Get
be
off the camera with
dead.
that nasty shit.
Wait,
Oh,
CJ, did you rip off the
You gotta
picture
focus.
fast?
I'm gonna slow down for you.
Sorry, chat. I don't know what's happening.
It's stuffy.
What is going on? Y'all lost.
Ooh.
Yours is right here.
Too many black people in one
Can we
spot.
talk?
Yo.
Can we go over again?
Too many niggas in one spot. Too many niggas.
Oh, Chad's saying something.
Yeah.
All right.
Let me get that right there.
Who next?
Galaxy said, I want to guess 25 to 27 centimeters.
How the hell can we measure
I'm
that?
gonna be an
Do
auntie.
we
Hold
have
on.
measuring
Ready?
Guess it by tissue
Let me know when you want me
squares.
to stop.
What?
So
Right, man, so how the
No,
hell can we
just use
measure
the
that?
measuring tape on your
12
phone.
squares,
No,
15
hold on.
squares.
Just use the measuring tape on your phone.
Yeah,
hold on,
that's
hold on,
not
hold on.
work.
Man, that's crazy.
I'm a whole text saying that, right?
Right, that's what I'm saying. I've seen you do
Where
it
my
crazy
tissue
shit.
weight?
All right,
I
stop.
just said the radio to
Stop.
the TV.
Yeah.
Cut it out.
Did you put it on the floor?
She said
No.
stop. Hose will be right here.
I got my tissue weight. What's going on here?
Just hold it,
How
boy.
did your tissue get wet?
Right.
Jordy,
What's
you'll go.
going on here?
All right.
I'm getting
This is
mad.
yours.
G can't
Oh,
stop.
damn,
Go,
that's
don't
your
get too
fault.
upset. Hold
It's
on.
yours.
Shh.
Alrighty.
Sure.
I do we need the couches.
I'm done.
Stop. Wait.
You said stop already.
You said stop already.
already.
You can't say stop already.
Okay.
That's cheating.
Ash, you'll go.
Relax. Don't worry about my tissue. That's it.
You
Don't
trying to get more tissue after you fucked up.
Right.
Money. Thank you.
You're welcome.
No, did I say anything?
Come
Don't
on,
no
Ash.
tissue.
Yeah, you was talking the whole time.
No, I did not.
You was talking the whole time. Oh my god. What's happening?
You're a hater, bro.
Damn.
Hate on my tissue.
That's fine.
Right here?
What?
Yeah.
Wait, what?
Damn.
Wow.
You just started.
Wait,
Nigga
what?
don't even care.
Damn.
Ash might,
No,
Ash
you ain't
might
got no
know.
kids.
He saw mine and was like, oh, yeah. Nah,
Let me find out Ash knows something.
Right. This tissue bad thing.
Wait a minute. He sounded confident when he said it, too.
All right, pass that to
BK Dragon, what you think?
There's no way.
He's cheating. He's in the camera.
How does that stop?
Stop. Right there.
First of all,
No,
BK
don't.
Drag, come say what up to the people.
Yes,
Let them know
yes.
you're
All
here.
right, man. Get up.
Pop in, let the people know what's up.
I didn't know.
Fire, honey.
There you go, there you go. Creeping on in, creeping in.
The boy BK Dragon, he in the building.
Yes. Beat him up connoisseur.
You going?
I'll go. I'll go for the shits and giggles of it.
Let me know when to stop.
Unfair advantage.
He said, oh, man, I knew he was going to say something. I knew it.
Yeah, I'm just being
Hold it up.
Unless you just
Oh, yeah,
say
you know I was gonna say.
I knew it. I knew it was coming.
Go ahead.
You got unfair advantage.
Keep,
I'm happy with myself. Yeah, I'm happy with my selection. I think it's perfect.
keep going.
CJ, you doing too much. All that stretching and looking at the
Right,
legs.
how big you think I
Right.
am? Vespucia?
He has an unfair
Right there.
advantage.
Exactly.
I'm happy with my
All
selection, though. I'm not gonna
So the
lie.
kid's going to go first. It's going to go in the order we did it.
All right.
So I got to get up again.
Yep.
All righty.
Get up.
Get on up.
You thought it was a free ride?
All right.
Let's see that. I'm excited to see who got this.
I'm doing it for front.
I got to go over
I'm
there.
just saying, anybody got it exactly on the dot?
I did this much for the front.
Right, yours is
All right,
first.
Naraya.
Yep, so you got to go around, all the way around the body.
Let me see this. I need to see. Yeah.
You got to come back in the,
Yeah, you're not in the shot.
in the shot.
See.
Yep, watch out, little mamas. We go, yeah, watch out, Hello Kitty.
Move over there to daddy.
Let's move over just a little bit.
Am I on the camera?
Yeah, you in the
Yeah,
camera.
Yeah, they can see you.
All right, hold. Wrap
But
yours around.
you got to come over some more. Little mamas, move your feet over here.
A little bit too
A little bit too long.
Too long.
Oh, man.
Huh? Y'all What a way to get out the competition.
Stop screaming.
Yeah, I'm pretty much done too, yeah.
I accidentally missed my
It's okay.
CJ's
I have
out
to
of it
unwrap
already.
it
You
anyway.
try.
Damn.
Uh,
What you
Next.
screaming for?
I low key wanted to get a piece of my
Next.
nose.
Oh, wait.
I want
Wait, wait,
That don't
wait,
look so
wait.
bad, though.
I'm about to take some of his home. I ain't gonna lie.
Booty?
Oh,
Yo,
shit.
what?
Oh, wait. There's something behind you.
Yeah,
There's something behind you. It's
fix
loose.
it right.
It's
Fix
loose.
it right. Yeah, fix it right. Loose.
Oh.
Fix it right, CJ.
No, it's loose. No, it's loose. There you go. Make it. You're right. A little bit more
It's
tighter.
still gonna fit. That is not loose. It
It's
still
tissue.
fits.
That's perfect.
It's fit.
Yeah,
Good job, good
that's
job.
a- that's a-
Good job.
I got it.
Good job. Good job.
You got it, Booty. You got it. So hold it.
So hold it.
Nicole, you number one.
Your turn.
Unfair advantage.
I lost. I know I did.
Unfair advantage. She's
Not
in
trying
there
to
already.
play
Yeah,
that
it's
baby
all-
acting like she
Yo,
wrong.
unfair advantage. She's in there
No,
already.
she said,
Wait, how many is it?
Just
I
hold
was,
it, Naraya.
I was trying to take something to blow my nose. I just needed this
Nah,
part right
get
here.
out of here.
Yeah, you're right.
Get out of here.
I was trying to blow my nose with this
Shama,
part.
Shama.
Wait, how y'all gonna
It's too
skip?
much
He
already.
don't
It's too
count.
much.
He said he don't
Damn,
count.
too much. Uncle.
CJ
Yeah,
don't
grab
count.
it.
And he lost.
That shit not gonna fit.
Rap is a-
Yeah, unfair advantage.
Lost.
I ain't too far off.
A little
either,
bit
though.
too
I
long.
ain't too.
She got-
A
I'm
little
number
bit
two.
too long.
I'm number 2 in that.
Yeah.
Yeah, show chat.
It's
Show
her,
chat.
it's her and then you.
A
Damn it,
little
I
bit
know
too
my
long,
belly
Dave.
counts. Goddamn it.
Number 2 is just the first loser.
Shut up. You ain't even on the spectrum. Get out of here.
I'm a little.
What is your
Why you
tissue?
mad?
I don't know.
I'm
It's
worried.
weird.
Number
They
two
give me
is the
weird
first
shit.
It's moist.
Yes, real moist.
You got a moist towel
Yeah.
back here.
Right.
Whoa,
Grab that,
Oh,
TJ.
yeah, my
I
shit
got
done.
it.
Well, you thought it was
Way
triplets,
too
bro?
Oh,
much.
yeah, my shit done.
Wow.
Oh, yeah, my shit done.
That's how I
I'm
like
cooked.
it.
Yeah,
I'm
You
cooked.
bugging.
That's how I
I'm
like
fucking
him.
cooked.
I already know I'm cooked too. It's over.
I know no
Let's
one.
go.
Don't ask me shit.
So what we supposed to do with
Wow.
all this
Yeah,
shit?
just
Damn.
give it back. Just give it back.
Just give it back.
That was for the 9 month.
Don't even try it.
The 9K chick.
Play with
Take this
toilet
stuff-
That was for
paper.
the 9K chick. Here we go.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Grab-
this is though
grab-
said
grab
so
this.
about
It's a
11 to
right, it's a right,
13
CJ.
squares.
Switch to right, CJ. Don't rip it.
Oh,
Right
wait.
there.
Switch to right, CJ.
Oh.
Just right there.
All right, so
Mine's is closer
Get that in
though.
the shot.
wait, you know.
Oh, we made it.
Don't hold
All
on.
right,
Number
that's it.
2.
Get that in the shot.
Mine's is better
Get
than
that in the
his.
shot. Get that in the shot.
Nah, get out of
Come on,
here.
get over, get over, CJ. Get over.
Yeah, get on there.
Baby, the teacher.
Get in the shot.
This was like a little bit over here.
Get the shot, get the shot, get the shot. Hold it down.
Why I didn't get that?
Because you didn't get it.
Why I ain't get all of that? Yo, look at you get. I ain't get all that.
Oh my God.
I'm out.
Yeah, yours too short.
He wiped his head a little bit with it.
Where yours at?
Trinity, jump above my guy Trinity.
Yo, Trini, what up?
What's up, bro?
Where you at, man?
Damn, man.
Yeah, Ash is too short.
Y'all
we
said,
go
bro,
with
she's
that,
not
bro.
that big. Goddamn, brother.
So Nicole is first, baby. You
I'm
on
second.
first.
I'm second.
No, you're
I'm
third.
first.
I'm second.
No,
No,
You first.
No, she's
Yep,
first. He's
look,
second.
look, look,
You're
look,
third.
look.
You knew him
You
wrong.
lost.
Give him 5, he
You
first.
first, you won. Good job.
Yeah, you won. Good job.
Look, don't forget him.
Yeah,
too.
but-
Now you know how it feels when somebody trying to tap you up.
Okay, stop. Okay, shoot this stop.
I'm six, so I'm number 2.
Yo,
Yes.
I'm gonna get to
Wait,
the-
how many squares was it?
Somebody at the door?
He doesn't- yeah.
What door?
I can tell how many squares
Okay,
is
okay.
it.
Oh, he said, I'm here, man. I'm here, man. Yo, that was too funny. That was too funny. Oh, GK.
Yeah.
Since we got balloons right here, we got the game to play.
What's the game?
Game is, you got to put the balloon under your shirt, and you got to tie your shoe
I gotta untie mine right now.
Is it?
without
I
letting
can
the,
do that.
without letting the balloon pop.
That's easy.
Mine is already tied, and I'm
Is it?
untying
Okay.
it right now.
So, chat, we're gonna play a game, another game.
That's
when
easy work.
when Monet comes back and
I
when Trini comes in. The game is Prego tie your shoe. You gotta take one of the balloons back here, tuck it up under your shirt, and you gotta lean over and tie both your shoes without popping
Which
the balloon.
balloon though?
My shoes were already tied, and I
already put the
untied
glue on.
them
Y'all can't
just
pick this
now.
up. There's
Who's that?
no
No,
one
that
on
which
this
one out of these
So
three?
that's automatic. I was the one who won the first
Okay,
game.
Not the big ass one over there. Not the big ass one.
Well,
I can probably get it done.
obviously.
It's the same balloon. Everybody got the
I
same
mean,
balloon.
if you got a big enough shirt, the
Unless
big
it
ass
pops.
one over there.
I was the one who win.
I ain't got no laces, so I want it ready.
That's crazy. I ain't got no laces either.
I gotta untie this.
Make sure it doesn't.
comedy right there. That's comedy.
Tie these shits together. What the hell?
We got more balloons in a bag over there. Hold on, Chad. We're gonna get the balloons and everything together. So you're gonna see a bunch
This
of
one
walking
came
around right now.
Oh, there's one right here.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So hold on to it.
Okay.
That's your balloon.
There was motion detected at your front door.
Chat. At my front door, right? Yeah.
Not the same size balloon.
Well, we got the
They all got the
balloon
damn same
pump right
size.
here. We can blow up some more.
I ain't gonna lie, if you got a tight ass shirt, it's up.
Where's the balloon blower?
It's up. You got a tight ass shirt.
Where'd you go?
I can be first this
You
time.
can be first? Okay.
Yeah.
What the fuck?
Mira mi fungo.
Yeah, he got out there.
I was the one who won.
Next time here.
I
Wrong
think you
crib,
was in the
gang.
wrong house.
I'm gonna win the game.
Trini, you're in the wrong house.
Nicole.
Yo, where you at?
Get out.
Pass your uncle the Pepsi over
You just back there thirsty throating it.
there.
Boys.
Yo.
wow.
Man, this is my third cup.
I said thirsty throat.
I thought this was
I didn't even want to
I'm gonna stay.
Shut up.
What's happening right now?
Nicole, give me the lemonade, baby. All right, here we go. And my
Wait,
cup. Is your
wait,
cup right there.
What you talking about?
Oh.
What do you mean?
Hold on, chat. We're gonna make up some more right now
I can help.
for people who.
Yo, Felix, what up? We getting stuff ready. I think he meant here online. In chat.
Oh.
No,
He means here, like in chat.
Hey, kitty.
Get it?
Why
Alright, kid.
Why is the floor sticky?
Hey, kitty.
Okay, tie your shoes. You can't play nothing. Oh, you gotta do it for the game.
Yes.
She's like, hey, we get it.
What the fuck?
Don't call me thirsty throat. Listen, some shit.
What?
Boys.
I can do that.
She said
No,
it.
it's okay.
Ain't gonna hit me.
Nobody
Damn
else
you.
can keep it
Give me a cup.
What is going on?
Are the cups up there?
No. Shuki.
Thirsty.
Go.
You don't have nothing right.
My true.
Come on, chat. We getting things ready.
Yep.
Is that BK Dragon? Yeah, that's BK Dragon.
How about show that
What's his name? Yeah, I know, but it's hard for her to get the loose.
Joe Hadrian?
Oh, now when you want them to
Say his name.
Right.
Heal
I'm
up
gonna
here.
stop. I'm gonna stop.
So, that's another one right there. Yep.
Oh,
This ain't
yeah.
gonna fucking
I got
fit under
touch
my
feet.
shirt.
Nicole's not gonna feel. Nicole can't play this.
Right.
That's over for your shirt.
Your shirt's too small. You can't get that on the
We need to get a small balloon.
That's cheating.
But
So give her a little one.
all right, you get a small one.
Yeah, because
You
this
get a small
can't fit on your shirt. Let me take these out my pocket.
You can put that under your shirt. You can throw it away.
Yeah.
Nicole gets a small balloon, chat, because she's smaller.
Yeah, but you can't get this one.
I'm
I
tiny.
don't even think this can fit under my shirt.
Sorry if that's cheating.
That's how it is.
Oh damn.
Yeah.
Oh damn.
Yeah.
Welcome
Kinda
to
miss
my
our
world.
You
game.
ain't tying no shoes.
Yeah, you done. Yeah, it's done for
You
your
ain't
shoes.
tying no shoes.
Your shoes done. Your shoes done.
Yeah, them charges not getting tired.
You got it.
Maybe I'm blowing them too big. Okay.
Chat, you see this? Look at this.
That's how big it be.
That's how big it
So
be.
she said, welcome to my world.
Right.
You wanna go?
No
Almost
cheating.
there. Almost there.
Well, I'm glad I wore a shirt that says rise up. I'm good.
Oh, you want to close it? Put it on the floor.
Yeah, no, this
Let me
can't.
see if I button
All
it
right.
up.
So this is what you want to get.
Let's see if I button it up.
You're welcome.
Nope. Let me see.
Ooh, my balloon stuff. That's for
Take some
you.
of the air out.
I believe in Georgie.
I feel like my balloon
If you
bigger
want
than
to tie those,
everybody
I'm
else's
just
balloon.
It's like you pregnant.
That's not right. That's not right.
Can we get?
I'm gonna take some air out.
Look at the difference, though. CJ, what's going on here? Look
Yeah,
at
his
the
balloon
difference.
is bigger for some reason. It's weird.
All right, so let me get
This
these.
disparity is crazy.
Fair enough.
Let me get these loose right here.
All right, that's as big as it's gonna get, baby.
Excuse me.
Okay.
Sorry.
Daddy,
Yes. You got it?
Try to take some air out.
Mom, you gotta take some air out.
Okay. The hell with these balloons right here?
Who one got a balloon?
We're gonna get the gold ones right here.
Why that balloon so big?
Right.
Mariah, you look like a hoochie mama.
I don't know.
Stop.
Actually, no, I don't feel so good. I wouldn't.
Okay,
It's my stomach coming off. Go back longer.
All right, I think this size is fair, right?
You look like you about to walk down the block from the
A
hood.
fair enough size for me.
This is wild.
You know what a hoochie mama?
Yeah, we all got to see. We all know. You gotta do it too.
Yeah.
Operate it.
I know I'm
Stop
about
saying
to.
that.
I got my own.
Really?
I'm gonna do it. This is easy work. It's a lightweight.
All right.
I'm trying both shoes.
He's gonna need socks. He's gonna need socks.
He's about to not play. He's about to not do this play.
Hello Kitty can fit in my shirt, but not Big Phil. Hello Kitty can fit in the middle shirt.
Stop like that.
Right, time for that.
You gotta be a believer. All right, so who's playing? Y'all gotta sit right here.
Is everybody playing?
Yep.
Y'all gotta sit up here and do it, right?
Yep.
Who's first? Come sit in the seat.
Since they on my shirt, since they on my shirt, you
Me
see
first.
Matter of fact, the kids.
And we're gonna put a timer on it too.
How many?
Yeah, the timer is gonna determine who does it the fastest.
Okay. We're doing a stopwatch.
Yeah.
Since mommy can't do it because she has the actual.
No, mine's the baby.
I'm minding my business.
Yo, mine's the baby.
I'm minding it.
Like, stay over there.
I'm already over
Nutty, what up, Nutty?
Ain't you not hosting?
there.
So we
Yo,
playing.
Nut, what up, bro?
Hey,
yo.
That's why I said the full word.
Oh my god.
Oh my God! My boy, his name is Nutty.
Hey,
That's the nigga name.
What up, nerd? It's crazy.
You're just too happy saying it.
Right.
Hey, Cash, what up?
Man,
I'm
excited.
just showing off.
Why are you so excited?
Nigga said, why you so excited? Wild.
My bad, chat. Should have had these all planned and prepped, but
My stomach is showing off, mommy.
It's okay. Your shirt's a little.
What's up, Chad?
Stop.
Okay.
Keep it up.
No.
You ain't gonna play.
Ash, you need one?
Nah, I ain't got no laces.
Oh,
Oh, wow.
oh, my man.
Damn.
Oh, my list is tiring.
Untie him.
Untie him.
Untie him.
Nah, man. I want
You want to set up YN style.
my Jordan's just be
I
tired.
don't got laces, but I'm gonna try
Wait,
some invisible
God.
laces.
I'm gonna strap the strap.
All right, here we go.
It's fine.
All right, so I got this blue one.
All right, my laces are.
Nicole gonna go first.
You gonna go first, little mama. So chat, my little mama is gonna go first.
She flash bang.
What do you want?
She flash bang.
What?
Flash bang.
Oh man, this is called
Come on, little mama, sit. You gonna
Tie your shoes.
sit on down. Hold on, let me put the timer on. Chat, we're gonna put the timer on for her, and she has to try to tie her shoes.
Flash bang.
All right, hold on. Let's organize. One mic. Who goes first?
Little mama's going first.
Okay, go
And then the
ahead.
right
Yes.
next.
So, little mamas, you're gonna go first. I'm gonna put the timer on, okay? And you have to tie your shoes. Okay, 1, 2, 3, chat, go.
Fast.
The suspense, y'all. Come on, little mamas.
Oh, you can do it sitting down. I know that.
No, not you.
Yeah, you tried it.
Wait, I can't do
Yeah, you
it.
trying to.
I'm going to strap the laces.
Can't lose shirt like.
No, I'm just asking. I know.
Oh, they're untied. They're
Can't
untied,
ask
guys. Hold on. They're untied.
Yo, the actual timer though.
He's using the action.
Yo.
Wait, we tied 1 and 2.
Both of
Two.
them.
Oh, y'all cheating.
Not the cheat.
He
That's
said
not
y'all
cheating. That's crazy.
The longest
Done.
shoe tie.
Stop. 40 seconds and
20 seconds.
and
30
37.
Come on over here.
Okay.
40 seconds?
Right. You take it out now, baby.
40 seconds?
I didn't pop.
Holy
Oh,
shit.
get
Oh
over
no,
here.
this is a big
Stop.
challenge for real. Now I think about
Okay.
it. Yeah.
The winner, I'm gonna embarrass
I deal with that
myself.
almost every
You
morning.
gotta stand up.
Yeah,
Oh, we gotta stand.
Yep, you
Wait.
gonna definitely stand on the.
Hurry up and get it out. Tie the shoe.
Wait. She's the winner.
Wait. Hold on.
But she got no shoestrings. Her shoestrings is not nasty.
Yeah,
40 seconds.
I'll take it out.
Reset.
You can't take that
So
out.
we got 40.
Wait,
Yeah,
you gotta take the shoes off, put it back on,
Yeah.
and then tie it.
She can't tie
No,
because her
just
shoestrings
take them
is...
off and put it
So
back
unlace
on.
them.
Yeah,
Yo,
take
Rex,
them
what
off.
up? Yo,
Take
chat.
them
You
off and
see
put it back
y'all
on.
just getting the game going.
Okay.
Those glass. Stop.
Watch the game
You
now.
gotta try and tie your shoelace without popping the belly.
Yep.
You see how her shoe is? She
She
her boots
She
are
got the
laces.
laces.
Oh, alright.
Ready?
Yeah.
Set the timer.
Okay, I got it.
We'll wait for CJ. I don't know what he's doing.
Oh, I was making sure chat didn't.
You gotta
scroll too
use your
far
hands to
down.
put your shoes back.
Okay, so you ready?
Mhm.
Chat. The big girls go. 1, 2, 3, go.
Yep.
You wrong
Oh.
foot. Yep. Wrong foot. Oh, no, she good. She good.
All right.
That's not fair. They young.
Yeah, they don't really count.
They young.
They young.
They young.
All right, that's it. Take it out. Take it
All right,
out.
so she got,
Take it out.
she got 8 seconds, Chef. She
I
got
need
8
you to
seconds.
take it out. All right.
Yeah, get the
That does
Right.
not
Keep
count.
killing me with this shit.
and pop it.
That
All right,
does not count.
You up,
Yeah,
bro?
I'm pop it. Yeah, I'm gonna pop it next. You doing too much.
Nah, you don't get to sit down. What are you doing?
No, you gotta stand up.
Stand your ass up.
Right.
You tall ass. Oh, you gonna leave
Right.
this way?
You gotta stand up, buddy.
Come on, buddy.
Mind your business.
I minded it.
I'm
I
not,
minded
I'm not your business.
it.
Hold on. Okay, hold on. Don't look at my
Ain't
eyes.
light skinned.
Ready?
Okay.
I'm darker than you.
So
Yeah,
the
you're
light
not.
skin
I'm
nigga.
darker than you.
I'm
Stop
dark.
All
talking
right,
to
have a
me.
seat.
Oh, hold on.
Okay.
All right, stop talking.
Okay, ready?
Pop on the floor.
1, 2, 3, go.
Down the rabbit. Bunny ears.
Double tunnel twisted.
Double tunnel twisted.
Hey, yo.
Whoa.
Hey, yo.
Pause.
It was her.
No, not you, bring it home. Hey, hey, watch you.
That's that white shit.
Mommy has 2.
23.
Let's go, baby.
So he had 23.
The nerve of it being 23, though.
Oh, big 23. You legendary, bro.
Come on, the nerve of it being 23 is crazy, bro.
Legendary, kid. Oh, yeah, legendary. Put the 23 on real quick. Yo, for the camera, baby. It's legendary, baby. You already know, kid. Come on, stop playing. Son, you know the vibe, bro. Boy, you know the energy, my boy. Come on, get up there, man.
All right.
Man, it's
All right. You
Come
gotta
on,
stand
Miss.
up.
Come on, Miss, bro. Come on.
You started the timer?
No, not yet. 1, 2, 3, go.
Oh, my back is killing me.
Oh, please.
Huh?
GK look real pretty over here with the hands on the hips. Get your
Right.
goddamn hands on your hips. Right. Bro. You're supposed to have the boots too.
Oh, my God.
Damn shoelace.
You too grown. I know I tell you.
Shut up.
You too grown for this shit.
Time. 29.
All right, he's still in the lead.
Boom.
I don't got shoelaces, so what I'm gonna do?
Sit down, sit down.
I don't got
Take the
shoelaces.
shoes.
Sit down. Sit
Uh,
down.
yeah.
Put some shoes on,
Oh,
man.
excuse me, Jordan.
Yeah, what? Yeah, the walking.
He was going to
Yeah,
show
why
me
you
go.
walking like
I'm
that?
done.
That's my question. Why are you walking
Come on,
like
shoes
that?
out. Come on. Since he's looking for shoes.
Why?
Come on, come on.
Why is he walking like that?
Come on, bro.
Mommy, look.
Hey, hey, hold on, wait. Hey, my shoes good. Look, I'm on
These shoes behind you.
So Miss Bro got you pregnant?
Ah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Nigga, I ain't no damn seahorse.
Bust the water. Oh, stop.
That's
Come over here.
Oh, he's broke.
Seahorse, me, man.
Seahorse me is
I
crazy
got them
word.
shoes too, man.
Hey,
M
man.
said GK
Yeah, I
had
see
you
them.
time. Appreciate you,
I
M.
see
Thank
them.
you.
I tied them.
Alright, so back.
Wait, start the timer for him.
Yeah, untie
Back.
them, bro.
Alright.
I tied them.
Alright, one.
Wait.
One. Right, ready? 3, 2, 1, go.
He look like he in pain.
The grunting.
Why is he struggling? Why is he?
Because he's tall.
My knees.
Dr.
They
Mohammed
hurt.
tied shoes.
My knees hurt. Come on, you.
Sorry, Dr. Mohammed tied shoes.
Alright, done.
Time.
What's that?
24.
Oh, he's.
Boom. Sit down.
GK, you gotta beat Jordan, bro. He's
Put my
23.
shoes
You
on.
gotta beat him.
I gotta get that 23.
Yup.
Boom. Sit down. Boom, you sit down too.
Also, chat, if y'all want to play along, get some balloons and try it in your own house and then put your timer in the chat.
You like my shoes though?
Hey, what size you in, bro?
Yo, what what?
Nigga said, what size you
Why
in?
Why you gotta do all that? I thought you were my man from way back. We used to fight together. Why you gotta do that? Why you gotta take a picture of my feet? It's crazy.
They're unique, bro.
First of all, they unique.
Yeah.
See that shit right there, nigga? I'll be on the block like, yo, what up?
Right.
Nah,
No, not me, Jerome from Martin.
Ooh.
That's the Jerome from
dead.
Martin. That's it.
Alright, start
I said, Romy Rome in the house.
I said Jerome in the house.
that junk at? What up, junk? What you got going on back there, junk?
Don't bet on GK, you're going to lose your money.
Let me know when you're ready.
Ready?
All right, ready? 3, 2, 1, go.
Look at the fingers moving.
Oh, they moving. Oh, shit. They moving.
This is not time. This is not time. This is
Time. 9 seconds.
He had to beat you.
9 seconds.
9. And it's still good. Get out of here. That's murder, nigga. Get out. You go to jail, Jordan. You go to jail, nigga. I can't post it. 9 seconds, you heard me? 9. Who they fucking with? Who they? Oh my God, I'm cussing.
No,
Who they toying around with?
No.
You know?
It's fine. It's cool. It's
Shut
cool.
up.
toying around is cool.
9 seconds. Ain't nobody beating that. Ain't nobody beating
Oh,
that.
baby, she'll go.
Ain't nobody beating
Well,
that.
I really can't time nothing, but so I'll just take them off and put them back on.
All right.
All right, cool.
Daddy doesn't have laces. And that,
My shoes, they don't really have laces, so.
Give me the timer thing.
that's
And
cheating.
switch
But
sides,
the
switch
tape
sides.
it off and I put
Switch
it
sides,
down.
okay.
No, I'm telling you.
Nothing said 9
Put 'em on
is
different
crazy.
sides.
They're not
Okay.
beating that. They're not
You gotta
beating
do
9.
9.
All right.
Change the sides. Change sides.
All right,
Like
change
7
sides.
or 8. Like 7
All right, Chad, here we go. They changed size, shoes on the wrong foot.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
3.
Wait, they switched. Wait, you trying to do something?
Yeah, they want to
fancy?
give me extra shit.
You're not tying them, so.
Yeah.
Right, turn them backwards.
Disadvantage.
Whoa.
Okay. Yep. 3, 2, 1,
Turn
go.
it backwards. Why?
It's a heel turn.
Yeah, yo, man.
I don't know. I think 9 seconds passed.
10 seconds.
We killing them, son.
You beat me by a lot because
How about
you had to tie. I had to tie shit.
Yeah.
There's some bullshit here. Look,
Don't pop it.
these damn balloons don't pop a shit.
you just have to bite them?
Balloons for real. Hey.
Next time we gonna do watermelons.
Oh, no.
See if y'all really can handle it.
Damn, that's crazy.
Mama.
That's what it really feels like.
Next
time.
Right. That's a lot more
She said next time.
Yeah.
Wow.
No, not next baby. You wild.
Nah.
Who baby shower next time?
I think she's gonna do it next week.
Yeah.
She's just do it next week. I'm gonna go to the supermarket.
You won. GK won.
Bring the kids.
GK1 chat
9 seconds.
with 9
Crazy.
seconds, and my little mama's won with
The tissue.
44?
Oh, yeah, she
I mean
won the
40?
yeah the tissue game.
Yeah, she got it just right.
Yeah, you got it perfectly.
Just right.
Perfectly,
Crazy.
perfectly.
Where's her tissue?
What kind of prize?
I see you be
Ain't
tired.
no
You be
prizes.
fucking tired. Goddamn.
That's why I don't have my shoes.
I'm way out of time right now. This, woo.
He said he don't trust that counter.
No. Tupac was hilarious.
What you want?
All right,
GK
chat.
won.
Let me see.
Appreciate you, boy, bro. Hey, Cash.
A-Cash, yeah. What's up, bro? Top of off my guy A-Cash. Nice, my guy Hot Minute. What's up, bro? What's up? Ash, quick question. What was that that game we played last time that was up here?
40 kids.
Yeah. Yeah, I gotta type that in,
I
right?
could tie a balloon, but every time when I
Hold on,
tie
Chuck, we're gonna
one,
play another game. You guys could engage too. Hold on.
Shuki, don't put it up too high.
While
because-
I'm pulling this stuff up, if you guys would like to definitely donate towards the baby.
Shuki, stop!
If you guys like to donate towards the baby boy CJ Kozavius Jr. III, the link is in the link is at the pin tab. So make sure you go in there, hit the tab, hit the link, and go in there and just donate. All donations are going to the baby, not to me. I have no part to that. It's going all to the baby. And we are appreciative of everything. Everything.
What we getting
altogether.
into?
Oh,
Y'all have
we
a
could-
registry or
I
no?
could just-
Yes, we have a registry
Show me
for
that. Show me
sure.
that. I want to go with this out.
First one.
Yes, what you got? What you got?
Oh, we got another guest in the building.
Oh, do we?
My man.
Do we got another guest? We got a lot of people coming to pop out today.
Look at your face on camera,
Come
man.
on in. Oh, not my guy here. Jeremiah's in the building. What's up, bro? How you feeling, man? Good to see you, bro. Oh my God.
Happy New Year.
Thank you. Yeah, hell yeah. Happy New Year, happy new baby, everything, bro.
Yeah, bro.
It's been too long, man. What's up? Just drag that in for me. All right, cool.
Okay, so boom.
Okay, chat. Before we get into the game,
Let me say a little something real
Let
quick.
the air come out. He got to talk before. Let it
Let
out.
me say a little. Everybody.
okay.
God,
Sorry.
hit my dress.
Almost took me. Can't drag it now.
Almost hit my dress.
The ultra instinct on that
No
though.
more
Crazy.
pictures, man.
Close the door behind you, Ash.
I'm looking for a drink.
Okay, real quick. let me
It's
say
right there
something.
by Pepsi.
Okay.
Okay.
Y'all have to be settled.
Okay, kids, time out.
Have a seat.
Time out,
My bad.
kids.
On behalf of
Bye.
us,
But
meaning me, stand up legend,
Uh huh.
my man Uncle Legend right here,
Uh-huh.
myself, and Trini for tapping in.
Okay, my guy Trini.
We
Yeah,
all
yeah.
said, we want to do something nice for y'all, so we all tapped in with each other.
Right.
We ain't tell you about it.
No, of course
You know,
not.
we all tapped in with each other and we said we're gonna get you something nice. So this is what we got for you right here.
Chat, by the way, he said something nice. That's a big ass
Can you
box over
bring that in
there.
for us, please?
It's crazy.
Wait, get it on camera. Get the box on
He
camera.
said it's something nice.
That
but-
box too big not there on camera.
Yo,
Huh? We ain't getting no wings.
this is from us to y'all.
Yes.
I see that.
Oh, yeah.
And Trini. And big old Trini
And
too.
Trini.
Trini.
Look at this
You want
chat.
to try? Yeah.
Chat, this is a thick ass box.
we gonna
Okay.
open
So
this
we want
box.
you to pop that open.
Yeah, let me just shimmy this over.
You gotta stand up down.
Yeah,
Stand up, man. Stand up.
I'm gonna stand. I gotta get the foot out. I'm kind of big.
Dominic Angel said, do you want a boy or a girl? It's
Hey,
a boy.
having a boy.
They having a
We
boy.
already know.
Definitely having a boy. We got two girls right
They have
here.
two girls. It's their first boy.
No.
Yes.
No. I'm gonna teach him. I'm gonna
Need
teach
you to
I'm
pop
gonna
that
teach you
open.
everything I
Okay,
know.
stop.
Let me get
I'm gonna teach you everything I know.
Let me
Everything
get
I know.
a little screwdriver real
Everything
quick.
about the internet.
You got something?
Yep, I got something. All right, chat. Here we go. Bow. Bow.
Another box.
Bow. Okay. Thick ass box. Amazon got that.
Okay then. Yep. It's
What the hell is this? It is
Throw that
heavy.
box over there. Throw that box over there.
Get down, get out, get down.
Drag it.
Oh, yeah.
Get that out the camera, man.
Appreciate you, bro.
Get that out there, man.
Check this out.
It's the Bebo, Libo.
It's the Bebo Libo
Uh-huh.
7 Dribo.
It's a 4-in-1.
Mm-hmm.
Bassinet, change,
4-in-1.
playpen, all that.
Everything.
Playpen, bassinet, all
one
that good
box.
stuff. The Angela Bassinets.
I
Let's
appreciate
go.
you guys. Thank you
Oh,
so much.
Bassinet. It's
Yes.
Angela Bassinet.
We love you guys.
Yes.
Monet, we love you, girl.
I appreciate y'all. Love y'all too.
Guys, I
Oh,
appreciate y'all so much.
We love you too.
We love you too, CJ, but it's not about you right
No, that's not
Women's month.
Hey, you gotta put it together.
Yeah.
with the women's one.
You gotta put it
Women's
together.
month is not ending until April
I gotta put it
starts.
together. So, thanks, guys.
Oh,
Appreciate
Good
y'all.
luck, good luck with that.
Well deserved. Well deserved.
Yes, I so
You earned
appreciate
it.
y'all.
You earned it. You earned it.
Yes.
Facts.
Yep. So,
But wait.
there's
There's
more.
more.
Uncle G got to put some razzle dazzle on it.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying?
Oh,
thank you.
little razzle dazzle for you.
Razzle Dazzle was the final.
Oh,
Oh, look at the little cross.
look at the cross. The spider cross.
Watch it. No, wait, give me. You gotta hit the
Oh,
that's the then you gotta put them in sports mode. You know what I mean?
So these are not these are Miles Morales.
Those are Miles Morales.
The Miles Morales.
Then you gotta get the match of gem.
PJ.
Boy, fresh out here. You gotta be fresh.
Look
You
at
want to come on
this.
streaming?
Yeah.
You better get everything.
And look at the little
You about to be on
shirt.
streaming.
That's some
Yes.
Jamaican shit right there.
Yes, child.
Wow.
Some flexing
Watch
on
that
it.
say.
You know what?
The spider shirt. Oh.
Watch that go on.
The spider shirt.
Let's go. Ooh.
Them Crocs.
Yeah, them Crocs is
Now, let me tell you
fire.
the dilemma I went through with myself fighting in the store.
Oh my God, Jesus.
They had these.
Can I get a
jammies
chance
set,
to
right?
tap them?
To match the Spider-Man shit.
Right.
But they
right.
had the Sonic ones too. I
Oh.
was like, GK, this is not your baby.
Jay.
Oh.
Get the matching figures.
Yeah. Stop with the match.
I don't know
I
what
love
Sonic
these
is.
Yo, bro, it was in my head all the way to the register. I said, damn it, put it down. Put it there.
You ain't doing that.
Sonic would have been just Maurice. Maurice would have been just fine.
But he don't match the shoes.
No.
He don't match the shoes.
I appreciate you.
We love you, girl.
We appreciate you guys. Thank you. Even you guys coming to pop out, I swear. I'm so appreciative of it. We appreciate it. Big Brooklyn, what's up, bro?
Yo, Dominic Angel said little homie already getting his drip game on.
Already.
Already.
You see?
Homie,
Already. And definitely Koza too. Gotta give shout out to my guy Koza for dropping that solid 30.
Yes. Appreciate you, Koza.
Appreciate you, Uncle Koza.
Uncle Kozavius.
Uncle Kozavius. Right. So I put this on the side for right now.
Put a knot in that one no more.
Okay. You still playing with balloons? You still want to play that?
Yeah.
Great. That's kid shit right there. That's kid shit right there. All right. Can I get some more drink?
Yeah.
Okay. Check my bag. I just want some more drink. It's hot, but I really enjoy myself. I am enjoying myself, you know.
You want no Parmesan or you good?
Nah, you can't mix light and dark. I ain't gonna be able to do nothing productive tomorrow, no.
Day's over.
No, day's over. And they got to go to school too, so yeah. Huh? They got to go to school tomorrow too? No. And they got to be to school 7:15 though?
7:15?
Yes.
Yo, I just seen
be there for 7:15?
Be to the school. School door open 7:15.
But well, hold on. Watch this. I just seen something with charter schools trying to push for 7 days a week.
Yeah.
Hell no.
I'm not doing that.
That's crazy. 7
Let
days
these
a
kids
week.
breathe.
Right.
7 days a week.
I think she said 12. They said 12 hours. 12 hours a day.
Wild work.
12 hours a day.
Yeah, 7 days a week.
What are they teaching them?
Right.
I be low key happy on Fridays because they get out 12:30 versus like every other school, regular 3:30, 2:40, whatever.
30's fire though.
Yeah, but they get out 3:30 every other day. 7:15 to 3:30.
Last day.
Long shit.
That's how they able to cut it short on Fridays because they got the hours in already.
Right.
That's a question.
That's a long day every other day.
Right.
Stop it.
All right.
Run away, Nicole.
All right, chat. So we got another game. We got one more game before we get up out of here.
Popped in. Big Brooklyn's in the building.
Yes, indeed. Drop a ball for Big Brooklyn. Drop a ball for Dirty Man too.
Blackbird, Demonic Angel.
Demonic Angel.
Drop a bomb for.
We appreciate y'all.
Drop a bomb for Demonic. Drop a bomb for M because she said she was leaving. Drop a bomb for what she said? A-Cash. Drop a bomb for A-Cash. Drop a bomb for Blackbird. Yes, indeed. It's a lot of y'all in here. A lot of y'all just popped in there. We so appreciate Subaku too. Subaku to drop a bomb.
On the streets fighter kind of short.
Right? Yeah. They be kicking ass.
That secrecy's wild.
Yeah, he's disgusting.
Last night was his night.
What happened?
It was basically everybody trying to stop this man.
Damn.
Who was he playing?
He was kicking him.
JP was kicking ass, and that goddamn Zangief. He was a problem last night.
Nah,
who that? Dirty Dan?
Disgusting.
Nah, fuck Dirty Dan.
Nah, Dirty Dan is disgusting too.
CQC.
Oh, man. He played Huss.
All right, so let me kick it over. We're gonna play a game of Would You Rather. We do a couple rounds of Would You Rather. So you guys could tap in too. So here we go. Would you rather constantly be tired, no matter how much you sleep, or constantly hungry, no matter what you eat?
Constantly tired.
Constantly hungry.
That's just me every day.
Yeah, that's constantly hungry is what this one over here in the blue.
This is an anime based off of the right one. It's called Berserker Blood.
Man, you a kid, man.
Hungry.
You got all the energy.
I'm gonna be still hungry after I eat one thing.
So that's what you rather? You rather always be hungry or always be tired?
I would say, for me, chat, I would honestly say constantly.
Okay.
Rather be tired.
I'm constantly tired already.
If you're hungry, you'll get mad fat.
But as an adult now with kids, you just like you're always constantly tired anyway. So I'll be constantly tired.
Me too.
But I won't be constantly hungry because.
You're gonna dispute you.
But I'd be both. Like me being my size, I'd be both all the time. Alright, whatever.
That's two horrible ass choices, yo.
So we got there's more people that would rather be constantly hungry. It's crazy.
Live without YouTube? Or
Would you rather live without YouTube or without TikTok?
Without TikTok. Without TikTok.
Without TikTok.
YouTube is my number one streaming platform.
Without TikTok.
YouTube.
YouTube is like, I need
Live
YouTube,
without
son.
TikTok because I
Back
never
in the
watch
day,
TikTok
YouTube-
anyway.
Yeah, everybody chose TikTok.
Yeah, TikTok.
I don't know.
you gotta choose one.
Without TikTok, or she's not gonna pick TikTok.
She
Yeah,
grew up with
'cause that
TikTok.
shit
She
can't.
can't.
Back in the day, son,
I like
12,
TikTok
13 years
on
old, I was YouTube all night.
I like TikTok over YouTube.
All night on YouTube, son.
TikTok over YouTube.
Are
TikTok
you-
told me how to do a lot of shit.
So you would rather no YouTube?
No
He was
YouTube.
already without TikTok, but for
Yeah,
years.
I was going without
We didn't know what TikTok was.
Yeah, I don't care about no TikTok.
I don't
Give me
watch
YouTube.
TikTok. I don't watch YouTube like
Don't
that.
get me wrong, TikTok is fire, but it's not
Yeah,
YouTube.
TikTok could go.
I be getting straight.
Mariah?
YouTube get me right.
Big Brooklyn said without YouTube, but everybody else said TikTok.
No,
Could go.
no, you.
You gotta choose one.
Damn,
YouTube
she
get me
losing
right.
her mind
Sure,
over
Right,
Demonic-
right.
Demonic said picking YouTube would kick out YouTube music too. That's
Yes.
actually
Yeah, TikTok is out of here.
And they got movie clips.
Yeah.
Nah, YouTube gotta stay.
YouTube, you go there for everything. DUI,
Everything that's on TikTok is
Yeah,
on
YouTube
YouTube.
has shorts.
But everything that's on TikTok is on YouTube.
Right.
And
And remember,
YouTube
YouTube
has
has a
live
large
TV.
account.
And not everything that's on YouTube is on TikTok.
And they got live TV.
Right.
It's a large
You
account.
can rent
So it's in
movies.
there for
Live
right.
movies.
Hello?
TikTok.
They got
So
live
she keeping
news.
TikTok.
So,
TikTok
No,
is
I
out
never
of
said
here.
what's
a lot of people
Get
said
rid of it.
TikTok, so we're gonna click
Top
TikTok.
2 hours anyway.
A lot of people would get rid of TikTok.
Damn.
A lot of people get rid of TikTok.
Landslide.
So, would you rather have to publicly share your search history or your camera roll?
No, this ain't
That's
a
some
kid
freaks in
question.
here. This is a family show.
Right, it's a family
The right
show.
one. The right one.
Camera roll.
I mean,
Neither.
What you say, GK?
What y'all got y'all
You
search
drinking too much of it.
I mean, either one is fine for me.
Your camera roll.
My camera roll. My camera roll's clean.
Right. I mean, we keep the camera roll clean because it ain't having on phone sometimes. And then the search history
And
say
What y'all
what
search
happened.
history like?
I'm worried about y'all niggas, man.
What's your private search history like?
I can see my camera roll. I got
You
the
gonna see a
anime.
bunch of stupid shit.
What's your search history, bro?
That's
Shit.
up there.
Legendary. Both of them. TV 14 status. Shut up.
What's going on right there?
Talking about that
Damn.
incognito movie.
Galaxy says search history.
Yeah, I would say
Search history? Oh, that means
either
that
one.
you innocent. That's
Nah,
what it
yo,
is.
too much of your incognito mode, bro.
What's
Yeah,
up,
private
That don't work.
Come on, don't do that.
Big
Why
Brooklyn
should
said
we?
I
That
didn't
even
want
He said not the trench coat
my
guy.
phone is PG-13. Nobody believes you, Big Brooklyn. My phone is PG-13. Fuck that.
Yeah.
That's a
Cat. Cat, we all want cat.
GK, what you rather?
Why you gotta do that?
I want to know, yo. I need to know
Why you
yours.
gotta- I was always trying to say low key.
No.
Just keep it quiet back here.
What you rather?
Just
Too
because
quiet.
shit is back, don't mean shit.
Ain't no they talking about
Right.
everybody else.
What you rather, GK?
The whole camera roll?
Yes,
Yes, the whole
everything.
camera
Even your
roll.
deleted ones, even your
The
hidden
whole
ones.
The whole.
Even your hidden ones.
the
Your
whole
hidden
shebang.
ones, yeah.
I ain't gonna lie, you don't have an iPhone, so you don't got hidden.
Oh no.
Oh, my
I
iPad.
think the hidden is
I
Crazy,
can't.
right?
No.
Yeah.
That's not your
hidden is
camera
about
roll.
the camera roll.
No, it's not. You gotta scroll down to find hidden, gang. It's not part of your
I know,
It's not part of your camera roll.
It is.
Trust me, I know.
Yeah.
It's not part of your camera roll. yo. You gotta find hidden. The camera roll, you can just pick photos. Boom.
So moving on.
Ah, nigga, answer.
Pick one.
You answer.
It's okay for your camera roll, man. Alright, the camera roll.
Oh, nah.
is-
Whoa.
No, the
I'm
less
worried.
photo
I'm worried now because you taking it too long.
This guy is a
Let me
hit.
tell you something. I wouldn't want anyone to go blind.
Yo, I'm camera roll.
Okay.
Camera roll.
That's not bad.
Agreed.
That's it.
Everybody want to see the camera. What the fuck y'all niggas be
Hey,
searching
listen.
up?
Agreed.
I might get some more
What y'all niggas
numbers.
A lot of people over here is good people on this
Niggas is
side.
on.
Niggas search a lot of stupid stuff. I ain't gonna lie.
Would you rather save one person you love from a
Why
burning
is this a
building
question?
or save 100 strangers?
Why is
One
this a question?
person.
What, this
Say
person
that.
one
I'm
I'm not
person?
Superman.
Why am I saying
I want to take
I don't know nobody from
over.
this building right now.
Definitely say 100
But why is
strangers.
this a question?
A person
Crazy.
you love from a burning building?
I ain't gonna lie, I say one
I'm a
person. I'm gonna be
super-
honest.
I don't know.
I'm a hero at
I
the
don't
time.
know.
I'm going in after that.
Right.
Alright, so wait.
Why can't we just
Let
say
me retwist
two?
the question. For the left one, it's save the P5 or save 100 strangers.
100 strangers.
I'm saving 5. I'm saving the 5.
That's crazy.
What's wrong with that's crazy.
Fuck these strangers. Who you?
Wait.
What if you one of those strangers that get burnt out because a nigga told they P5?
Exactly.
That's fine. I don't
You
understand.
don't say a fucking PS5, bro.
I'm saving
When
my
they got
5.
When they got PC.
I'm saving my
What's
5.
wrong with you?
That's
My
crazy.
PC is with my 5.
You can buy another P5.
Word.
But that one is sentimental.
It's not. Shut up.
Right.
Do you know when you
Oh,
cook out
you're
with
wait, so
Good question.
Huh?
So
save
save
on
me or
live
save
event?
or save
You
me?
ain't broke it for that.
The garden,
Like,
yeah, bro.
oh, you got.
Go ahead, come on,
Damn, I
nigga.
need
Get on with
yourself
it.
caught up. You
Damn.
got yourself caught up.
Damn,
young
gotta
fella.
jump a bomb for that one.
Yeah, drop a bomb now.
Save her or the P5?
Oh man, you gonna
He said save her or save the P5?
broken bomb.
Say home.
Wait.
He said, she asked him, would you rather save me or
Hold
the
on,
P5?
hold on.
He want to know. Inquiring minds want to know.
Answer the question, bro.
Yeah.
Shit out of here. Answer the
Answer
question.
the question.
You took a little too long. Yeah, you better.
I'm gonna cry like a bitch when I
See
get
that,
out.
bro?
I'm gonna cry like a
Good
bitch.
answer, sir. Good answer, sir.
I'm gonna cry like
Later,
a bitch.
A-Cash.
when I get out.
Better
I'm
get
here with
right.
this anime cries.
You better get
If we got teardrop fall.
So it's safe to say saving one this person, right?
Don't spill it. Don't spill it.
Yo, bro, I just finished.
Would you rather have an extremely high IQ but be socially awkward, or be extremely charismatic but have a low IQ? That's how I'm already is now. This
The
is.
first one.
What is it again?
Would you rather have an extremely high IQ but be socially awkward, or be extremely charismatic but have a low
That's
IQ?
me now.
I already am
Fuck it.
socially awkward.
Yo, both of them
That's
both
me
of them
now.
can work.
Right. So it's like you smart as shit but can't hold a conversation with people.
Right.
Or you dumb as shit but you got mad energy.
You ain't dumb as shit.
Dumb
You
as
just
shit.
ain't
Dumb as
I'm
shit.
really so
You dumb as shit.
I'm a dumb-
You dumb as shit but everybody you're likable.
We'll have time to learn.
Right.
Being extremely
Right.
charismatic.
I'm dumb as shit now.
Bobby smarter later.
Right.
Right.
Listen, I'm smarter than the average bear, so I'm cool.
Hey,
with
boo
being
boo.
this.
Right.
I'm just saying, bro.
Where's the picnic basket?
There you go.
So I'm going with blue.
I'm rolling with blue
Yeah,
too.
well, blue.
That's
I want that creepy blue. Give me that creepy blue.
Subaku said blue wins.
I'm gonna go blue.
Brick
Give me
Brooklyn
that
said
creepy-
red.
Give me that
Galaxy
creepy
Stone
blue.
said red wins.
I'm Democrat anyway.
Subaku said you can pretend to be smart if people like you. Yeah,
That's true.
good point. You can pretend you know what you're talking about around people that fuck with you.
But I mean,
You still gotta go
You can be a fraud, but yeah.
Low IQ don't mean you don't have common sense. You just don't
Right,
know
you
physics.
just not the smartest nigga in the
Yeah,
bunch.
That don't mean you're like dumb.
Yeah, you just
You
not
ain't
doing
old for
A low,
Martin.
what's a low IQ? What a low IQ is what?
Well, I mean, your screws is missing out the box. Like you just.
They
never
saying
got
you
that.
Waldo slow.
But low IQ is in terms of intelligence.
Waldo Slow is crazy.
Nigga said you Waldo slow.
Waldo
is crazy.
Waldo was intelligent though.
Waldo.
was intelligent though.
Where?
The real guy, yeah, the character, yeah.
Nah.
He said a couple of intelligent things.
Shit. Yeah.
Facts, Galaxy, facts.
Wow, a lot more people said socially awkward shits. Okay. That's 5 in a row. Okay. We do 5 more. Would you rather have a perfect body but an unattractive face, or an attractive body but an imperfect body?
That's for you, Auntie
Attractive
Slayer.
face, you read it wrong.
Hold on, wait a minute now.
Right.
Oh.
Would you rather have a perfect body but you hit,
All the women in the
or
chat.
would you rather look good but your body is square ball?
Square off.
How ugly we talking? I can't look at
I'm
you.
ugly.
No, you're not.
What? Alright.
Who said that?
You like?
You don't want to choose that one.
Don't play with me.
Nah, you like?
Don't play with me.
Three. Alright, so perfect body, but you a 3.
I'm attracted to you.
But attractive face, you like a 9, but your body is like squarey, or you got like
Give me the
hair
body. Give me the
on.
body.
I got
I
a
don't have to
bag.
look at you.
He said I got a bag. Don't worry.
My face is ugly.
The body is. I got a bag. He gonna take it.
Wait. Unattractive face. If it's a
Perfect body, but I'm really skinny.
Yeah.
to change that up.
But yeah,
If you're
so
just not
put
attractive-
if you put makeup on a 3, she could look like a 7.
That's
Yeah.
a big jump.
Yeah.
She may be a
He
5.
said that's a big jump.
That's a big jump.
A good makeup artist will turn a 3 to a
That's
7.
too much makeup. You
Bro,
go go
we've
from
seen
3
some of
to
those
a
videos
5.
on
The
YouTube.
TikToks.
Yo, YouTube and
Bro, they
Facebook. Even
turn
Facebook.
dudes into women. So
talking about-
this is
You're
talking about ourselves,
Chat.
bro.
This is not a baby shower question.
I want
Go
to
with
body.
the body.
They turning
I'm going
birth-born
body.
dudes
This
with
is not a
whole
baby shower
stubble
question.
into Instagram models.
But how much of a drunk are we talking if you drunk? If you drunk, how much of a
Wait,
drunk?
that look. Galaxy said, so
So
I call that your Bobby doll or animal doll with glow up.
That's funny.
Oh,
Kardashian
I'll take. Give me the Kardashian for 200 because that Annabelle doll is gonna kill everybody. I don't want nobody.
She said the looks. Nobody talk about what she did.
Nah, them looks could kill. No parts. Damn.
I'm gonna go with the body.
You gonna do the body?
I'm going body.
I'm gonna go body.
Everybody say body?
Her face
Like bigger.
I'm going with this.
Like kids. Like see, walk around like kids.
No comment. Galaxy Storms. I agree with Galaxy Storms.
A lot more people said they'll take the face though. It's crazy. Hold on, y'all. Would you rather change aspects of your personality or your looks?
My personality.
I would like to look like Michael B. Jordan.
This ain't for y'all kids.
My personality.
Personality.
Man, looks, I don't care.
I mean,
What's your body or your personality?
just move the belly a little bit. I mean, I know somebody who like it. I know somebody who like it. But it's all
It's my personality.
I'm cool with this. This is fine.
Yeah.
Like if I put the chest on it, like I just came home. You know what I'm saying? But
Oh, you like you just came home.
If I had to choose, I'd
You
go
like you just came home.
Yeah,
Let me spend some time out in that
yeah, but
yard.
Stop making his head big.
You like you spend some time in that yard, bro. You like you want those photos they be taking like this?
you know what I'm saying?
It's a great sweat and shit.
So you can skip this one? Honestly, I want to watch this shit right here. We can change ass.
I said looks.
A lot of people said looks.
I figured.
I can see that you can.
Would you rather live without music or live without books?
Live without books.
I'm sorry, man.
Wait. I'm not gonna
Books
lie.
are boring.
Yeah, get your books the fuck out of here.
Hey, it's like my balloon.
I think you guys aren't understanding what
Mine.
books mean.
Yeah, my balloon.
Right.
So much weight.
You can make music. Music has to make
If you're talking about getting rid of books right now, that means
You're talking about right now, as of now.
history and shit
You
is
can
done.
have.
That's what you learn
I'd
from
rather-
music.
When I say history, we can say like live without.
You
It
can't have
still
mine.
exists. It still exists. It's still without it.
Books been around.
Learn music from
You
books.
said books been around
Learn
before
music
history.
from books.
No, they both still
learn
exist.
music.
They both
Nigga said fuck them books.
A lot of
The
people.
general people, bro. Stop trying to argue with
No, I can argue
No,
that.
they
I
both
can definitely
exist.
argue that because there's top 10
It's
musicians
like
who
a
were
little
blind,
Right.
who never read a book, but they can actually
Ray
write.
Charles.
Braille. They can still read. It's still a book.
But they wrote music without having to read.
It's still
They
called
wrote
Braille.
music without having to read. I can
Blind
argue this
people-
all day. I love this conversation.
Blind people have their
It's
own
a baby
way of
shower
writing.
show. It's
So
a
you
baby
trying to
shower
tell me
show.
Stevie Wonder read
Wait,
everything he wrote?
Wait, it's a baby shower
So
show.
you trying to tell me that
Wait,
Bob
wait.
read?
Alright, so let's have that argument.
Wait, what?
How many musicians
You wanna
were
wait
blind
for the
versus
show.
how
You
many
wanna-
wasn't?
I need only one. I only need one,
But
bro.
that's the point that I'm trying to make. The most general people use books.
But I only need one to prove the point.
The one oddity don't make the
But
situation.
there's way more than one, but I only need one.
Most musicians, like I said, use books.
That's okay. Wait, so now,
How many people are blind versus not blind?
how many musicians? All right, so now answer this question for me. How many musicians today is actually using books to do beat pads, beat methods? How?
You talking about?
They're using DAWs. You don't need to read a book to learn how to do a DAW. You don't need to learn how to. You don't need a book to learn how to DJ. You don't need to read a book to do Fruity Loops, or
even
you
if
don't
you're
need any
right.
of that.
Okay, so what? You're right. But
Because
guess
I've
what?
done it.
Most of history recorded through books, through time.
But we not saying
Some of your best artists have never read. R.
Yeah,
Kelly
but-
can't read.
But even if you're right,
But he wrote music. He can't read, but he wrote for some of the best people that
Okay.
ever done it.
But okay.
That's two people.
No, wait.
Maybe you name two people out of the millions. Everybody else use books.
That's like having an NBA argument. How many niggas made to the NBA? The 1% people.
Yeah, but out of everybody who's musicians, you're talking the oddities.
That's okay. I just need one to prove that point.
Yeah, but now that we don't have books, now you gotta go get two blind niggas to write the rest of the world's music versus the rest of the general population.
I don't need books to write music. I don't.
All right,
This is like a Superman versus
I don't.
debate.
I was
They
just
say
saying.
R. Kelly may
I
not
was
be-
saying both. I was saying both exist.
I'm getting rid of books.
We just live without. Both exist.
I'm getting rid of
That's what I was
books.
saying.
I can
You
read
got
books.
two niggas who don't need the book versus everybody else in the world who needs books.
So how many of those people? You can't tell me the number either, but I gave you two.
And I can say, out of everybody else, it's everybody else. That's the
I
point
get-
I'm
I
trying
get
to
two
make.
sides.
Hold on,
I
watch
get
this.
two
Watch
sides.
this.
Read
Watch
the
this.
chat,
Watch
read the
this.
chat,
Watch
read
this.
the
Watch
chat.
this. Watch this. Watch
Read the
this.
chat,
When you
read
write
the chat.
animes, it starts in the book.
That's an
When
anime.
you write stories, it starts in the book.
That's
Hold on,
a
hold on.
story.
When you write movies, it starts in the book.
That's a
When you
movie.
go to school, you learn from a book. When you want to be a doctor, you need a book. So
Okay.
even if you're writing music, every other category of life needs
Okay.
books.
Great. So now, wait, stop. No, let me get it.
Hold on,
Let me get it.
hold
Let me
on.
get it first.
Yeah.
Let me get it.
Yeah.
Every other category except music needs the books.
Okay.
Every
All
other
right.
the category
This
said,
is the point
would
that
you
we're
rather
trying to
live
make.
without music or without books? The answer is, your thing was you
Hold on.
need books to write music.
Okay.
No, you don't.
Okay.
That's the answer.
But hold on. How long ago that's when you got that? Music, you got that. But
So,
hold on.
It don't matter no more.
Hold on. You said it says live without books. The point stop. Hold on. Let me make my point. Relax. Relax. The point I'm trying to make is living without books affects every aspect of life. If you say without books, that's the point I'm trying to make. So if you want to have music, that's cool. I have every other category and more of music.
But wait, GK, for the purpose
Whatever.
of this question.
For the purpose of the question.
For the purpose of this
Because you want to
Okay,
put it
so
as
wait, hold on.
you want to put it as
Hold
a
on.
generality.
Hold
You want to put the
on.
question.
Let me answer the
Which one's
question
right?
in the purpose of this.
Can I talk? You just talk, bro.
Go ahead.
For the purpose of this question, no,
Right.
fuck every other category.
You can't say that because books is in every other category.
I'm just saying this question. Just
Okay.
fuck every other category.
I'm still in that galaxy.
Would you rather live without books or without music? Just fuck every other
I'm
category.
keeping books.
You just want
Nah,
books.
I'm
keeping books.
I live without
I'm
books.
keeping books. It's too important.
For music.
I'm sorry, I don't read like
I'm saying
books.
some fuck music.
Why you gotta act like that? I'm keeping books.
Right, that's what I'm saying.
Let's see what
That's
the percentage is.
Me personally, I can't live without music.
I'm keeping
Me either. I can't live without music. A lot of people say live without books.
More people say they would rather live without
I
books.
can see that. I can see that.
Have $1 million.
In today's day, it makes sense. In today's day, it makes sense.
Wait, have 1 million followers on social media, $1 million.
Have $1 million followers on
It
social
depends
media.
though. I'm almost saying. It depends though. It depends though. Because you can make money off of $1 million.
Yes.
But that's followers.
$1 million.
You can make money off of that.
But they said it's
But you're trying to
followers
get
and
that.
not.
Give me $1 million. Give me $1
Yeah,
million.
Right,
I don't want
because
already have
you
it.
could use part of
You
the
already
million
have
to actually build that up
Give
in
me
time.
$1 million.
wants to be a
Why? Because
YouTuber
with the $1 million,
anyway.
you can make the $1 million followers. But with the $1 million followers, you can't necessarily make the $1 million.
Right. Because they take off their percentage.
How many people actually have $1 million followers but don't have $1 million?
Think about it.
And then
Instagram
you
was
could
shut-
use
Instagram
the
was
$1
shut down,
million
you don't have those followers
as a
no
way
more.
to
Oh, yeah,
get the
that's
$1 million
true.
followers in time.
That's
You don't have
Right,
to get
that's
it
what
right
I'm
away.
saying.
You can
While,
just get it in
with the
time.
$1 million followers, there's multiple people who are just thousandaires with $1 million followers.
Yeah.
But if you got $1 million, you're a millionaire.
Just
You
say
can
$1
get
million
$1 million followers.
I'm
with
gonna go with $1
$1
million.
But remember,
Just
it's
say
also
$1
like a
million
double-edged
for
sword
sure.
because you don't want to be too famous because things happen.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go $1 million.
Yeah, $1 million.
$1
Just say
million.
followers.
You already have
In my opinion, I'm going with $1 million.
$1 million, yeah.
In my opinion,
I got
$1
bills to
million.
pay. Like, get that out of the
I
way.
like
Give me $1 million,
That's priority
right?
right
I'm
there.
gonna use $1 million to make the game now a fucking
cash.
success.
I like cash.
Money you can invest
Yeah.
it right away. You can do
That's
whatever.
right. Give me $1 million. I'm gonna make the game like a fucking success. Now, by the end of this year, we're gonna have the $1 million followers.
Exactly.
But I'm gonna still have money, and
you
now,
can double that.
now my revenue, our revenue is gonna jump from what it is now
So like $3 billion.
to the million, to the millions, whatever. I don't fuck the $1 million followers. Give me $1
So
million.
quick, let's see how many people chose that though. A lot of people
A lot
probably
of
chose
people
this
chose that.
generation.
Yeah, a lot
This
of people
generation
chose
probably
mine.
picked
Wait.
A lot of people chose the $1 million followers. So Baka said $1 million followers.
followers.
Wait.
$1 million.
He
They
said $1 million
picking
followers.
followers. Everybody picking followers.
Followers, they crazy.
Let me scroll back down.
Followers is crazy.
He said $1 million
But you
followers.
not-
Blackbird said followers.
Nicole?
Galaxy said, if I start with GoFundMe with $1 million followers, can I get $1 million?
But you gotta make it. You already have it.
Potentially.
Right.
You already have it in your hand.
Potentially. Depends on how out of your $1 million followers who are willing to support you. Just because they follow you, doesn't mean they support you.
Yeah.
That's a fact.
That's a fact.
Yeah.
They gotta
It could
subscribe.
be end up being a bot.
I know that first
Right.
hand.
Right.
Even if they subscribe, you have to take a percentage from it. Twitch take a percentage. So.
Exactly. So
But then there's
Big
followers,
Brooklyn
but
said
then
if I
there's
had $1 million
And
followers,
subscribers. But then there's a
I
difference
would
between
do that.
remember there's a difference between subscribers and followers.
Right.
though.
Right.
So followers doesn't necessarily mean money. It's just people can just see
and that's what I
more.
mean by
No,
what I just said. I'm
you
sorry.
wanna be like
That's
that.
what I mean by
Yeah.
them actually pretty much just rocking with you.
Yeah.
You can have the followers all day long.
but that's
Maybe they
not gonna
haven't
give you
seen your
money.
clip. Oh, this nigga lit. Hit the button, follow.
But that doesn't
And
mean
then
they
they
can
tune
give
into
you
your stuff
money.
every
though.
now and then.
Right,
But
right,
are
right.
they actually
Yes,
subscribing to you? Are they investing into you? Are they actually popping in every Sunday like how these guys are popping in every Sunday to actually
'Cause
rock with us?
If it was more like have a million subscribers, like
Yeah,
subscribers, on social media,
that's a
that's
different
a
argument.
different scope.
That's a different
Yeah,
argument because now
That's
if
all
a
you're
person-
getting money.
if it's a
They're
mil-
paying you in
Yeah,
different.
followers
They
don't
pay
judge,
different
but
quantities.
Right. So and that's what,
Immediately.
and that's to
That's
BK.
what
You can't pay
what
different
Jay said.
quantities.
If it was subscribers, for example, with Twitch, $7.99. If you got 1 million subscribers,
If you say
that's
a million subscribers,
$7 million. That's
That's-
like $8 million.
then I would go with that.
Right.
Because
I'm
the
going with
money
that.
varies.
That
It
makes
could,
way
it
more
could be
sense.
100, it could be $5, it could be anybody could give you
Percentage
whatever
I'm
it
still
can
a
be.
million.
Just add up.
It's gonna be more than $1 million.
I'm still a million.
Automatically.
Whether
Be a few
Twitch
million.
took they, let's say Twitch took they 30% from my
Yeah.
$7.99.
Yeah.
Followers,
Yeah.
that's a lot of money.
I'm still a million.
Followers, and you pick up a YouTuber,
That's a lot of
and
money.
you
Subscribers.
and you
But
make a lot of
It's not
videos,
guaranteed
and
anything.
people
You need
people
to- if they gonna follow, they
subscribe,
gotta
and you
tune
will
in.
get money.
Half your followers to give
So
you
what you
$1
think? Let 'em
each. It's only 500,000 versus
Blue.
just getting a cold minute.
Smart.
She want the money.
Wait.
500K followers on
YouTubers have
YouTube is
videos.
big money. I
Yes.
believe you, Blackbird. I believe you. It's big money.
But it's not
YouTube is-
guaranteed.
But it's not $1 million.
It's not guaranteed $1 million.
Yeah.
And you get a play button.
You do get a play button. You do. You get the silver one.
Yeah, that's the
You
same.
get to the million followers.
You can
I
sell
mean, you
it.
could buy that shit for $1 million.
People never
You actually know you can buy that shit too,
You
right?
can sell
And
it.
I think the million
Well,
is.
I heard you could buy it
You
too.
can buy that shit. Like, you love it, $1 million.
I mean, I never actually
Wait.
Googled it to see how much a play button was, but I heard people have been
buy it.
buying them and they doing little
I know you
like
can buy it. You
reviews.
can buy a YouTube
Like
play button.
YouTube gave me
Yeah,
my
you can
play
buy
I know you
button.
can buy it.
Wait, guys, suggestion.
No,
That's cheap
You can
though.
buy
That's
somebody's YouTube play
whack.
button.
No,
It
you
is.
can buy
You
it.
can buy
Like,
one that
No.
has your name on it.
yeah.
Yeah, you can get
That's
it
whack
made.
though.
You can
That's
get
whack.
one made. Is it official or legit? No.
That's
But,
like-
But
that's
then
but
they gotta-
how much of shit is
That's
on
like
social media
buying
that's
a
not
check
really
mark.
official and legit?
Yeah,
Right,
like,
that's
I'd
what I'm
rather
saying.
earn it.
Only us.
I'd rather earn it.
Yeah.
I'd rather earn it.
Only you would know if
I-
this shit is
Yeah,
real.
but then again, you're subconscious. Like you rather earn it. Hey, in my mind,
But
rather
some of them don't give a damn, bro.
Mhm.
As long as the social media see it, they don't
People
care.
chose though.
They all, a lot of them were saying the followers.
No, I mean, yeah, when you click it.
So I'm gonna click the $1 million.
That's 80 to 200.
I mean,
A lot more people
look at it as
$1
like
million
it's
too.
inspiration, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
I got a
Would you rather have more time or more money?
What is more time?
more time.
Right, what does more time mean?
I ain't gonna lie,
Alive?
Tom is more
More time
valuable.
alive?
Tom. I have more
I don't
time.
know.
Yeah, it could be.
Live.
More time to
Yeah,
live.
I'm going with more time.
You gotta remind me of that movie In Time. You see?
You get that money right now in dollar
You ever
amount.
seen In
Exactly.
Time?
Yeah, then Tom was
That's
like,
like,
Justin Timberlake.
Justin Timberlake.
Yeah,
Yeah,
was fire.
that's the shit vibe here.
I say
Oh my
more
God.
Time, bro.
You got 25 years to live.
Time is
Yeah.
important.
And
I ain't
everything
gonna
you do in
lie.
life comes out of that 25. Like that 25 years is your currency too. So if you buy a cup of coffee, that's 1 minute.
Yo, that movie
Yo,
is.
see, you can pass the
The
lemon?
concept of that movie was good, man. I
It-
fucking
it
love
was
that
crazy,
movie.
so-
It's literally living on borrowed time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's
When
that's
when
the full
time-
definition.
It was Justin Timberlake. I forgot the name of it.
In
I heard
Time,
of
In
that, but
Time,
no,
In Time,
yeah.
In Time.
I never
Never
seen
seen
that.
it? That shit
It's
was good.
it's
It's a
good.
good
I
movie.
heard about it.
Yes,
Oh,
that's
it's
it.
good.
Yeah, that shit's fire. Yeah.
And it's a little crazy
That's
because it's
why
like
that
in
movie
there
was
he eventually like does things like go out, party, all that shit. And
Yeah,
it's
they
like,
eventually like they robbed banks and shit.
Oh,
Yep.
no.
Yeah.
But chat is
So
saying
you
to
don't
have
get
more
25
time.
years to live.
Yeah, because better to have more
Yeah.
time.
Dude
Yeah,
had
more
millions,
time. That's what you get
millions.
more money
They
right
trying to
now.
rob it. Yo, it was on
It's
Tom.
millions.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
if you already have money,
Wait.
you don't need to get more
More time
money.
to
You
you.
Oh,
can
she
have
cook-
more
she
time.
cooking
I'm
right
gonna
now.
process
She
it
cooking.
right, yeah.
You
Right.
cooking?
You're cooking.
No, how
Everybody
more time?
in chat saying time too.
How
You gotta have more time.
So what time you gonna make more money?
money in your
And if you can get
More
back
money you can
borrowed
have.
time.
Yes,
have
Tom
more
is
time.
Tom
Right.
is valuable, son.
But
Every
we
second.
in 2026 with the mindset and everything that you already know now. You're able to get back 10, 15, 20
That's
years.
a lot.
That's a lot of time.
That's a lot.
I'll just even say 5 years for some people. You jump back 5 years.
That's a lot.
It's enough time for somebody to change their life
You know
by
how
that
much
fifth year.
bets you can make on sports?
Crazy.
Bitcoin, straight to Bitcoin.
Right.
You know what to invest in, everything.
And we're in 2026 now. 5 years ago was 2021. We just got out of COVID.
That shit went by
Yeah.
so fast too.
So
No, we were still in COVID.
we were still in it, but we just kind
We
of
could,
got
we could go outside and shit.
out, allowed to take face masks off. Let me say that.
Yeah.
We were allowed to go in places without face masks.
Yeah, that's true.
So now it's like, okay, I can do that, but I know this is bullshit. I was here in 2026. This is all bullshit. I'm just gonna walk around, fucking face masks, and do what I want to do.
Right. I wonder if people chose though. Probably more money.
Probably more money.
I bet people
No,
would.
Have more time. time.
I bet people would change.
Yeah, more money.
Those greedy bastards. You want to do more, or we good there?
More.
Okay, we're gonna go.
Live a life without fear, a life without pain.
Life without pain.
Life without
Yeah.
life without pain.
Yeah, because
Sometimes I feel.
Because people might come up and punch you and you won't even feel it.
Daredevil.
that pain. I am petrified of needles and shit.
Me too.
And I want to get their names on my
We come
body.
from the
and I'm
same
like,
parent.
Oh yeah, you got no tattoo.
I have
Having
zero
no fear
tattoos.
will have you making retarded decisions.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're gonna jump off that cliff here.
Why?
Having no fear makes you crocodile Dundee. Oh,
Yeah,
shit.
exactly. Hey, I'm not doing
Look
that.
at there. It's a tiger.
Let me go pet him.
I want to touch it. The fuck? You have no fear. You're fearless, bro. Get your ass off this gate. Get off the gate.
You're basically Crocodile Dundee, bro.
Yeah. I think it was wild.
Yeah, I'll take life without pain.
And I said pain.
Damn, pain one.
At least. Hey.
Would you rather have the ability?
Not y'all. Don't even answer.
Wait.
Okay, well.
I have the ability to read everyone's mind.
You know what? I would take the mind.
Well, we're going.
Wait.
I'll take the mind and paint the shit out of Blackjack.
Mine. Hell yeah.
Hey, yo.
I got a question.
Yes, let's skip that one.
Right.
I'll paint this shit.
Let's skip that one, child. We don't need that one.
I would go to every casino.
Go back to that one.
No, it's
We skip that one for a
I
reason.
got a question.
Okay, what's the question?
Can you control it?
Control what?
Like, does that, is it,
He's saying, can
do
you
you
control
have
the
to
mind?
see everyone like that?
Like, do you
Or
have
can
to
you
see everybody
control
naked, or
what
can
you
you
see?
control it?
Like the white lights was
No, it's like everybody.
There's no specific. It's just what it is.
There's no
There's
control.
people who
Right, so
are
everybody-
saying anything to you.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Gluttony with the raid.
Great, I appreciate you, Glut.
Yeah, is it gluttony?
Like I said, I'll take the
More
mind.
than
Go to
likely.
every casino.
More than likely it's gluttony. I couldn't barely see
You gotta
that.
start doing mad bets because I'm a win. You know what I'm saying? And
Yep.
Blackjack, I'm a win.
Yep, gluttony with the raid. We in this bitch. I'm
Yo,
above my guy Gluttony.
Be alone for the rest of your life or always be surrounded by annoying people.
Must be
Annoying people.
Be alone.
That's just
Because
family,
if you're alone, you
friends.
might go crazy. I'm going crazy.
What is your
Be surrounded because
Like, nobody around, right?
Nobody around. You don't got nothing.
But annoying people will stress you out,
Yeah,
too.
stress you out, yeah.
So, welcome in, Raiders. I am CJ the DJ. I am the co-host of the Game Lounge. Our guy, Mr. 200, is back here today because it's baby shower day. And, Mr. 200, before you got anything to say to the Raiders?
Welcome in, Raiders.
Welcome in. Okay, cool. So, yeah, we were just like the same. It is baby shower day, so me, the wife, and the kids are in the front today, and we are actually doing a baby shower because my boy will soon be here. So we appreciate y'all popping in at at a good time of the hour because we're having some good fun with Would You Rather. So let's just jump back into it. And so the question for that was: would you rather be alone for the rest of your life, or would you rather always be surrounded by annoying people?
By annoying people.
I think we always
says
around
gorgeous
annoying
babies.
people.
Yeah, that's regular life.
So just like
What's annoying?
Gorgeous babies.
Right, like,
under your skin.
I think it's
They
about
do
it, man.
everything that's
Gorgeous
annoying.
babies.
Yeah, like anything that kind of just bothers your,
Yeah.
All day,
Trying to
that
make
does
you
grind your gears.
Yeah,
Like,
Be alone for the rest of my life.
crack under pressure, bro. They try to make you.
It's like being at work. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
You're around your coworkers.
Because being alone is kind of crazy.
Wait, it said annoying people.
I kind of rather be alone.
You see you?
Yeah, give me that pain.
Crazy. Like, that's all. You read my mind. For a long period of time?
Oh, I got it.
I need some kind of reaction out of somebody.
right. Be alone.
Yeah, but they don't want to piss you off all the time.
yeah, but I don't want no Iron Legend in this shit, bro. I'm over here talking to mannequins and shit, not answering.
Yeah, that's crazy. Nah, that's too creepy.
Luis.
Be alone.
I'm gonna go piss myself.
What the kids say? I gotta see. What y'all say?
What would y'all rather say?
Be surrounded by a bunch of people.
Be attacked by a lion or 100 totally hysterical cats?
100 totally hysterical cats.
Get beat up
Because our cat is
Give me them
annoying.
cats.
He's not your house.
Give me them cats. We about to get it.
I say a lion. I ain't gonna finish me off one shot.
Read that
Shoot
with
my head
Master
off.
Master and Mrs. Mine. Hold on. Master
You're
and
gonna-
Being
Mrs.
alone
Mine
is lonely though, and
Honey
depressing
cats
at
gonna
times,
hurt
so I
so
might as
bad.
well have people around me, even if they're annoying.
They're gonna scratch you up so bad, bro.
That's true.
Very true, man.
Bro, you see how
I'll take the cats.
I'll take the cat.
I'm in so much pain.
Yo,
What do you think I'm
LJ is
No,
my
but-
next and I'll
Give me a
take the
one
cats
shot.
too.
Fuck it. All the pain go away.
They have a tendency to fuck you.
Yeah, drop
Right.
a bomb for LJ. Drop a bomb for Rico. Yeah.
And you alive, bro. Yeah, you still alive.
So let me say the cats.
I'm taking the cat.
It's gonna be safe as fuck.
I got a better chance for cats than this fucking line.
Right.
Wait a minute.
What? It's annoying.
Would you rather be fully dressed at a
Yo,
nudist
Galaxy
beach,
chose the lion.
naked at Venice Beach?
Hey, yo!
Okay.
Be fully dressed.
Kid show.
Naked.
Kid show,
Unable to say
goddammit.
no, unable to say yes, unable to say
Yes.
yes. Right.
Be unable
I'm
to
not
say
saying
no.
I'm not saying yes to
Yes,
everything.
man. There's a movie like that.
Be unable to say no.
Oh, Jim Carrey killed that.
Unable to say no.
Be unable to say no,
That's
but
dangerous.
be unable to say yes.
Be unable to say yes.
Yo, but that's both
Unable to
dangerous
say
though.
yes. It is
The
though.
baddest shorty walk up to you, you can't say yes.
Yeah.
Maybe.
You can say maybe.
It's still not yes though.
Maybe.
That's still not yes though.
You can
That's
say
not
okay
yes, bro.
though.
I'm saying you can
Yeah,
do
I'm gonna
it.
say yes.
Maybe.
What do you mean?
Unable to say no.
Maybe might have them curious.
I got one.
Maybe might have them curious.
I got one in the possible.
Yo, that's crazy.
Maybe might have them curious.
Yeah.
You play hard to get.
Possibly I can.
I was gonna say something.
But you can automatically say no, like nah.
I
fuck
was
no.
gonna
But
kiss in the
if
room.
you something that you really want to do, you like,
You could
what
spell
you
out.
think I should do?
What do you want to do?
What would you think I should do?
But wait, also you could, if you choose unable to say yes, you can spell out the word yes.
This is the
Like, why
last thing.
yes?
Last game, then we're leaving.
That's still saying yes.
Right.
Say
Right.
yes.
No, but it's not saying it. It's spelling it. That's different.
No, it's like saying the word spelling socks and talking about your Spanish. No. SOCKS is not Spanish.
It was something to not be able to say yes because like a
W kids.
Yeah, I can't say yes. I might not get it unless I
Can't say C.
Wait, so does
Can't
nine?
nod yes either.
They all no yes.
No.
No yes.
No, yes. You gotta say.
No. They said yes. What about yeah?
Shut up.
Yes, me.
Same shit.
Yes, me. Yeah, bro.
Same
Yes,
shit.
yes, yes.
Like, even though you can say it in different ways, you can't say nothing in the realms of the word yes. Yes, yeah, none of that.
This is say. Yes, backwards is say. Yes, backwards is say. This is say.
Wait.
If you're unable to say yes, you can write it.
Like if I go like this, I
Nope.
can see
You gotta hit it with the.
You gotta ask.
You gotta hit it with the same thing for Street Fighter.
You gotta ask the parents. We gotta ask the parents.
You can do that too.
My man Nutty Duddy said,
Hey, yo.
say yes.
I don't know.
That's
Hey,
the
yo.
man's name, bro.
Yo, you gotta say the whole name, bro.
Okay,
You
what
can't
you
just
gotta
say
say?
nothing.
Hey, yo.
Beauty said you can say sure.
You said it means
That means yes.
That's all I heard was it means not.
Well, no, because if you say, "Are you sure?" It's a different
That's a
concept.
question.
Right. That's a
You
different
can't answer
concept.
it. Sure is yes.
This is hard for the parents.
Sure, that means yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
True. That's
It does.
You can say O's.
So you can't say yes in no different way or in the context of way of yes. Master would say, I wouldn't want that ability to not say yes because I would miss out on lots of cool stuff and deserve a yes to like. What? That deserve a yes to like. Do you want to play this game? Could say yes.
What if
So
somebody
I
said, would you
understand.
like $1 billion?
Or
Yeah, that's
Say
messed
yes.
up.
did you
Oh
do
my
that? Did you do
God.
that crime? Yes, I did.
No,
Yeah,
no,
Joe.
if somebody would come to me with a suitcase, you want $1 million? Give it to her. Give it to her. I didn't say yes. Give it to her.
You can't do that either.
Yes, I can. I said give it to her.
You can't have somebody else say yes for you. Say
No, I didn't tell her to say yes. I just said give it to her.
It's the same thing. I can't do it. No.
No, it ain't.
No. There's no passing it on nobody else. Stop that. No. You can't pass it on somebody else. It's the same thing. Everybody else will be doing that. You can't do that.
I said give it to her.
No. No. You can't do that.
I hate you. I hate you.
What? If the coin choice goes towards yes, no.
Yo,
Can't do that either.
Nigga said it's tails. Yes, no.
She's gonna say yes. She's doing it for you.
But if,
No.
but wait,
No.
CJ can't say yes, and if he
I'm
says
not
no,
verbally
then
saying
it's not
So
saying
basically,
yes.
all I gotta do is walk around with somebody and say yes for me.
Yeah, that's true. That's cheating. That's cheating.
No, I just said give it to her.
It's
I
the
didn't-
That's
same
me
thing.
saying yes.
But you can say no.
She's not. Stop it.
All right, unable to say yes.
A lot of people are unable to say yes.
Yeah. Because you always not say no. Somebody goes,
Accidentally send a new something
Wait,
to his
wait,
parents.
but Guthrie got a point though.
Hear me out.
No, basically. Makes
I ain't
you
gonna lie,
safe.
the significant other parents in the year, baby.
yeah, make sure it's safe, but you don't be able to say for the wrong thing. Somebody pull up on you, yeah, you gonna drop those things?
Read that.
Be gentle.
Hey, yo.
Wow.
Accidentally said do something to your
I couldn't
parents.
show.
You're right. You're right.
This is turning into
My
business.
parents got to see my daughter.
Wait.
Whoa.
Not my mom.
Yo, would you ask?
My phone got
My phone got
hacked.
hacked. My phone got hacked. So either way, my phone got hacked.
Sorry,
This
Mrs.
is-
My
Johnson.
phone got hacked.
This is
Would you actually
This
come
is
over
awesome.
something to your parents?
New 5 gift from Koza.
You want to say, make a picture you to my mom? You want to send it to my dad?
Oh, appreciate you, Coach. A $5 gift from my guy, Coach. Drop a bomb for my guy, Coach. $5
What was
gift
the
from my
other
guy,
question?
Coach. Guys, if you want to give a gift just how Coach did, make sure you go to the pin tab and make sure you go inside of the link and then make sure you donate the baby. Whatever you can afford, I'm appreciative of all.
I'm sorry, but you're my dude's not
That's right.
Facts.
My dad gonna see you naked.
That's crazy.
Why you supposed to grab him up the next day? That's crazy.
I don't mind your mom.
Well, y'all women, so it's
Right,
like,
that's what I said. Like my dad.
yeah.
This one is not for
Yes, I said.
I'm not sending this
I'm gonna say
to my mom.
I didn't hear you.
I got good lighting.
I'm saying, I'm going crazy.
I know.
Nigga did some push-ups.
I would say you did.
He got the remote for comparison.
Hey, yo, Suki. What up back there?
I'll send it to my own parents. I can face them. I can't face her parents. So I'm talking about you. So
I don't gotta face your parents.
that pic the other day. Yeah, my bad. My bad.
Right. Like, so. But think about it, your parent already saw you naked before, so what the hell?
That's why I said they changed me, so it's like whatever.
You said my phone got hacked.
Right. You can say that too.
Never
Hold on.
viral
It
for
said, would
something
you rather go
embarrassing.
viral for something embarrassing, or would you rather never go viral at all?
Never go viral at all.
Wait a minute.
I don't want to go viral.
Y'all gotta think. What is something embarrassing? How embarrassing we talking about here?
There's a.
Oh, I can't
Oh
say.
wow.
Damn.
That's easy. That's an easy embarrassing.
What you say?
I'm gonna go never go
The
viral.
the light skin boy that was on
Scroll up real quick. Somebody had wrote a paragraph.
Let me see. Oh, that was great. Okay, that's helpful. That's a tricky one, but
New 5 gift from Hollywood
like even
Gold.
though they
Someone
both messed
said
up options, my
something.
parents would. Hold on.
Going viral will change your life.
Yo, you gotta go look.
Hollywood Gold, appreciate you, Hollywood. Drop a ball for my guy, Hollywood.
We love you.
So, Master said that's the tricky one, but like, even though they both messed up options, my parents would have already seen me naked at birth as a baby.
That don't count.
And well, maybe my significant other could have walked in on us, but I don't know, man. They both bad choices for me. But I go with my wife's parents that wouldn't be good. Then again, they let me marry her, so they had to expect someone in the new.
Right.
What? Don't you got your legs up, cocked out.
That's crazy.
You got one leg on the toe.
They said you asked you to.
New 10 gift from Emiko.
And Miko, appreciate you, Miko. Drop a bomb for Miko. Wait.
I got
Everyone quiet.
Two things. Remember, here's one and two. You got donations for Miko.
And Miko, yeah.
Appreciate you. Thank you
Drop a
so
bomb for
much.
Miko, so we halfway to the goal.
I just want to know how is Ashley and guys.
I'd rather never go viral at all with this one.
Never go viral. I'm good on that.
Yeah, I'd rather not.
Whatever.
I'll be alright. So see,
Yeah, most people, it's like, nah, I ain't doing that.
know how you die when you don't know how God.
No,
Yeah,
how
What kind of Final Destination shit?
Right.
Baby
Know
shower
how.
show.
Right. I'd rather be
I'm
Final
gonna go how I
Final
die.
Destination turns into
Yeah,
how
how
when
I
I
die.
die. Like,
When I die.
No, I would rather win.
no, I don't want to know when.
I'd
I'd
rather
rather
win.
know how.
No,
At least I got time now.
You don't know that. You could die tomorrow.
Yeah, but how you can take it?
You could die
You can
tomorrow.
avoid it, potentially.
How you
Exactly. I'll take the chance.
Yeah, right.
Potentially, you can avoid it. This is
Let's say you know when you die, they say tomorrow.
What are you gonna do about that? Stop tomorrow from coming?
Yeah, you can't. You can't.
This nigga stay up on there.
But you know how you die. Let's say you can hit by a car.
But yeah, if you know how it is, and that tomorrow you can be by tomorrow.
No, let's say how you die is you get hit by a car. Don't go your ass outside. You can't get hit by a car if you don't go outside.
That shit will fly through your window.
No, it won't. No, it won't.
You must have seen Final Destination like I said.
Ain't nobody calling. No one knows about this.
The moment
We on the third floor. We on the third floor. We on the third floor.
The moment Elon Musk decide that them cars gonna fly, you dead. That's it.
No, I want to know how.
Right. If you know how you die, if you know how you die, you don't know how when you're gonna die. If you know how you're gonna
But
die,
then also you gotta factor in this. Even though you're in the house, it never said what kind of car.
Bro, this shit happened in real life.
Here you go. You're always doing that. That's annoying. A toy car.
Yep. You go.
I'm a dollar for toy
Yep.
car.
You go walking, you slide right up that Hot Wheel and go right to the oven.
No.
And hit that head, your ass down.
just
No.
Drive by.
boom, oven, boom, microwave, boom, down the
I would
stairs.
Right. What you're arguing on a Final Destination. Exactly.
Downstairs has never been
And we go, excuse me, Galaxy, we know for sure that when you die, you got time.
Not if you die the next day.
Right. You still got time. You know your time.
No,
No,
no.
think ahead.
But you don't know
No,
what
you
you
died
died
from.
Think ahead. Die today. Think
Right.
about it.
Let's say you die tonight. At 12 o'clock you dead. That
Let's
makes
say
no
that.
sense.
Watch it. Let's say
Die at
how you die,
11:59.
right? You was on a plane from America to South Africa. I'm never going to South Africa.
Right.
Well, it would not be that detailed.
You don't know that. You don't know that. You don't know that.
It says how.
Right.
That's how I die.
You die on your way to South Africa.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not going to
If
South
they
Africa.
say you die in a plane crash, in a plane crash, I'm not flying.
I'm not flying.
But you still get hit by.
No, that's a crash.
If you drive your ass to Florida and you make your ass to Virginia, it's over. It's over. You on your way to Florida, like, you know what? I'm not gonna that 22 hours gonna be a breeze. Boom.
How about that?
What you had to say?
Hold on. Master said the exact day would be scary, but knowing it kind of scary because. Hold on, y'all. Hold on. Master said the exact day would be scary, but knowing it kind of scary, but at least I could prevent it. Like if it said a ladder falls on me and crushes me, I would just avoid all ladders. Right, but you can never go to a wrestling match either.
Oh, Jesus Christ. Shut up.
All right.
I watch it on TV.
But you gotta.
He trying to make it fit. He trying to make his point.
You got a closet door, and that's
That's too
it.
loud.
Four ladders in my house. What are you talking about?
That's too loud.
So that's a way to be right outside the
It's a funny.
If you know you die, you don't know when. You know, yes, you know when you die. You know how you die. You don't know the time or date. Think about it. No.
You don't know the time of day.
You don't know the time.
Yes.
You don't know the time of
Yes.
how you die, but
Yes.
you know the
Yeah,
time
and it has to be
of
specific.
when you die.
It
That's
has to
what you
be
mean.
the specific. It's just a car. As like a toy car or a big car. Think about it. And when you die,
New 20 gift from UK to JK2 Much love to Lil Bro.
Appreciate you. Thank you so much.
My guy. Who's that?
From UK to JK.
Ah, my guy Gluttony jumping bomb for my guy Gluttony.
From JA to UK.
Appreciate you, bro. Appreciate you. We are 70% there. We are 70% time of gold, chat. 70%. $100. $100 to go. 70% there.
Appreciate you.
Master, drop a bomb for Master.
Master, your streamers, well, you can just follow right back.
Yes, indeed.
Appreciate
Yes,
you.
indeed.
Matter of fact, see this go ahead.
Yeah, I'm gonna hit that because Master been chatting. Master
Yeah,
been
Master
chatting.
been chatting.
Hit
There
that
you go.
follow.
Appreciate you, Master.
Yes, so let me see. That's also said, heck, I already live life like I'm dying, so that's. I think that's my song.
I mean, lower.
I'm going with know how I
That,
die.
I'm gonna click y'all know how to die.
Yours don't make sense. You trying to make it make sense. It's crazy.
But a lot more people making sense on my side of the boat.
Give up coffee for a month or give up social media for a month.
Social media.
I'll give up both.
I give up coffee for life. I'll drink that shit no way.
But I've never had coffee.
I sip on coffee every day, but it's not that important.
You never had coffee?
Give up coffee.
What did you say?
You can't drink coffee. You don't even drink coffee. Shut up.
And do you see that because I cannot drink
I
coffee?
don't drink coffee no way because I can't. I'm lactose. Well, I'm lactose. I'm fully allergic to
But you
dairy.
can drink black coffee. That don't mean
No,
nothing.
fuck that. Black ass coffee tastes
You're
like
allergic to cheese.
Wait, no. Almond milk, oat
That's
milk.
allergic
Right.
to cheese.
What's the last two words you said with that? Milk, right?
It's not actual
No.
milk.
Yes, it is.
It's not. No,
Yes,
it's
it
not.
is.
No, it's
Why
not.
is it called milk? Why is it? There's coconut milk, but it's also coconut water. Why is it not called?
So what you want to be called almond juice?
Right.
Almond juice?
But he never told us about it.
So almond milk is not the same as almond water?
No.
Now he wanted to be called coconut straight.
Ah,
No,
is
it's
it?
not.
So that means I can't drink milk.
It's not actual milk, though.
It's not.
No,
You can drink almond milk.
Nope.
Not lactose.
no.
No, he don't want to die. He's not lactose. He can die.
Lactose, not
Yeah,
lactose.
he's
Lactose.
lactose. So he died.
I sip that shit, I'm dead on this floor right here. You guys can say it.
Look
No,
at you.
Drink almond milk.
no, I'm dead right here.
Yeah, he's done. He's done. And it's crazy because
Right
we're
here.
from the same mom.
I said
I'm lactose.
Man, my cereal was dry forever. My Cinnamon Toast Crunch had all its flavors when I was scooping that shit.
That's crazy. Everybody had too. Yeah.
That nigga had meatloaf for
You used to eat dry cereal.
that bad. Yo, that nigga ate meatloaf. It was like this.
Coffee said, coffee.
Koza
Koza
said,
said,
y'all
I
give
gave
up
up
coffee
coffee
for
for
money.
Be
Y'all ain't
allergic
get no
to
shit.
chocolate or
I would because I don't drink it.
I never had
What
it.
Be allergic to chocolate or be allergic to smartphones?
Be allergic to smartphone.
How do you be allergic to smartphones? I don't like chocolate.
This is one for them. Let me hear they actually. Would y'all rather be allergic to chocolate or be
Be allergic to smartphones.
You rather be allergic to smartphones? You can't give up chocolate.
That means
huh?
no YouTube.
That means
You can't have your tablet.
All right, you chose it.
well,
You can use it on a laptop or
on a
TV.
Steam,
Oh,
on
that's
TV.
true. You don't got a smartphone anyway. So.
There you
No.
go.
Yeah, that's what you said. Smartphone. I don't got one nowhere.
What about you?
Makes sense, huh?
Be allergic to smartphones. I can't live without chocolate. I cannot.
So like
What?
chocolate.
Think about it.
You should chocolate over your
Okay.
phone.
I do it for M&M.
They make chocolate with
This
this
cocoa butter and chocolate.
Cocoa butter.
Yeah, cocoa is the
Cocoa
same
is chocolate. They
ingredient
make
as
it from
chocolate.
cocoa beans. Makes chocolate.
Right.
The cocoa is. I'm glad he asked you something.
So that
Yeah,
means,
Koza said I
that
need
means we black and we can't put cocoa butter on our food.
Oh, that's damn.
So,
Koza said I need my phone for business. I don't make money on chocolate. That part. That part.
right.
I can do that though. I love chocolate.
I can
do
do
that.
I
that.
use my phone for a lot of stuff.
I don't like chocolate, so it's okay. She like chocolate.
I'm good on
I
that.
don't know.
I know.
like chocolate.
Give me a honey bun. I don't give a
Everything.
Look, mad people
vanilla.
said no chocolate.
Take a stand. Alright, chocolate is not good.
Would you rather take a stand against a powerful political leader and face the consequences?
Yes.
Or stay silent and
Stay silent
protect.
and protect yourself.
Stay silent, take your choice. This is just the law right now.
I'm gonna stay over here and be silent.
I'm gonna stay silent.
Yeah, I'm
Stay
gonna
away.
Ain't nobody gonna let Donald Trump.
Right, do
Why you yelling?
Ain't
You
nobody.
say it's loud in here, then you
Them
yell.
political leaders are deboed. I'm
That's too loud. That's too loud in
he said, I be quiet, but when he leaves, I be talking again.
Right.
He go bomb. He already bombed Ivan.
Reaper, whichever one you want, whichever political leader that you think would be a problem. That goes to say, real G's move in silence. The life lasagna, Buddy Duddy said it better.
Yeah, you did it. You will not wake up the next morning.
No.
Stay
I'm
silent.
staying silent.
Mind your business.
That 26% of dangerous ass people.
Safe one engage.
I'm talking animals.
Would you rather save one endangered species from extinction, or would you rather have the ability to talk to animals? Call me Dr. Doolittle.
Talk to animals.
I am being Diego Torres cousin.
Dr.
Animals.
Dr. Doolittle would be like a regular.
I want to see the dinosaur. I don't care.
I am being Diego Go. I'm talking to animals.
You gonna say go Diego go and not Dr. Doolittle?
Wait.
In a sense, you make a good point, but if
you crazy.
PK Dragon said if it is an endangered species and you are on the blue side, you can go talk to the endangered species to figure out what their problem
But
is.
you only choose one.
How that works.
Right, you only choose one.
That's not how that works.
Now you changing the rules. Right, you gotta choose one.
You're just choosing one, bro.
That's
At
it.
that point, you chose both.
Right.
You can't do that.
Right.
It's a multiple choice.
You had me there. You had me on your side, bro.
You tried to bullshit.
I'm saying you want to be that go Diego go. Fuck Dr. Doolittle.
That's what I'm saying. I want to see the dinosaurs.
Shut up.
Who the fuck is talking to Wait a minute, chat. This nigga broke
Broke Nation said.
This nigga Broke Nation said, fuck Dr. Doolittle. Go Diego go.
Historic animal.
Bro, brother.
Why?
I want to see the dinosaurs.
Why?
We're not bringing back no dinosaurs. Did you see Jurassic Park?
I don't care. I want to go see the dinosaurs.
Did you see Jurassic Park?
You would die this
Every time they brought back a dinosaur, they went wrong.
Hear me out.
We don't know.
Hear me out.
That's the point.
You be explaining something.
And Miko's on your side too, right here.
Don't know what
I'm talking animals.
What if a
Yeah,
dragon?
I'm saying if I talk to animals, I'm overrunning the city. There's wolves, foxes, I'm not gonna hold you if I can talk to animals. My first order of business is to have a Madagascar party up.
Oh yeah, King Julian? What?
Talk to your cat?
Come on,
My man, you can't be scratching the couches. You can't be spraying shit. You can't say you can understand me. Hell yeah! What you thought I was yelling at you before for?
Right. Talk to King Julian.
I got a million ass thing. He goddamn
I think you guys are.
He about to get put out, bro. He this close. I'm about to
Hey
scream a lot
guys,
of him out.
Just saving endangered.
Yeah. Right, endangered.
One back from extinction.
bro, the
Why would you
animals.
want to bring one of those
They're still
back?
here. Yeah, that's what I'm here.
At an extinct.
Right, right. That's why he was saying they talk to them. With the reason why they endangered, say, hey, bro, go slide on that.
You can't do that.
And I was
That's
saying,
cheating. That's freaking too.
I was gonna say,
Don't blow. Yeah.
And I can
No, I don't trust you.
Everybody wants to be
Red
Dr.
Panda gonna eat
Except
your dog.
him.
That's right. Don't do that.
Would you rather have access to classified government documents or the ability to influence global stock markets?
Alex,
Government documents.
Nigga said
So
you don't want
having
the
access
Epstein
to
files.
Epstein files. Yes.
Right. I don't want to see that.
I need to know what's in the files.
I don't want to see that.
I need to know what's
I'd
in
rather
the
not see
files.
You have access to the file. Now what?
Right.
yeah.
Right. You just fucked up your brain.
Now you know
But
everything.
everything.
Now find out. I know they're gonna
But now what?
Well, no.
What are you gonna do?
But
I
information
got
is
100,000
very
right
There you
good.
go. There you go.
I know what Epstein did.
There you go. Why would you want to see that freaky ass?
That's the evidence.
That's what he's saying. I'm talking about what he said.
Give me the stock shit. I can go get rich.
I was about to say you
What
can
the hell
blackmail.
Epstein ain't creepy shit.
You can blackmail.
They gonna
You can be like, yeah, I know everything.
blackmail who?
We
You know
all,
who?
Hold on, wait. You know what blue means? That means you can put
Money in your
$10
pocket.
on any stock you own and float that shit up.
Oh, never mind.
Yeah.
You
Never
can
mind.
make yourself rich off any garbage stock.
Yo.
Yeah.
Red is a risk.
You can put $5,000 on any stock. The look up
Ask
stock
for
that's a penny
chocolate
for a
cupcakes.
stock
Ask.
and float that shit to billions.
Oreo cookies.
exactly.
Overnight.
Pretty much.
You could be a billionaire
It
tomorrow.
can be a penny stock of Superman toilet paper and $10 on Superman toilet paper. Now he's flying over it. Yeah.
That'd be some shit this nigga got for no reason.
Yeah, this is him. This is his dream right now. That's why
And then I'm gonna get so rich, I'm gonna buy DC, and I'll owe
Now you also right.
Right.
There's only one more.
Automatically makes it too.
But watch this rule right? Even if nobody knows
She doesn't
that you
eat
got
grapes.
access to those files, right?
I eat the frosting.
I'm a broke ass nigga. I'm doing all that.
I'm a broke ass
Area
nigga.
51 got aliens.
Selling information is really good too. Man. You can make a lot of money.
Yeah, but now I'm selling it through the black market. Eventually, you're dead. I'm good. I'm
Eventually,
Eventually,
oh my God.
I've been moving what you talking
and now
about. bro.
somebody know that you know the info.
Yup.
Yo, wait.
Yup.
You dead. Niggas a broke ass nigga in the hood. It's crazy.
A lot more people on the stock market side too.
Yeah,
That's Elon Musk.
Would you rather always get away with lying or always know when someone is lying?
I'm not gonna know blue when someone kills somebody. I'm not gonna know blue because you will definitely hurt somebody. Nigga, I know you lying.
I'm out.
Give me blue. I'm gonna tell you why. Always get away with lying or put you in trouble. Mr. Rankin, do you know physics? Yes.
Yup.
Well, we need you to go teach that physics class right now.
Yup.
But you gotta get away with going in that physics
Yeah, but
class,
now I just
lying to these
Now I
assholes.
just taught a bunch of future physicians that don't know shit.
Oh, damn.
That's gonna affect the whole world.
You got paid.
No, it is. It's gonna affect the whole
When they
world.
go to do physician shit and blow the world up, all some crap that I said.
Yeah, but they gonna come to you and say, yo, this, what's going on? What happened? Sir, when I was in the class, I didn't tell him to do that. I didn't tell him to do that.
The effects of what they do to the environment and the world is already done.
That's crazy.
Give me the blue.
Me too.
Give me the blue.
Give me the
blue too.
I mean, nothing.
That's true though.
I'd be like, yo, that dude that you eat lunch with, you mess with him, nah. Burn.
Koza said, always get away with lying. Blue side going to get your feelings hurt.
No, it's not.
No.
No, it's not.
That's
No, it's not. I'll know who not to be around.
Right.
I'll know who not to be around.
Think about it. Everybody lies. So
That's cool.
Yeah.
I ain't gonna drink
sometimes a lie keeps shit
Ash, you
together.
got on blue shoes right now? Yes or no?
That's a small lie.
But that's exactly the point. You see,
Right,
small
right,
lies
man.
don't
A
matter.
lie is a lie. Right, a lie is a
I don't
lie.
care about that. I'm
I'm
already aware that everybody
you a
lies.
bitch.
Huh? Nope.
You lying.
That joke was dry. That joke was dry as hell. Somebody open door, listen more in.
Damn.
See, everybody pick blue.
You supposed to hear me say not on Sundays, but
Yeah, not on Sunday, MFA. We got kids here.
I have the power to be invisible or the power to read minds.
Invisible.
The power to be invisible.
Invisible. I don't want to be invisible. I don't want to be invisible.
Wait, one question.
You just told me I could be Danny Phantom.
Does being invisible mean a Facebook
read your mind. I
Yes.
don't even care to read your mind. Because now I have to manipulate time to come into mind.
Yes.
I could walk
What if you
anywhere.
go in a pedophile mind?
What would y'all be doing invisible though?
No.
What would y'all be doing to being invisible?
I could walk in any bank. They would not know who it is.
Exactly.
I think it's
You
also
have money. The money
attacking.
not invisible.
It's not true.
Why is this money
Being
fucking
invisible.
That's what I'm saying. Like,
No.
money's
But
not
the other
invisible.
way's going.
No.
The
It's
senses
not
too.
even that. The senses will still pick
Capri
you up.
Sun.
They
Being
just don't know it's
invisible
you.
don't mean that the taser will go through. It's not still a physical body.
You know what's
Right,
gonna
but
happen?
they wouldn't know.
Your ass will get locked in the safe. Now
Your
what?
cell's gonna be safe for the lock.
Well, then there also is a difference between being invisible and being able to phase through shit.
Exactly. It's not the same thing.
You can't face two stuff when
His
you're
ass will get locked in
That's
the
the
safe.
I'd rather be
That's the tangibility.
Alright, that's how it's attacking. Just look, do you know the amount of power I have
Even with the
about
bank, the
I can stop somebody's
ask
back
the right
head
questions to read their
so many
mind
times. You
and
don't
know
know
how
Why
to
would
get
you
into
want
the
to do
safe.
that?
because it's fun.
You
And
get
what
what
as
I'm
soon as you
saying?
do it, till you come back to.
But see, now you have to manipulate a better situation to get you to that.
Do you know how fast it will be winning?
Now, you just read them out, you're not like Professor X,
and
turn it into them and just like, fucking with their brain.
Ask the right questions, you still get the information.
Right. You'll get it.
You'll get it, but it's not a longer stretch.
Right.
Whatever.
You got a lot more shit instead of just trying to go
But it's
invisible and
safer.
trying to just break in.
It's safer though.
It is.
You can make money.
Go eliminate.
Let's see.
Oh, you can be the best trickster already.
Right.
What if you play blackjack?
K is double bomb for K is in the building. She said invisibility, you know how many people I can scare with ease?
You're gonna get shot.
That too. You
That's
can
some
get
hood
it.
nigga shit right there, bro.
Had to be in
Shot. It's crazy.
Reaper said, but reading minds means you completely read what a person is thinking. No, takes these backseats as long as you
know exactly
use
what's up.
invisibility and responsibility.
I do.
What if you read some disturbing shit?
That's
like,
okay.
Nah, I don't want that.
What if I meet a shorty and she's like, damn, I won't be asking her to come home right now?
What if we say, damn, that nigga, what if we say something bad?
Then I won't ask her to come home right now.
No, but what
What if she tell you, damn, I hope you.
Yeah, but some people change their mind, so it's like.
Right.
What if somebody says
What's wrong
something
with that?
bad about you and
Now I know not to
when
take her
they
home.
see you say something good about you?
Huh?
I mean, personally, I'd rather be invisible. Me personally.
It's a half and half on that one though. Close, really close.
Always be monitored online or in real
My
life?
social media is bad, so I'm going to jail.
We already have that.
In real life, they following me around.
I'm already always monitored online. Big Brother watches everything.
Right.
Even right now.
That's my real life. I'm good. Give me that one.
Right, don't follow me in real life.
That's the online.
Just one random nigga following you. Nigga, who you?
Right. No, wait, follow me, smart job. It's just.
Yeah, I'll take always online. Always be monitored online.
We already at that point.
This is where you
There's
go.
nothing to do online that they can't.
So you got
I guess
full
Now, in real life, I don't want you pulling up.
In real life,
Now,
you
they-
Actually, yeah,
do
you're
what?
right.
You take your kid to school, somebody watch it.
They got cameras anyway all over.
Big ass binoculars.
Yeah. You know your wife.
You know about
Somebody
whole
watch it.
routine, taking my kids to school? You know about whole routine in the morning, getting the
That's
ELT?
dangerous, bro. I mean, you don't know where your kids go to school, where your wife work. Nah, that's too much. That's too much.
You know what? I'm about to go make a U-turn to go back to Family Dollar. You already there before I get
Yeah,
there.
nah, that's
This
crazy.
nigga
Like,
about
nigga, how did
to
you
go
know
to
it's gonna make
Family
this U-turn? I kept going home.
Dollar. No, I knew you was going to do that. So
You do the every day at 3:30 p.m. What?
Right.
Then when you check your phone, like, what the
They say probably no.
Yeah, online. Yeah.
I'm not more people, yeah.
This is kind of happening now.
That's 25, y'all. That's 25.
That's it.
That was really good. That was really good. Clap it up, y'all. This was amazing baby shower for the Game Lounge chat.
Wrap it up.
I have to admit, I am very thrilled. I am very happy. I am very pleased that you guys popped in to the Game Lounge. But once again, I can't thank all of you guys enough for popping into the Game Lounge today on the baby shower for my boy. He's coming. He will be. Her due date is May 8th, but obviously 2 weeks before, 2 weeks after, that kind of thing. It can be. I have to say. Either way, it can happen. But people, put your bets in. But whatever day you think between April and May, put your bets in. Put your bets in. Put your bets in. All of you guys, thank you all for coming to the Game Lounge and hanging out with us.
Children came
Of
and
course,
popped out.
we always here, but you guys, we appreciate you guys
Children
hanging
came
out.
here.
Of course, the kids. I love the kids, and definitely have to show some love and bring the kids. Let you guys see the kids. GK, legendary,
appreciate y'all so
Trini.
much.
I appreciate this thick
Get
ass
the Crocs
box
again, get the Crocs
right
again.
here. I appreciate that thick ass
Show the
box.
Crocs again.
Yes,
Hit
show
the
the
Crocs.
Crocs.
Light them up. Light them up.
I like them.
I can't thank you guys enough, as well as for all of the donations you guys made at the link above. If you want to do it, you still can do it now. Before we sign up, and even after we sign up, I appreciate it all. We are 70% to our goal, which is still amazing to me. I appreciate it.
Link is still open.
Link is still open. Link is going to continue being open for the rest of the week. W Stream, of course, Gluttony, we appreciate you for the raid. So from JN to UK.
From JN to UK.
I appreciate you. I appreciate you.
HOC, baby.
Yes, indeed. Hollywood Gold, Koza, Kitty, Bloody Duddy, Reaper, everybody, Black Galaxy. I appreciate all of y'all for coming in and popping out every Sunday just to hang out for the game now, just kicking it with us 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Mr. 200, you are in the back today. How did you enjoy yourself back
I
there?
appreciated being here with y'all.
Right.
I appreciate being invited to the baby shower.
Right.
Yeah, but seriously, I appreciate all of y'all showing up and showing love to our queen, Mel Lady Monet.
Right.
And we're all excited for the future coming up. Jose is the third junior.
Right. So-
I just want to thank all y'all again for popping out and showing
DJ
love. Not for me, but for her and the family up front.
Yes.
Thank y'all. I appreciate y'all.
Yes. So being that this was all about you and little CJ Xavier Jr. III, what do you have to say?
I appreciate y'all. Had a good time. Thank you for the gifts. It was fun. The kids had a good time. I love y'all. Thank y'all so much.
Kids, you have something you want to say to chat before we close out?
Yes.
I may come back. If my father says I can.
We may come back.
Maybe. We'll work on another kid episode where we can get kid games going as well too. Cousin Ash, that's what you want to say to the people?
Congratulations to y'all.
You gotta pop the camera, man.
Yeah, congratulations to y'all, man. CJ,
Yes, sir.
Madeline Monet, Xavier Jr. the third. I'm gonna say great stream, y'all. I have fun.
My God, Jeremiah, it's been a minute since I've seen you.
Yo, Jerry, pull up to the front. Pull up to the front. Hey, Jerry, come on.
New 10 gift from Emiko.
We work with Jerry.
Emiko, I appreciate you, Emiko. Drop a bomb for Emiko. That was $10. $10.
I'm gonna say 10,000, Mr. Beast.
And Nico dropped 10,000. I'm a full out and say, Nico, God damn.
Like, goddamn.
Amigo, I'm Mr. Beast. Come on. Put my shit in there, yo.
I don't need 10. Give me one.
Legendary, of course, brother. Like I said, I appreciate you and Trinity. Please say something for the people.
I mean, you know we're going to show them no matter what, man. I was going to be.
New 20 gift from Jeff.
BK Jeff, and because of BK Jeff, we made it to our goal. Drop a bomb on my God, BK Jeff. W-Chat, you guys are amazing.
Thank you so
Chat,
much.
you are amazing. W-Chat.
Wait, announcement for next week. Remember to watch the Amazing Digital Circus because I have a game for it.
Uh-oh.
Yeah,
She gave us homework.
Episode 8 comes out on Friday.
We forgot about the homework. Goddamn.
I
We forgot about the homework.
Have you been watching, sir?
No,
She forced me to. I
He's
want to watch it.
He's caught up.
Yeah,
You got no choice.
He
got no choice.
He's not allowed to go anywhere. He ain't allowed to do anything else except for that.
She has to
Bro,
watch
put
it.
it on. Put it on, baby. Put it on.
As soon as she woke up, she
I don't know what
Right, thank you, Galaxy.
BK Dragon, as
Dragon,
always, brother. Is
Dragon.
brother. BK Dragon is what has been our photographer for all the Game Lounge episodes, of course, and as well as our personal photographer, our pregnancy photo shoot, which he actually has done and in the process of editing. So I appreciate you, brother. Thank you. Even coming here and working with us too.
Let's add if you guys need in the New York area, you're looking for a professional photographer.
Yes. Our guy BK Dragon, tap in with him on Instagram, the eyes of BKD.
He doesn't take those kind of photos.
Yes, on Instagram, he's the eyes of BKD. Make sure you tap in with that guy. Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed.
If you think you're thinking those type of photos,
Mrs. Joe.
New 20 gift from Ash.
Oh,
Congrats.
we still going. We got 20. Oh, my God, Ash. Oh, yeah. Let's go. Yeah, he was like, yeah, let me just sit down. Let me hype him up real quick. Yeah, you know what I'm saying? Mrs. Bro, this is what, number 3, number 4 time you been here?
Yeah.
Appreciate you coming.
But remember to watch the show.
Okay,
The homework, she
breaking the show again.
this
off the homework.
She teacher like come on, like she was telling the teacher what to do. She was like, yeah, I'm gonna do this math, but make sure you do that homework. I said,
Episode 8 comes out on Friday, so y'all better be caught up.
She produced the show?
No, but
They need to hire you.
yes, for sure.
Stressed out.
Yes,
Show.
yes.
What's the name of the show again?
My man is stressed out.
Look, you know, we're holding the Bible thing over. It's like, I can't sit through this. So
What's the name of the show again?
it's called The Amazing Digital Circus. It's on YouTube and Netflix.
There
there you go. Drop the ball. Drop the ball for that.
It's her show.
It's
It's her show, guys. It's her show.
Stop eating your brain. You're right back.
Uncle Bro Nation.
Bro.
First nephew.
Yes,
on my mother's
indeed.
side, actually.
Yes, indeed.
I appreciate y'all giving me that.
We appreciate. We appreciate you. We appreciate you. Now, when he's out, I'm just gonna let him run it. Go in and
Nothing on my shit. Hold on, wait, hold on. She said, Galaxy said, Mrs. Brooke, make a punishment for those who don't do the homework.
Oh,
Galaxy, what are you doing to us?
So we on bumpers on her.
Yeah, we did. Yeah.
Too much. Kitty time her on bumpers.
yeah.
Oh, no, I've seen this shit before.
It's a good show.
She said it's called CJ the Digital Circus Junior the Third. She's some weird thing with this character. I'm gonna do my last thing, and I'm gonna let you do your thing. Oh, you okay? You good on purpose? Good.
That's regular.
Right. That's regular. Like I always say, this is not just a podcast. It's family. This is
Community.
it's family. It's community. I had a little too much, right?
That's a political statement.
Yeah, it's a political statement.
Don't pop
Right.
that one.
This is not just a podcast. This is family. This is community, and we can't do this every Sunday without you guys. So we appreciate y'all every single Sunday. Next Sunday, we want y'all to come and pop out next Sunday to come kick it with us as usual, 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Mr. 200, will you do your thing and take us out?
Yes, sir. Appreciate, like I said, I appreciate everybody for popping in. Today was all about CJ the DJ, Melanated Monet, and the blessing that we're getting in the future. And my man already got his props ready.
Yes.
Make sure you put him in sports.
He coming stepping.
Make sure you put him in sports.
You know what,
Come
bro?
on, Ronnie.
So, before we sign out, everybody, at the end, put your twos up.
Yep.
For that.
Right.
Y'all already know what time it is. It's your boy, Golden Crush 200, a.k.a. Mr. 200.